It was 2 o'clock in the morning in Seattle. Carl was standing outside in his shorts and slippers with his cat in his arms. There was only 1 minute left until the end of the world. The fluffy cat in the boy's arms fidgeted and purred restlessly. The intelligent animal sensed that something was about to happen. No matter how hard Carl tried to hold on to his furry pet, she bit his hand and broke free. And suddenly something incredible happened. Everything before the guy's eyes swam and became covered in a scarlet haze. The house in which he lived fell apart into pieces. When Carl could see clearly again, there was no trace of the city left. He stood among ruins, lost in the snowy desert. The cat was back in the boy's arms and clung to him in fear. Carl looked around in confusion and tried to understand what had happened. Suddenly, a voice came from nowhere. Someone was addressing the surviving people of planet Earth. The voice asked the surviving people to pay attention to the information. Carl swayed, and the slipper flew off his foot. He cursed. The frightened cat climbed onto the owner's head, fluffed up and hissed at the voice. 1 minute passed after the end of the world. Carl, with a cat on his shoulders, jumped after his slipper, asking what the hell was going on. He had already bent down to pick up his slipper when something round, splashing blood, rolled right at his feet. The voice reported that, according to syndicate rules, since the humans had not filed a formal appeal within 50 years of first contact, their planet had been successfully reclaimed. Carl looked at the round object under his feet and with horror he recognized it as Mrs. Parsons' bloody head. There were 6 minutes left until the end of the world. Carl, lounging in a chair, was playing a computer game. The cat was sitting on his lap. Something was bothering her, and she jumped off the chair. Moving her soft paws, she scurried around the guy's apartment. A happy couple was smiling at the apartment owner from the wall. Carl, his girlfriend Bee, and, of course, the ubiquitous cat. The fluffy sloth climbed into her cat town with numerous burrows and beds. Numerous photographs of Carl hung on the wall, including those from the army, and trophies reminded him of his sporting achievements. The cat rubbed itself against the boxes in which the guy had put Bee's things after his recent fight with his girlfriend. Pausing the game, Carl walked towards the open window where he usually smoked, a cigarette in his mouth. The cat rubbed itself affectionately against its owner and began to purr softly. The boy, blowing out a stream of smoke, looked at the unusually large snow. Having finished his cigarette, he was about to return to the game when the cat suddenly jumped from the windowsill onto a tree branch. Carl shouted to the cat to come home immediately, otherwise she would get lost. There were only 5 minutes left until the end of the world. The cat pretended not to hear her owner, and the guy got angry and called the wayward traveler a little brat. Trying to calm down, he told himself that in the end it wasn't his cat, but his ex-girlfriend's, so let her save it. Besides, the window was open, and the cat could easily return back to the apartment. But she didn't even think of returning, continuing to sit on the tree. Looking at the cat again, Carl said that it was not his problem. He was not obliged to go and get this little brat out of the tree. As if in response to the boy's words, the cat raised its head and screamed incredibly loudly. The whole house probably heard its screams. The guy was incredibly angry. Not only did he feed and clean up after his beloved Bee, but he also had to run after her down the street. He quickly pulled on his shirt and ran to the door, grumbling under his breath that he should have left that pest outside to freeze. The hallway was filled with boxes of Bee's things. Carl cursed. Where were the shoes? His gaze fell on the house slippers. There were 4 minutes left until the end of the world. The guy, cursing like crazy, ran out into the street after the fucking fluffy donut. The tree on which the cat was sitting grew behind the fence. Carl shouted menacingly at Donut to come down quickly and stop screaming. The window of the neighboring apartment opened, and sleepy neighbor Mrs. Parsons, looking out into the street, asked what all the noise was about in the middle of the night. 1 minute before the end of the world, the cat obediently jumped into the arms of its owner, and the neighbor asked Carl what he was making all this noise about. With half a minute left until the end of the world, the boy, petting the cat, apologized to Mrs. Parsons, explaining that it was Bee's cat that had run away. The neighbor nodded sympathetically, saying, "Thank God," that Carl had finally broken up with that slut Beatrice. But before she could finish speaking, everything around began to roar and rumble. It was as if the residential building had been wiped off the face of the earth along with its residents. Somewhere on the horizon, an incredibly bright flash appeared. In the middle of the night, it became as bright as day. But what was this strange light? The guy with Donut in his arms stood among the collapsing houses and couldn't move. He didn't understand that maybe a war had begun. No one bombed the city, but the earth rumbled and buildings collapsed one after another, raising clouds of dust and scattering stones around. Carl, spellbound, watched as his hometown, where he was born and raised, made friends, worked and loved, was destroyed. Bright light waves of unknown nature spread across the entire planet Earth, destroying everything in their path. The boy clenched his teeth and squinted, trying to protect himself from the bright light that appeared out of nowhere in the middle of his daughter. When the flash disappeared and the light became a little softer, the roar stopped. Carl looked around and was stunned. It was worse than in the war. There was not a single house left around. The densely populated city had disappeared, as if it had never been there, and all around was a continuous field. The guy looked around silently. Suddenly he thought that maybe this was a dream. He would wake up in his bed now and everything would be as always. But, bending down to pick up the slipper, he saw the bloody head of his neighbor, Mrs. Parsons, horror frozen in her dead eyes. He looked in confusion at the head of the woman he had been talking to just a few minutes ago, and now she was dead. Everyone who was in their house just disappeared. Nothing was left of the city. A whole million people who lived in Seattle disappeared. An electronic voice announced that all internal layers of your world have been destroyed. Resources are being extracted to obtain the requested elements. Carl winced. These crazy words gave him a headache. How could all this nonsense be reality? He heard that under the law on the reclamation of extracted materials, the surviving people have a chance to get back some of the resources. These words interested the guy. The appointed regent, the Borant Corporation, chose the option of an 18-level world dungeon. Hastily taking the slipper, Carl asked in surprise what kind of world dungeon this was, like in Dungeons and Dragons or something. It turned out that the Borant Corporation has all the rights to broadcast, use and manage the world dungeon. Upon successful completion of the 18th level, the regency over this planet will pass to the winner. Carl found himself at the entrance to the dungeon. Something was stopping him from taking the next step. No one knew what awaited them there. He looked down thoughtfully. Everyone he knew was dead. And did he really want to go down there? To oversee the creation of the dungeon, the Syndicate created and sent to Earth an AI, which was broadcasting at the moment. But if Carl doesn't go underground, he will freeze to death. He and Donut have already felt how cold it is outside. Besides, judging by the announcement, the entrance to the first level will only be open for an hour. The guy with a cat on his shoulder headed down the stairs. The AI strongly recommended that the World Dungeon Explorers find a beginner's guild and seek their help. Carl and Donut found themselves on the first floor, with only 5 days left before the destruction of this level. If anyone has a complaint, it must be sent in writing to the nearest Syndicate office. Now they are all part of it. The guy found himself in front of a tall carved door, and an alien artificial intelligence greeted the first researcher. The AI recommended memorizing the image of the Quatin, the dominant species of the Borant system and the owners of the Borant Corporation. Then there will be a test. Carl winced as he looked at the images provided. The idea of a test must be a joke. They weren't at school. Just when the guy thought it was a joke, a red cross lit up in the upper right corner, as if Carl was mentally controlling the screen. Soon the screen disappeared. The guy was surprised. The message closed. As soon as he thought about it, it means those who destroyed his city are sitting in his head. Carl frowned. But there was nothing to do. He had to explore this damn world dungeon. The guy opened the heavy doors and went inside. They found themselves in a long, tiled corridor with a huge number of arches on both sides, and torches illuminating the way. Suddenly, Carl's furry companion bit him painfully on the arm, and the boy screamed in surprise and pain. The cat broke free from its owner's arms and ran down the corridor with a speed unexpected for its size, making strange zigzags. Carl, cursing, ran after the fucking nimble Donut again. This incredibly harmful cat was running away from him again. And then he heard the doors slam behind him, which meant there was no turning back for him and Donut, only forward. Suddenly the cat stopped near one of the arches. Something unusual was glowing in the opening, which was not in the other arches. Donut clearly wanted to draw the owner's attention to this arch. The guy stopped and looked closely at the bluish glow. At the top of one of the arches, strange signs glowed with blue neon light. The cat looked at them expressively. Carl stood near the arch and tried to understand what Donut wanted to say. Why out of the many passages in the dungeon she chose this one? A screen appeared in front of the guy. The system greeted the researcher. But this screen looked different from the previous ones. As he closed the system's welcome screen, Carl thought with a grin that this all reminded him of the host of a popular game show. And then he looked at his furry companion. She was acting strangely. Carl cursed to himself. She also sees the text. Indeed, Princess Donut also became an explorer of the world's dungeon, receiving a number, level, and cat race. 2 Seattle explorers, a man and a cat, began their journey to conquer the world's underground. Entering the arch, the researchers again found themselves in a corridor lit by torches. But this time the glow was different. Carl looked around. The system informed Carl of his number and level. He could always look at more detailed information about himself in the menu. Messages started pouring in that the guy got his first crazy Catman achievement for entering a dungeon with a cat. Carl was furious. He is not a cat person. But for his first achievement he received a bronze pet chest as a reward. Since Carl was the first explorer to enter the dungeon with a cat, he earned the Pioneer Cat Person achievement. As an experienced player, Carl knew very well how important it was to read all the messages at the beginning, so he tried not to miss anything. He was incredibly angry about his cat person status, but for some reason he couldn't close the screen. Perhaps because Donut was also reading the information. The World Dungeon system offered Carl the chance to see the prize he had just received, the legendary pet chest. The guy decided to call up the menu with characteristics, but he continued to receive messages. He was one of the first to enter the dungeon. For being the first of 5,000 surviving people to enter the dungeon, Carl received a silver adventurer's chest. Another achievement he earned was empty pockets for not taking any supplies with him. The reward was a bronze adventurer's chest. The system was surprised why Carl entered the world dungeon without pants. This also turned out to be an achievement. The angry guy shouted that it was enough to make fun of him, but the system gave him a golden chest of clothes for his achievement. Having earned another achievement, hand-to-hand combat, Carl approached the sign that said Beginner's Guild. It looked like he belonged there. For hand-to-hand combat, Carl received a bronze chest of weapons and a silver adventurer's chest. The system was surprised why the guy entered the dungeon without a human companion, since it was safer together. There was no reward for achieving the loner achievement, but the system suddenly reported that Carl was dead. The guy's face lengthened. He had no intention of becoming a corpse in this strange dungeon. Clenching his fists and picking up Donut, Carl walked with a determined step towards the arrow to the Guild of Newbie Explorers. The system cheerfully announced that the guy was dead because he had fallen into an obvious trap. Well, if heaven exists, maybe they'll let him in. A very bright light hit Carl's eyes, which should have blinded him. The guy closed his eyes and turned away. A message came that Carl was about to meet his creator, and a creepy roller with spikes, controlled by goblins, was heading towards him. The guy swore when he saw the goblins. It turned out that this device was called a goblin killdozer. The little monsters laughed, their device designed to mow down and chop up naive dungeon explorers. Hugging Donut tighter to himself, Carl ran away from the terrible killer dozer as fast as he could. The small, green, cunning goblins chased the man, hooting and hollering. They lack strength, but they make up for it with pure malice. Having lost both his slippers, Carl ran on his bare feet away from his evil pursuers, but they did not leave him alone, and Donut was to blame. The goblin engineer, a particularly evil incel in the goblin world, having sensed the female, stubbornly sought to catch up with and kill her. Turning into one of the back streets, the guy asked in confusion if there really were damn goblins here and where they came from. What the hell do aliens look like goblins for? Is this some kind of joke on the inhabitants of planet Earth? The guy was weaving through the corridors, trying to escape the small, harmful monsters that were chasing him and Donut. In one of the corridors, Carl saw a modest door with a sign that the Beginner's Guild was located here, which seemed to be true. This door did not look flashy, but it looked massive and reliable, without any light indicators. Carl started pounding his fists on the door, shouting for someone to open it for them. Donut also scratched at the door and meowed loudly. At this time, a goblin killdozer with monsters on board drove into the corridor following Carl and Donut. The goblin engineer who controlled this hellish device snapped his teeth angrily. They had finally found the escaped researchers. Two goblins, armed with clubs, jumped off the apparatus and headed towards the nimble dungeon explorers. At this time, the guild door opened slightly, and a hoarse voice asked with displeasure what he needed. His head was splitting terribly. A large, fluffy ear, similar to Mickey Mouse, appeared in the doorway. It, like a huge locator, was spinning back and forth. Then the researchers saw a furry, whiskered face with a pink nose that was diligently inhaling air. Carl asked, "This is a beginner's guild. Why doesn't he let them in?" The mouse scratched behind his ear and asked in bewilderment, "Is he a researcher or something?" The mouse turned his head and cursed. He didn't even know that the dungeon had opened again, and the goblins were approaching. The little rascals bared their sharp teeth and chuckled, anticipating an easy victory over the novice researchers. Mouse said they used to have a newsletter where they would tell you about everything that was going on, but they shut it down due to lack of budget. After apologizing, the mouse said that Carl was too slow, and that the explorers couldn't be allowed inside while the enemies were too close. "These are the rules of the world dungeon," Carl flared up. "He is the one who is slow." At this time, one of the goblins who had run up attacked the guy, and a stick with a pineapple on the end whistled right past his head. Having dodged the evil dwarf, the researcher asked the mouse to at least tell him how to open the loot boxes that had dropped on him. He replied that the guy had to undergo training, Carl barked. But how could he undergo it if the mouse wouldn't open the door for him? The mouse calmly replied from behind the door that everything that was happening to the guy and his cat was not his problem. Carl cursed. It seemed he had nowhere to turn for help and would have to get out of this mess on his own. The boy swung his fist and hit the puny goblin, causing the monster's blood to splatter. A health bar appeared above the wounded goblin's head. Carl swore in surprise. But this is really just like in the games. The goblin engineer ran up and squealed indignantly when he saw his wounded brother lying unconscious. Not wanting to mess with a strong man, the goblin decided to make a run for it, and rushed towards the killdozer with surprising speed. Having jumped onto the apparatus, the goblin shook his fist at the man and shouted something angrily. The engineer pulled the levers, and the machine began to hum. Carl looked at the wounded enemy lying on the floor. The mouse's words popped into his head. The rules are simple. If there are living monsters near the entrance to the guild, the door will remain closed. So, in order to enter, there must be no living enemies left nearby. Carl raised his muscular leg to finish off the wounded monster. He kicked the monster with all his might, and the scarlet blood of the small, green, evil goblin spilled across the corridor. Turning to the mouse, Carl, covered in blood, calmly said, "There are no more living monsters nearby." System messages poured in. The mouse indignantly exclaimed for the boy to take his animal back. The cat deftly slipped inside. Mouse said he would be in big trouble if he was discovered to have let the researcher inside. But Donut didn't listen to anyone. Slipping into the guild room, she pressed something. The chain on the door swung and fell. At that moment, a goblin death harvester was roaring down the narrow corridor. The monsters decided to avenge their murdered comrade. Carl instantly jumped inside the room and slammed the door behind him. Another second, and the killdozer would have turned him into mincemeat. The owner of the room was standing on the carpet near the fireplace and snoring discontentedly. These researchers burst in on him without permission. The guy asked if there were any other exits besides this door, and the mouse frowned and replied that there were no others. Opening the door slightly, Carl carefully looked out to see if these goblins would really be waiting for him near the door. The mouse replied that one would definitely keep watch, and the other would run for help, and in half an hour their entire huge family would be here. The guy cursed. It was absolutely impossible to allow a crowd of these vile creatures to gather here, which meant none of them should leave. Frowning, Carl told Donut to stay there for now. The cat climbed onto the top shelf and listened attentively to her owner. Suddenly, the cat approached a pot on a shelf and knocked it onto the floor with its paw. The mouse exclaimed in horror. The pot of white powder fell to the floor with a crash and shattered into many small pieces. The mouse grabbed his head, while Carl quietly opened the guild door and crept outside unnoticed. The guy understood that he couldn't remain idle. As long as these little creatures were confident in their strength, he would try to deal with them. Now they are both here, which means we need to deal with them as quickly as possible. Carl sneaked up and quietly climbed onto the goblin's apparatus. The guy, having climbed onto the killdozer, quickly grabbed one of the monsters sitting on the roof of the device by the neck. Carl threw the green enemy against the wall of the corridor with all his might, and the goblin squealed helplessly. Hitting the wall hard, the light goblin bounced off it like a ball and flew straight into the sharp blades of the killdozer. The guy frowned. What the hell happened? Did he miscalculate the force of the blow? He only wanted to stun this bastard. The puny monster hung on the spikes of the hellish apparatus, which pierced him through and through, and streams of blood flooded everything around. Carl spat in disgust. How disgusting. Pieces of goblin got right into the guy's mouth. He carefully peered into the cabin of the goblin killdozer. There remained a goblin engineer, the strongest and most evil one in this team. Hanging on the cabin, the guy kicked the monster, intending to knock out the enemy. The goblin growled angrily. Judging by the health bar, the wound did not cause him much damage. Carl realized that this one was stronger than the others. The guy clenched his fists and dealt the monster several blows to its green face, knocking out sharp teeth and causing goblin blood to splatter. The metal ladle that served as a kind of helmet for the monster flew off the goblin engineer's head. Carl hit the enemy several times with a metal ladle, because he didn't have any other weapon yet. The blows he received sent the goblin engineer flying out of the killdozer's cabin and landing on the flagstone floor. The monster sat down on the floor and clutched his bruised head. His health had decreased, but not too much. Carl angrily threw the metal ladle he used to wear on his bald head at the little bastard. Having received the blow, the goblin fell. The guy realized that his kicks and blows did very little damage. Something else was needed. Carl frowned. Damn you all. He didn't like killing these puny green creatures at all. But there was nothing to be done. The engineer had to be killed. And the guy, taking aim, jumped from the apparatus straight onto the lying goblin. Under the weight of the jumping researcher, the goblin's body turned into a bloody puddle, drenching everything around with streams of blood. Looking at the result, Carl felt a little nauseous. He wanted to avoid throwing up on the flattened goblin corpse. Suddenly, Carl heard the goblin's device hum and shake. Something was clearly happening to it. The guy frowned. What the hell? An information message appeared that the steam engine of the Goblin Killdozer was damaged, and spare parts were flying out of the device. The guy realized that this thing was about to explode. Cursing, he ran as fast as he could back to the beginner's guild room. Slamming the door behind him, Carl, covered in goblin blood, screamed at the top of his lungs for everyone to lie down on the floor. Shielding Donut with his body, he told the cat to be careful. At that moment, a deafening explosion was heard in the corridor. The heavy door to the newbie guild sagged slightly, but withstood the blast wave, letting through only a few bright beams. The mouse turned to the door and looked at it carefully. It was clear that everything in the corridor had been smashed to pieces. Carl, hugging the frightened cat, also raised his head and turned to the door. They would definitely have died in the corridor. Turning to the guy, the mouse menacingly asked what the hell this bastard had done here, and even climbed into his place with the beast. In front of Carl was Mordecai, a rat hooligan, the head of the newbie guild, a non-combat NPC of level 50. Approaching the guy, Mordecai leaned towards him, his eyes flashing angrily. Donut hissed threateningly at the head of the guild. Sighing, Carl asked what the hell was going on here. What kind of dungeon was this? The cat, supporting her owner, growled. Did all the people really die? How does it all work? And who is Mordecai anyway? Why is he here and what is going on? The head of the guild waved his hand, trying to calm the boy down. He understood perfectly well that he was confused and did not understand anything. Mordecai was also once a dungeon explorer like Carl. He went down to the 11th floor. The catch is that there is an exit on the 10th floor, offered by Quatin from the Borant Corporation. But the deeper you go, the better the rewards. Mordecai made a deal on the 11th floor and is stuck here as an instructor for newbies until he fulfills his contract. Carl asked, so Mordecai is an alien? They are all here from another world? Then how does the dungeon know about incels and other things? The guy frowned angrily. He still couldn't understand what the hell was going on here. Mordecai shook his head. This was the 7th or 8th world inhabited by people, and every time it was the same. The guild leader sadly lowered his head and sighed. People always want an answer to the question why. The mouse asked the boy if he couldn't just accept the circumstances that had happened and move on. Carl's eyes widened in surprise. Could this really be far from the first world inhabited by people? But how is this possible? Mordecai realized that he had shocked the newcomer with unnecessary information, and waved his clawed hand in a conciliatory manner, and moved a chair closer. The mouse invited the guy to sit down too. Now he would briefly explain to him what was happening here, where and why he had ended up. The first thing Carl needs to understand is that his world is ending. Mordecai knows it sucks, but it's true. Once upon a time in his world, Mordecai was a sky-winged man, and he sighed as he picked up an old photograph in a massive round frame. He showed the photo to the guy, saying that he looked something like this, only more handsome. On the 3rd floor, he changed his appearance. The syndicate populates the planet with different species, and then, after a while, returns when civilization begins to emerge. This meeting with a functioning government is considered the first contact, and the countdown begins from this moment. Earthlings have 50 years to claim the land, otherwise legal mining begins. The Borant Corporation is buying up mineral rights on the planet. They have bought a huge number of worlds, and now it's Earth's turn. Carl remembered. The voice said something about resource extraction. The mouse grinned. The amount of resources they extracted here could fit into one transport. It's about 100,000th of everything on the planet. The guy was amazed. And for this, they killed all the people on Earth. The head of the newbie guild shook his head. That's not true. In fact, the syndicate needs the planet's inhabitants. Now, this entire planet is dotted with passages into the world's underground, and a huge number of people have already entered them. By entering these passages, people become new participants in a bloody and exciting adventure show. It's the most popular show in the entire universe, watched by billions, and astronomical amounts of money are involved. With the capture of another planet, a new season of this super popular show begins, in which newcomers fight for their lives. Residents of many worlds are glued to their screens, placing bets, arguing, discussing what is happening, and writing comments. And so the new season of the show, called The World of Explorers of the World Underground, Planet Earth, has begun. The guy was stunned, so this was all a show or something. And these goblins couldn't do him any harm. Mordecai objected. No, the guy could die. What fun would there be if the participants were not in any danger? The guildmaster's eyes flashed, and he reminded them that the death of the show's participants was the ultimate entertainment. It has always been this way, and it always will be this way. Doesn't history confirm this? In all civilizations, living beings loved mortal combat. Okay, it wasn't Mordecai's job to explain everything. He suggested they start teaching him how to explore the dungeon. The mouse clicked with the boys, and a screen appeared in front of the guy, giving the participant access to the researcher's menu. Donut waved her paw. Apparently her personal explorer menu had opened in front of her too. Mordecai explained to Carl that this was his display where he could find all the information he needed. Now the instructor advised the newbie to enlarge his minimap, where he saw himself, Donut, and the Guildmaster. You can also view your menu, where the researcher can see their characteristics and system notifications. Carl looked at his stats: Strength 6, Intelligence 3, Constitution 5, Dexterity 5, Charisma 4. The guy indignantly asked the Guildmaster why his intelligence was so low, but Mordecai just waved his hand in response. Intelligence is responsible for the power of spells. For an ordinary person, all characteristics range from 3 to 5, and his strength is 6, which is very good. The next screen is the rating. This is the most important menu in the game. Carl's life will depend on these numbers. The guy opened the rating menu. Now all the values there were equal to 0. Mordecai, seeing Carl's sour face, calmed him down. Spectators cannot access the first floor, but after hunting season begins, the best loot can be obtained from sponsors. If a lot of people look at the guy, then many companies will want to become his sponsors. They will add their advertising to Carl's stream, so the more sponsors he has, the more loot he gets. Borant Corporation will be airing a short highlight reel in about 30 hours. Getting into this cut is tantamount to winning the lottery. In this case, you will literally drown in views. So Carl needs to stand out to be noticed among the many other participants. He can't just kill someone, turn around and leave. No. He has to kill stylishly, brightly, excitingly. During his research, Mordecai managed to accumulate almost 30 million subscribers and 4 sponsors, which is how he survived. Speaking of loot, the newbie Guildmaster has activated Carl's inventory system, and he can see everything he's dropped. This season, Borant decided to change the system a little. The guy can hold anything he can lift for 4 seconds. Although any living thing he tries to stuff in there will die, so it's definitely not possible to hide a cat there. Suddenly, Mordecai hit himself on the head and cursed loudly. He discovered one very important thing on the Seeker. Carl, who didn't understand anything, covered Donut with his hands and looked at the Guildmaster in confusion, asking what was going on. Mordecai exclaimed, "Carl has a legendary pet box. There could be some very interesting items in there." The Guildmaster asked the guy why he didn't say anything about it right away. Carl grimaced slightly. He hadn't even realized that it was important. The guy had a desire to hit Mordecai, but he was already level 50, and Carl had recently almost died from a level 3 goblin. The mouse shook his head. Legendary boxing, and almost immediately as soon as he entered the dungeon. Some people are so lucky. By the way, the guy can open boxes either in safe rooms or in guild halls, so they can be opened now. For killing an armed mob with his bare hands, Carl received experience and a bronze weapon box. For killing a mob that was higher than his level, he received a bronze adventurer's box and a silver goblin's box. For killing an enemy with his bare feet, Carl received a golden shoebox. The system immediately measured the size of his foot. Carl was overcome with fear from all this. He suddenly saw that his level had increased and 3 points had been added to his characteristics. All the boxes he had received were shining in front of the guy. Mordecai said that as soon as he opened one, all the others would open too. The Guildmaster smiled. So the guy doesn't have to choose which of the 10 boxes to open first. He can open anyone. Carl's desire to hit his mentor grew stronger. He didn't want to take part in this show and entertain the universe. For now, he decided to open these damn boxes and see if there was anything useful in them, and then he would figure out what to do next. First, he opened the pet's bronze box, and 2 packages flew out, one for treatment, the other with food. So now Carl could heal the cat 10 times and feed her pet cookies the same number of times. The next box contained 2 healing potions to improve health and heal wounds and regular fingerless gloves. There was also a heavy toad club lying there, suitable as a very primitive weapon, but it would do for a start. In addition, the chest contained a forged poker with a pointed end, which could be used as a short spear. The next chest contained a similar set, and the researcher methodically placed the items he had received into his inventory. The chests opened one after another, revealing the useful and not so useful things inside. Now Carl's inventory contains 2 poison antidotes, 100 explorer's cookies, 20 torches, and other small items. The guy sorted out all the necessary supplies and put them in storage. It was still unclear what awaited him ahead. At least the health potions will definitely come in handy. You never know who else they might meet, and they'll need cat food too. The next box contained a supply of arsonist explosive agent, consisting of 5 sticks of dynamite and a regular gas lighter. One of the items received turned out to be quite peculiar. It was a goblin pass. It was placed on the forearm in the form of a tattoo, which could only be hidden with a special concealing sleeve. This pass resets goblin hostility and allows passage through goblin-controlled territories. but the goblin's enemies will now also consider Carl their enemy. Of the 10 chests, only the 3 most valuable ones had not yet been opened. The boy looked at them doubtfully. Finally, he opened these boxes, and the system congratulated him on his successful purchases, which would definitely be useful. There was a cloak of fortitude of the night ghosts. It improved constitution, gave resistance to poison and ice attacks, and also improved armor. Carl also got an enchanted trollskin t-shirt that protects against blows, and an enchanted skunk ring for his leg. The guy immediately put the most valuable things on himself. It all looked pretty funny. All that was left was to open the legendary pet box, and both Carl and Donut looked with interest at the beautiful chest. And finally, a glow came from the box. Numerous locks clicked, and the chest began to open. Imagine the boy's disappointment when he saw that there was only one cookie in this painted chest. True, it was an enchanted cookie, but still, it was so small that it was unclear why they packed it in a separate chest. Carl picked up the enchanted cookie. It was a little bigger than his fingernail, he asked in confusion, and that was all. The system responded that this was no ordinary cookie, and he could feed it to his pet at his own risk. Mordecai asked the boy if he wanted to give it to his pet here in the safe room. Donut jumped off her owner's shoulder in anticipation of a treat, but the guy was unsure whether to give her the thing or not. He asked the guildmaster what this cookie did. The cat did not take her glowing yellow eyes off the enchanted item. Mordecai shrugged. The effects vary. The only way to find out is to let the animal try it. Or you can keep it until you stumble upon a store. Such a thing can cost several hundred gold. The cat looked at the guy with glowing eyes. She clearly wanted to get the enchanted pet cookie. But Carl was tormented by doubts. What if this thing would harm the cat? What if it would turn into something incomprehensible? He looked again at the naughty Donut, Bee's wayward pet, whom she had left with Carl along with his things. The guy sighed. He was the only one she had left, which meant Carl was responsible for this wayward ball of fur. But if Carl gives her this cookie, how useful will Donut be in the dungeon? She's just a cat. Carl can't even protect her properly, no matter how terrible it is. But the most adequate thing he can do is... And then the guy howled in pain. It seemed the cat had caught his thoughts and decided to do everything her way. Donut sank her sharp teeth into Carl's hand, in which he held the enchanted cookie, and ate the item. The angry boy shook the cat off his hand, cursing loudly. But there was nothing to be done. The cookie had already been eaten. Donut, somersaulting in the air, purred contentedly. How delicious this very pet cookie was. Having fallen to the floor, the fluffy cat stopped moving. Now she looked more like a rug in the hallway. Carl looked in surprise at what the cat had turned into after swallowing the magic item. Had she really died? He called out Donut's name loudly, but Mordecai took the boy's hand and told him that he needed to wait a little. But Carl, his eyes flashing, yelled what the hell had happened to his cat. What did it all mean? And could it all be fixed? Mordecai explained that the transformation was happening, but it was definitely not bad. Otherwise the guild would have teleported her out of here immediately. Nothing can harm an explorer or NPC in the newbie guild or safe room. These are the rules of the dungeon. Then Carl and Mordecai saw a hologram of the executive producer. He greeted the explorers and reported that the dungeon was sealed. Almost 13 million human explorers passed through the gate and entered the dungeon. Carl was surprised. So few. The producer added, however, that this number has already been reduced to 10 million people. Also, the entrance to the second floor won't open until the introductory episode of the Dungeon Explorers World program begins, which will happen in about 30 Earth hours. On behalf of Borant Cascadia Corporation, the showrunner thanked everyone for their participation and wished them good luck and happy exploration. The guy sadly lowered his head, which meant that out of all the humanity on the planet, only 10 million people survived. Suddenly, Carl heard someone behind him say that if he really wanted to show everyone his coat, then perhaps he should put on his pants first. Turning around, he saw in horror that Donut was telling him that he couldn't understand why Miss Beatrice had chosen him in the first place. Carl frowned. Such speech always irritated him, especially since the tone was too similar to his ex-girlfriend Beatrice. His cat was alive and well, sitting near the door, looking at Carl with slight disdain. The guy's face lengthened. He swore loudly and dirty and asked why Donut was now speaking like a human. The cat remembered her former life in the apartment with her beloved owner, the beautiful Beatrice, and her strongman boyfriend, Carl. She constantly listened to the senseless conversations of her people. Carl, passing by the sofa, constantly stroked her. Donut loved to sit on the soft sofa and watch movies on the big TV, while people chatted about all sorts of nonsense. And yet it was a calm and happy time. The cat sighed. Is it possible to return this golden time? Beatrice also constantly took her beloved Donut to cat shows, where she won, received titles and awards. A contented Miss Beatrice gently hugged her furry pet, saying that her girl was the most beautiful. Then Donut stayed with Carl, sitting in his arms. She carefully watched as he played computer games. True, he was not as gentle as Beatrice, and after finishing the match, he regularly tried to throw the cat off his lap. But Donut resisted, and the guy quickly gave in, allowing the furry brat to continue sitting on his lap. One day, Donut heard that Beatrice was leaving Carl, and he replied that he didn't care and that she could stay in the Bahamas. He promised to look after the apartment and Donut until her parents came and took the cat. And even though Carl said he didn't care, Donut saw that the guy was sad, and the cat felt very sorry for him. She climbed into his arms and purred loudly, rubbing herself against his strong chest. He stroked her, and tears rolled down his manly face. Donut indignantly told Carl that she was the grand champion of the breed, the national winner, Princess Donut Queen Anna Pushinovna. But she does allow us to call her simply Princess or Princess Donut. Mordecai and Carl looked at the cat in bewilderment. After thinking for a moment, the cat added that in front of members of high society, she must be called by her full name and with her titles. Donut looked closely at the guy, apparently trying to figure out whether he understood her statement or not. Since no one objected to her, but everyone was looking at her attentively, she added that they would agree on Princess Donut. Mordecai's mouth dropped open in surprise as he looked at this unusual dungeon explorer he hadn't taken into account. Unexpectedly, the guildmaster burst out laughing, suggesting that Carl look at the characteristics of his furry companion. The guy opened his menu and found the squad tab, where he and Donut were listed, and looked at her characteristics. The cat's strength and intelligence were each 11 points, physique 2, dexterity 8, and charisma 25. In addition, she had buffs for accelerated growth and charisma. Carl was shocked. What a stat. The guy was especially offended by the fact that the cat's intelligence was so much higher than his, more than 3 times, and he found this offensive. Mordecai considered. Other stats no longer gaining points meant she was stuck with a base constitution of 2 and agility of 8. With such charisma, she should take a closer look at the bard class. The constant +2 to charisma does the trick. The guildmaster explained that other explorers were immune to her charisma, and so were guides like Mordecai. But other creatures in the dungeon were still susceptible. Looking at the cat, Mordecai said thoughtfully, "For the first 2 floors, these are very high stats, downright sky high." The guildmaster, collapsing into a chair, noticed that since a second researcher had appeared, he would have to conduct the training again. But Donut generously answered the head of the newbie guild that there was no need for that. She heard everything he said to her servant. Carl's face twisted with anger. Since when had he become a servant to a cat? But Donut calmly said that it was time to begin. The cat, turning to Mordecai, said that her servant was stupid. His intelligence was only 3, so the guildmaster should not be angry with him. Carl was seething inside. He clenched his teeth in anger. How dare this impudent ball of fur talk about him like that? The cat remembered a scene from her favorite movie, which she was watching at home when her owners forgot to turn off the TV when they left. There they said about the main character that he had already become close to the family, that they wouldn't have the strength to let him go. That's what the cat thought about Carl. The head of the newbie guild told Donut that in that case he would activate her menu and inventory. It turned out that during the short journey from the entrance to the dungeon to the guild, Donut managed to obtain as many as 5 boxes of items. The cat immediately opened them and the items inside each chest flew out. The adventurer's silver box contained many restorative potions and torches. Princess Donut also received a magical tome called the Magic Shell and Animal Cookies. Only the legendary 4-legged box, the most valuable of the 5 received by the cat, remained closed. Inside the chest was a valuable magical item, the enchanted tiara of the 6 Slav. Carl was surprised at the stupid name, but Mordecai advised him to read the description of this thing first. To begin with, Donut decided to study the magic book of the magic skill Magic Projectile. Mordecai politely addressed Princess Donut, seeing that she had already learned Magic Missile. This was simply wonderful. And that other item, although very valuable and powerful, is also very dangerous. Before you put it on, it's worth remembering. But before the newcomer's guildmaster could finish his speech, an enchanted tiara began to shine on the cat's head. Mordecai sighed heavily and lowered his head. This tiara increased strength, but had a very serious side effect. The wearer of the tiara gains the permanent effect of the royal blood of the Sultan's heir, and even removing it will not remove the effect. This effect will force the seeker to kill all members of the Sultan's clan. Carl exclaimed that he shouldn't have worn this tiara. Donut purred. This magical tiara is purple, and purple is her favorite color. Does Carl know how many purple ribbons she won, and does he know what she did for the purple ribbons? The mouse said that the elusive object meant that it would crumble to dust as soon as she picked it up. In this case, a copy of him will appear somewhere in the dungeon, and if another explorer finds the tiara, he will become the next victim on the cat's list. At this time, Donut was putting away all the items she had received into her inventory like a boss. Carl glanced sideways at the cat. He didn't like the prospect of having a bloodthirsty psychopath next to him all the time. The guy cursed and asked what he should do now. Donut calmly answered instead of the guildmaster. Everything couldn't be clearer. Stretching, she told Carl to help her reach level 18 so she could leave this godforsaken place. The system reported that Donut had named the squad Princess Donut's Royal Retinue and changed Carl's title to Royal Guard. The guy shuddered. Was this serious? Mordecai explained that she had the best stats in the squad, so she was appointed leader. The cat congratulated Carl. He was promoted from servant to guard. Seeing the boys upset, Mordecai told him not to worry. Titles weren't that important here. Right now, Donut is a little stronger than Carl, so for now it's better for them to stick together, and then we'll see. The cat walked up to the front door and ordered it to open, the guildmaster added, at least until they reached the 9th floor. As he walked Carl to the door, Mordecai advised the boy not to forget the main thing. The crown was on her head, not his. By the way, since Mordecai prepared them, when they enter the Beginner's Guild, they will be instantly transported to this room. So if they have any questions, he will always help them. Carl nodded his head in agreement and wished Mordecai luck with his damn contract or whatever he had with that corporation. The guildmaster lowered his large round ears and frowned. He muttered good luck to the explorers as well. Suddenly Mordecai jumped up to Carl and quickly grabbed him by the cloak, pulling him towards himself so that he could hear the whisper. The guildmaster whispered to the surprised boy that they shouldn't tell him, that no matter what they promised, it wasn't worth it. Mordecai now knows this for sure, but Carl, tired of fighting and bloodshed, may agree to a calm and safe contract. The former dungeon explorer's eyes were shining, filled with fatigue, despair, and a desire to help the newcomer. He added that negotiations should not begin until you reach at least the 12th floor of the dungeon. But even then, Mordecai advised to negotiate until the last minute. Carl looked at the guildmaster in surprise, wondering what was wrong with him. Mouse let go of Carl's cloak and, slightly pushing the researcher away from the guild door, told him once again to remember this. The puzzled boy took a couple of steps away from the heavy door behind which he and Donut had taken refuge at the dangerous moment. Mordecai slammed the door, and now he and the cat had to continue their journey on their own. Carl remembered what the guildmaster had just whispered to him, but the guy didn't immediately understand what he was talking about. It seemed that Mordecai wanted to say that death was better than agreeing to the proposals on the 10th and 11th floors. The guy lowered his head. Did the guildmaster really think that Carl would get there? 3 million people died in just 1 hour. He grabbed his head and cursed. Just think, 3 million people. And then Carl heard Donut's words that it was time for them to go. Carl turned around in surprise. His cat seemed to have actually decided to command him. Such a commander was amazing. But Donut continued calmly. They needed to go that way. If they were attacked, she told Carl to protect her. The guy asked if the cat just wanted to hang around. She replied that they had about 29 hours before the aliens started the show. This means they have 29 hours to do something great. But first they need to find Carl some pants. Donut declared that she would not allow herself to be shown to the entire universe in such an unsightly and ridiculous form. Now she can read comments on the Martian social network. One wrote that the cat is very cute, but why is her guardian without pants? Carl noticed that Donut wasn't wearing pants either, and she countered that cats didn't need pants, and that there was no point in trying to be witty. The guy was tormented by questions about how he would survive on the next floor, and whether he would really have to fight with people and kill them. Donut haughtily declared that she understood that his brain, with an IQ of 3, was now speaking. But Carl cut her off. He said that he had had enough of Ponchik's caustic remarks, and that he would now go in that direction. The cat looked at her angry owner in confusion, and silently blinked her huge yellow eyes. And Carl, pointing her in the opposite direction, explained that she would go a completely different way. Donut was taken aback that Carl really wanted to split up. But this was extremely unreasonable. She did not understand such a decision. The guy explained that Mordecai said that Donut was stronger than him, super, which meant that everything would probably be fine with her in the dungeon. The talking cat will be able to survive, unlike him, because since they entered the dungeon, 3 million people have already died. But still, Carl is not going to waste what might be the last hours of his life on the quirks of some cat. He understands that cats are all arrogant. But does Donut understand why people still like them the way they are? Yes, this is all because no matter how arrogant cats are, they do not speak, do not voice their stupid thoughts. Waving his hand, the guy sighed and told Donut to forget all of this, and go her own way from now on, and he would go his own. Suddenly, Donut called out to Carl and asked him to forgive her. She didn't want to offend him like that. Carl stopped and looked in surprise at the cat in a purple tiara sitting in the middle of the corridor. Lowering her ears, Donut asked him once again to forgive her. Of course, He was right. She shouldn't have acted so arrogantly. It's just that when she woke up after the transformation, she was overcome with memories of how they lived before. How she sat by the window, about all those terrible but at the same time wonderful cat shows. She was constantly winning at exhibitions. She was praised, given gifts, and told that she was a beautiful princess. Raising her face to the guy, Donut said that she was a champion, she had an image, and she had to stick to it. She also remembers well how she once sat on Carl's lap and watched as he was bent over in his favorite game. And, oddly enough, she enjoyed watching how strong and mischievous Carl got into trouble during the computer game. Donut saw how the guy was overcome with emotions. He was angry, swearing, clenching his teeth, but still did not give up the game. Carl's face became sad. He really did lose often, and sometimes he got hit hard during matches. The cat reminded him that he had snatched a lot of it back then, and was incredibly angry at the whole world. But despite everything, he continued to play. Donut didn't understand why then, but she liked that about him too. The guy asked, "So what now? Will she suddenly stop being a typical bitch princess?" The cat sighed. "She's still the same princess, but she'll try to be softer." Donut asked the young man to understand that they needed each other. The cat admitted that she was scared and did not want to be alone. The cat knew that Carl didn't want to be alone either, and the guy asked her in bewilderment what she was talking about. Donut jumped onto the guy's shoulders and gently rubbed herself against his head. Carl gasped in confusion. She recalled that on the day the road was cleared, he could have taken her to Beatrice's parents, but he didn't want to. Instead, the guy searched online for an apartment where he could live with cats. Carl was silent. Donut noticed everything correctly. He was surprised at how smart and observant this little animal was. The cat purred quietly, almost in the guy's ear, and then she realized that he wanted to kidnap her. The guy tried to deny it, embarrassed, but he knew that this is exactly what he was actually doing at the time. Donut whispered in Carl's ear. It wouldn't have worked. Beatrice's father would have found and returned the cat to his daughter almost immediately. After all, Carl's ex-girlfriend's father was a rather famous and influential lawyer. The boy lowered his head. He knew all this very well, but despite this, he wanted to try to take the fluffy donut with him. Sighing, Carl said, "Okay, so be it. They will go on together." The cat purred contentedly. He casually stroked her soft, fluffy fur. Donut's purring somehow calmed him down. Turning into one of the corridors, the guy said that they would go in this direction. Judging by the map, there was nothing dangerous here. As he walked, Carl told Donut that he was actually without pants, because she decided to jump out of the window in the middle of the night. The cat replied that if she hadn't jumped into the tree then, they would already be dead. Carl asked why she did that. Suddenly, Donut became alert. In an instant, the soft animal turned into a string. Her eyes flashing, she said, "There is something there." In front of them was a dark, but at first glance completely empty corridor. Donut growled. Carl asked what was there, if she saw anything. Magical rays erupted from the cat's eyes as she literally scanned the corridor. Donut used the magic projectile skill she had recently learned from Mordecai in the Beginner's Guild. The rays from the furry princess's eyes darted along the narrow corridor, trying to detect the alien. Sometimes, however, they destroyed the walls. Carl, who was watching what Donut was doing, asked what the hell she was doing. And suddenly he noticed a strange creature in the depths of the corridor, definitely not of earthly origin. His blood-red glowing eyes were already clearly visible in the corridor. It seemed that a new enemy had appeared before them. The monster opened its toothy mouth and growled loudly in pain. Donut's magic projectile had wounded her. The contented cat, having settled comfortably on Cal's shoulder, said triumphantly, "This is how you can wound an enemy from afar." She told Carl to finish off the enemy, but he replied that it would be a good idea to first find out who we were hitting before firing randomly. And if there was a person there, Donut could easily kill him, the cat responded irritably. It's obvious that it's not a person. And indeed, Carl saw that in front of them was a strange-looking animal that was clearly going to attack them. He screamed in fear at Donut to launch the projectile faster before the monster trampled them. The cat fluffed up and fired a beam, very similar to a laser. Their enemy was close, so it was easy to aim. Donut's magical blast hit the monster right in the eye and completely burned it out, making the enemy even more angry. The system informed them that they were facing a bad third-level llama. She might bargain, or she might spit. Then things would be very bad for them. And indeed, the angry llama's chest swelled, filling with something golden-orange. The next second, a fireball flew out of the llama's toothy, hissing mouth, and she spat fire at the dungeon explorers. Donut immediately hid behind Carl's broad back, because the llama was aiming at her. The guy dodged, and the fireball flew past. Carl looked with interest at what the llama spat at them, and was surprised to discover that it was real lava. The guy was shocked that a llama could spit lava. while several pools of burning lava were already blazing around him. He shouted at the cat to fire another projectile at the dangerous animal, but Donut replied that she had no mana. Rushing to the llama, Carl asked the cat if she hadn't been given a mana potion, but there was no time to think. The llama was about to spit again. Flying up to the monster, the guy hit the llama on the chin, changing the direction of the lava flow. Now it flew in the other direction. Without giving the monster time to recover, Carl dealt the llama blow after blow to prevent it from generating another batch of lava. Suddenly, he felt the bones in his right hand breaking from the powerful blows against the monster's body. But despite the sharp, burning pain, Carl continued to fight, gritting his teeth. He beat the bad llama until it swayed. Finally, the llama's long legs began to move apart. It began to sway, and blood flew out of its toothy mouth along with lava. The dying monster tried once again to spit at its enemy, squeezing out a few drops of burning liquid. Carl's broken arm was shaking. He felt incredible pain, but he clenched his teeth and endured it, not allowing himself to even cry out. The guy concentrated. He couldn't relax now. The fight wasn't over yet. The llama was wounded but still alive. The danger remained. Carl remembered the army, everything he had been taught then, and suddenly his face became calm. He clenched his fist and rushed back into the fight. The guy put all his remaining strength into a blow to the llama's chest. He hit the very bag in which the fiery saliva collected. The force of the blow caused the bag on the llama's chest to burst and lava to spill out. This blow proved fatal for the monster. The llama coughed, kicked its hooves helplessly, and fell to the floor. The animal shook its head painfully. Now the bad llama was no different from an ordinary earthly animal. Finally, she began to quiet down. The eye became cloudy, and the bag of lava became paler and paler, as if the lava had begun to harden. Carl grabbed his hand. He cursed under his breath. It hurt so much. Only now did he allow himself to fully feel the pain. The guy remembered that he had healing potions in his inventory. It was time to try their effect on himself. By clicking on the healing icon in the menu, Carl selected the appropriate action he needed. The system showed the researcher the healing process. It turned out that in the fight, Carl managed to break as many as 6 bones in his arm. To the guy's surprise, the pain in his arm went away almost instantly. He was amazed. It worked so quickly. But how is that possible? Donut ran up to her wounded companion and worriedly placed her soft paws on his broken arm. She said how careless Carl was. It was bad. He shouldn't allow himself to get hurt like that in every skirmish. The guy was outraged. What a fight. This thing was spitting lava. They need to be more careful, otherwise they will die very quickly. Donut approached the dead llama. She thoughtfully said that what they really need is to raise their levels. The cat opened her inventory and replenished her food supplies with the meat of the killed animal, as well as the fluffy skin of a llama. A satisfied Donut informed her companion that she had dealt 71% damage, so she should be the first to loot. The fluffy princess waved her tail, and on the floor of the corridor lay the already skinned carcass of a llama, and part of the meat was cut off. Having taken all the most valuable things, Donut turned to Carl and said that now it was his turn to replenish supplies. The system told Carl that he could get 1 piece of raw steak and 2 packets of low-grade amphetamine. The guy moved all of this into his inventory without much enthusiasm. He didn't like the fact that Donut had won the victory over the llama. The cat jumped up and down with joy, exclaiming that she had made new achievements after defeating the bad llama. For killing a mob that was higher than her level, the cat received a bronze adventurer's box and experience to level up. For using the magic projectile and hitting the target, Donut received a bronze magic box as a reward. Having received the awards, the cat happily trotted forward, purring. She must admit, the awards really inspire her. However, the wide halls did not seem like a good place for movement or fighting to Donut, and she ducked into one of the side corridors. Seeing the cat run forward, Carl shouted at Donut to stop, but she didn't listen. The guy ran after her, fearing that she would unexpectedly encounter some powerful monster in the back alleys. He saw the tip of his wayward pet's fluffy tail flash around the next corner. Carl shouted to the cat again not to run far. It could be very dangerous. It was unknown who else was wandering around here. Suddenly, Carl heard someone calling for help. It was clearly a human voice. The guy stopped and looked around. Following the cries for help, shots rang out. The guy frowned, which meant that firearms were being used here. Carl ran even faster after Donut, he grumbled to himself. And where was this stupid cat rushing headlong? In one of the corridors, Carl saw his cat ahead, walking slowly on its short legs. In a few jumps, the boy found himself next to the cat and quickly grabbed her small, furry body. Lifting her from the floor, he grumbled. Why did she run away if she herself wanted them to go together? What kind of willfulness? Donut frowned and said that grabbing the princess like that was the highest degree of humiliation, but she would forgive Carl. He told his fellow traveler that they did not know who or what awaited them ahead, and asked her not to run away headlong anymore. The cat jumped onto her guard's shoulder again, and he added that running through the corridors alone was very dangerous. Suddenly they saw a disgusting creature crawling into the corridor, looking like a giant house cockroach. Seeing a person, the huge insect hissed. It turned out to be a first-level sprinkler. For it, people are disgusting insects. Donut immediately climbed onto Carl's head and hissed. "What a disgusting thing." The cat asked her guardian to kill the cockroach. Heading towards the insect, Carl told Donut that she could have simply charged it with magic, and that was it. The guy stomped on the nasty sprinkler, and the insect shattered into tiny pieces, covering everything around with green liquid. In fact, this abomination was not only disgusting, but also dangerous. But the cloak on Carl's shoulders gave him immunity to the poison. Looking at the green puddle, Donut snorted contemptuously, and Carl said with disgust that a cockroach of any size is disgusting. Donut happily exclaimed that she received experience for killing the cockroach. Carl was indignant, but she did nothing. The cat, smiling contentedly, declared that she had led the operation to destroy the nasty sprinkler. She was very pleased that her efforts were appreciated by the organizers of the Universal show. And then Donut fell silent in surprise, her gaze falling on a sign that she had never expected to see in the dungeon. Carl was also very surprised to see a door in front of him and a sign next to it for a men's restroom, the kind you usually see in public places. The guy asked, dumbfounded, why the hell there were toilets in the dungeon, or was this another trap for researchers? They stopped near a door with a sign indicating a toilet. Carl scratched the back of his head in confusion. Donut, jumping off her guard's head, exclaimed, "Oh great, I need to pee." The guy tried to stop the cat. The fluffy princess ordered the door to open. In the toilet room there was a large cat litter tray filled with filler. The contented cat jumped into the litter box. Carl didn't understand what the hell was going on here. The guy didn't want to watch the princess do her natural cat thing. He slammed the door and decided to wait for his companion outside, hoping that nothing terrible would happen to her in the toilet. Soon, a characteristic scratching sound was heard behind the door, which Carl had heard more than once at home, after which the door opened. Donut jumped out of the restroom, smiling blissfully and shaking the stuck litter off her paws. She told Carl that it was his turn now, and the boy imagined himself with horror sitting in the cat litter box. He shook his head. No, this definitely doesn't suit him. He hasn't used a litter box yet. And anyway, why is there a toilet room with a cat lock in the dungeon? Are there crowds of cats walking around here? But as soon as Carl opened the same door, instead of a tray he saw an ordinary toilet and paper. He asked where the sink and soap were, how they should wash their hands. The guy shook his head, wondering why the room had changed so much, if it was because he was the one who opened the door. Coming out of the toilet, Carl thoughtfully repeated that he didn't understand anything. But then Donut exclaimed that they were being attacked by monsters. Indeed, a large guardian of a 4th-level sprinkler brewed with smaller cockroaches was approaching them. The cat noticed that this cockroach was healthy. She was perplexed. And why make these disgusting bugs even bigger? Like its smaller brethren, the guardian is a giant cockroach that wants only one thing: to kill a person. Unlike the smaller specimens, it is dangerous. Carl pushed off the floor and rushed towards the monsters, hoping to catch them off guard and prevent them from attacking the researchers themselves. Donut, realizing that this opponent was stronger, fired her magic charge at him. This time, Donut and Carl attacked the monsters together, the cat shooting magical bolts at them, and the guy kicking them mercilessly. The cockroaches didn't seem to expect that the dungeon explorers would attack them first, and even kick them. However, the enemies remained unharmed. The cat asked if Carl wanted her to pop a mana potion and hit the cockroach again. But the guy replied, no need. He quickly opened his inventory and pulled out a toad club. Armed, he told Donut that he would deal with the guardian of the sprinkler brood himself. It was a cockroach, just a big one. Carl hit the nasty monster on the small head with his club as hard as he could. There was a ringing sound, but the cockroach was safe and sound. Judging by the health bar that appeared above the monster's head, the guy did practically no damage to the guard. This result puzzled Carl. He never expected that this nasty insect would have such thick and durable skin. The donut on the guy's shoulder frowned, because her magical blows also did not cause any damage to this abomination. But the cockroach, having received a blow to the head with a club, became seriously angry and hissed threateningly at the person. Carl was at a loss as to how to deal with this armored cockroach, so he quickly took a metal poker out of his inventory. The guy poked the sharp end of the weapon into the cockroach's head, but it responded by hitting Carl's weapon with its small head. The insect's blow caused the poker to bend, jingle, and springing back, fly off in an unknown direction. Carl got angry, and running up to the huge cockroach, hit it on the head with all his might with his bare foot with the ring on his finger. To his surprise, The blow blew off the sprinkler guard's head, green liquid flowed out of him, and the giant cockroach was dead. The system congratulated Carl on his new skill, Leg Soldier, which added 10% to the damage of his kicks. The dungeon explorers went further, and surprisingly, they came across a toilet again, but this time it was a paid one. Carl read the sign that the corporation was a private company and was not obligated to provide free toilets to everyone. The guy opened the door of another toilet and looked inside with curiosity. He had a feeling that he had been here before. Having closed the door, he chuckled in confusion. In fact, everything here seemed rather strange to him. But what did the toilet have to do with it? As soon as they emerged from another toilet, they were again attacked by giant cockroaches, and the researchers fought back together. It seemed that all the doors in this corridor led to toilets, and the signs on the toilets were written in a variety of languages. They even found a toilet door with hieroglyphs. Carl was amazed at how thoughtful the organizers of this show were. Above one of the doors there was a sign that this was the Hall of the Beginners Guild. Carl knew that if he opened it, he would end up with Mordecai. Another door stood out in a bright scarlet color. It turned out to be a special toilet for shepherdesses. The guy opened one of the next toilet doors again, and it turned out to be the same thing as in the very first toilet. He opened another one, this time with hieroglyphs, and again it was exactly the same as what was in the first toilet they visited. Opening the door to the Newbie Guild, Carl saw a familiar room with a large fireplace and the guildmaster Mordecai standing there. The dungeon explorer looked into another toilet and saw the same thing again, and then he realized that his guess was probably correct. Donut asked Carl if he really didn't want to go to the toilet, and he responded by asking why there were so many toilets here. The guy activated his minimap and looked at the corridor they were in. There were toilets everywhere. Carl said that every door to the Newbie Guild leads him to Mordecai's room, and it's probably the same story with the toilets. He tore off a piece of toilet paper and hung it on the toilet to check whether all the toilets led to the same toilet. Having closed the door of the toilet he had marked, Carl walked on, eager to check if he had understood correctly. He was curious how the aliens were able to program all of this like that. Perhaps their physical laws worked differently. Opening the door of the next toilet, Carl saw a piece of toilet paper, so it was the same toilet, although he still didn't understand what it gave him. The guy closed the door and thought. Donut, looking worriedly at her guard, told Carl that she was worried about him. The cat narrowed his big yellow eyes. His obsession with toilets was clearly unhealthy. It would be better if he squashed cockroaches again. It doesn't upset the cat as much, even though it looks disgusting. The guy didn't answer, and they silently continued their way down the corridor with various toilets. Soon the travelers were attacked by giant cockroaches again, and this time Carl crushed them with his feet without thinking, for which he received an achievement. The system was delighted. Carl kills with his feet, with his bare, beautiful human feet. He places his bare foot on a living creature, and presses with all his passion until it dies. The guy read these comments and was shaking with anger and disgust. His legs were already covered in green slime from the cockroaches, and the cockroaches kept growing in number. And since there was no other way to kill them, Carl had to crush the vile creatures with his feet. The amount of pressure Carl can apply to enemies with his bare foot increases by 10% with each skill level. Donut said thoughtfully that they probably wouldn't buy Carl shoes. His bare feet worked much more efficiently. But the guy didn't agree with the cat. They would buy him shoes, and as soon as possible, he was already fed up with these comments about bare feet. The cat pointed out to her companion that the show's organizers seemed to like him just the way he was. Well, or at least they like Carl's legs, which he uses so skillfully to kill his opponents. Ponchik was sure that this sympathy should be taken advantage of. If the organizers liked them, perhaps it would be easier for them. Carl understood that there was some truth in Donut's words, and perhaps that was what he should do. But it was very unpleasant for him. The cat objected. He was wrong. Being eaten by a bad llama, that was really unpleasant, and the rest was bullshit. Jumping into the guy's arms, Donut purred that Carl was probably just very tired, which is why he thought so. Once he gets some sleep, all these jokes about bare legs and the like will seem like nonsense to him, because they didn't sleep all night. Carl thought, God, it's not even morning yet, but it feels like several days have already passed in this damn dungeon. He told Donut that they needed to find one of those safe rooms Mordecai had told him about, and get some rest. Perhaps in this room they will also get more answers about where they ended up, what awaits them, and how best to behave. Soon the guy found what they were looking for. Donut was delighted. She asked her companion what this magical place was. The cat's eyes sparkled. She exclaimed happily and squirmed in Carl's arms, clearly eager to explore the room. The boy let go of Donut, and she rushed towards her intended target, her fluffy tail flashing among the tables and chairs. Leaning against the glass wall, she exclaimed, "This is the biggest cat tree house she has ever seen." Having opened the door, The cat jumped around the structure with joyful squeals, rolled around and hit the toys with her paws. Carl looked around. It looked like he could eat here in peace. Besides, there were several screens hanging on the wall that looked like televisions. The guy walked up to the bar counter. There was someone there, but only the owner's hat was visible from behind the counter. Carl leaned over and looked behind the counter. A stocky gnome stood there, looking intently at the guest with large, sad eyes. The guy greeted Tally, the keeper of this safe room, a non-combat NPC of level 63. Tally looked sullenly first at the guy, then at the frolicking cat, then asked Carl if they wanted to eat. Carl smiled. What? Tally is inviting them? Maybe there is some kind of menu here. He is new here and doesn't know anything yet. Tully knows the guy is new because the dungeon just opened. But it opened without warning, so Tully didn't have time to prepare. But he can cook food for a human explorer, but not for a cat. But he has milk. It is better than pet cookies. Donut was absolutely delighted. She shouted to Carl, "This place is simply amazing." He can see for himself how much fun she is having. Carl smiled. Actually, the cat loves yogurt, but you can't give her too much. Carl stopped short. For some reason, he suddenly remembered his ex-girlfriend Beatrice. Whether she was alive, whether she had also gone into the dungeon. Coming to his senses, Carl said that cats need meat to survive. Tally promised to bring meat. He again asked if the man wanted to eat. Tally would cook. Watching Donut play, the boy asked what Tally would advise him to eat, since he didn't know the menu. Carl watched with a sad smile as the cat frolicked among the toys. It reminded him of his former carefree life. Turning to the safe room keeper, the boy said that he didn't know what would be best to prepare for him. Gnome Bobka asked Carl if he wanted Tally to choose what to cook for him to eat. The guy confirmed that it would probably be better that way, since Tally knows everything here better. The only request is that it not be a fish. Tully asked what level of spiciness he wanted between 1 and 5. Carl said he liked it hotter, so 4, but only if that was on the human scale. The keeper asked the guy if he would rent a room. The preview announcement would only be in 10 hours. Carl didn't understand what the announcement was, Tully explained. An announcement of the show World of Earth Dungeon Explorers. They'll explain everything there. After thinking for a bit, the guy decided that they would take the room. By that time, Donut had played enough and returned to Carl. Tully said that everything was fine. The human researcher could go take a shower and get some rest. Just when the guy wakes up, Tully will prepare food for him, and he will be able to eat before the show announcement starts. Carl thanked Tally and headed to the room indicated by the keeper. Donut jumped into the guy's arms as he walked. As he left the common room, the boy wished the sullen Tully good night. Perhaps this would be their last good night. Tully looked after his guests and also wished the dungeon explorers good night. The lights went out in the common room, the researchers went to their rooms, and Tally headed to the kitchen to prepare a treat for his guests. Bobka's eyes were very sad. He sighed heavily. He clearly did not like being in the dungeon. The first thing Carl did was take a shower. The hot water had a calming effect on him, and he wanted to wash the cockroach blood off his feet. Everything fell on him so suddenly that he didn't even have time to think about it all properly, or comprehend what was happening to him. But it's very hard to think about what happened. It's hard to imagine that all this crazy nonsense could be true. Coming out of the shower, Carl asked where the towels were. It turned out that he had nothing to dry himself with. Donut stared wide-eyed at her wet owner as he emerged from the shower. The guy looked for something to dry himself with, but found nothing. Carl shook the water out of his hair. The cat closed her eyes and said contemptuously that only dogs shook off water like that. But the guy didn't pay attention to his furry companion's caustic remark. He said that this place was as wonderful as it gets. Having dressed again, Carl fell onto the bed. He remembered that with all these events he had not slept for about 2 days. He hugged the pillow and whispered tiredly that it was time for them to take a little nap before this damned Universal show began. As he fell asleep, Carl thought that maybe when he woke up, this would all be over, and would turn out to be just a long, drawn-out nightmare. As soon as he began to snore, Donut jumped out of her bed and lay down next to the peacefully sleeping Carl. The cat curled up into a ball, pressing her warm, fluffy side against the guy's back and began to purr loudly. Several hours passed. Donut woke up first. Carl continued to lie down, and the cat became worried whether he was alive. Finally, Carl woke up. Unfortunately, everything around him remained the same, and the guy suggested going to breakfast. The keeper of the safe room, seeing that his guests had woken up, hurried to put 2 cups of food on the table. Carl breathed in blissfully. The smell was simply amazing, and it looked very appetizing. It was not for nothing that he trusted Tully. Armed with a spoon, Carl began to eat his breakfast. He didn't even notice how half of the portion ended up in his stomach. Licking the spoon, the guy exclaimed how delicious it was. He hadn't eaten anything like it for a long time, even in a restaurant. Jumping towards Tally, Donut told her dear keeper that it was simply divine. She wanted more. Tally looked sullenly at the furry, mischievous glutton. Donut tried hard to smile at the keeper and made eyes. 25 points of Donut's charisma did the trick, and Tully, his eyes flashing, said, "Yes, your majesty." At that very moment, Princess Donut received another portion of a very tasty breakfast from the usually gloomy Tally. Having emptied their plates, the dungeon explorers sighed contentedly. Delicious food can improve anyone's mood. Carl looked at the information screens. It said that the leaderboard would appear after the third level crash. There were 3 days and 17 hours left before the level collapsed, and there were just over 4 million dungeon explorers left. The guy almost jumped. Why are there only 4 million people left, when just recently there were 10? Carl was in shock. 2/3 of those who entered the dungeon died before even reaching the start of this damn show. Finally, the screens came to life, and the announcement of the new season of the most popular reality show in the universe began to air. Donut settled down on the table and watched attentively. Maybe now they would be able to find answers to all their questions. The host welcomed everyone to the official preview, warning everyone to watch until the end to see the teaser. The dungeon has a colorful history, and the syndicate's most trusted companies will tell it to viewers. Tully grumbled from behind the counter. It's not interesting to watch. There's no deep immersion into the atmosphere. The show's host was confident that many viewers still remember the stunning finale of the show's last season. The keeper of the room didn't like the competition last season. The Squim conglomerate presented the battle for the planet Errol. Tully said the planet's inhabitants were divided into groups and told that their loved ones would survive if they killed each other. And naturally, the Aurelians began to do this. Blood flowed like a river, mountains of mutilated corpses, incredible cruelty. As a result, the strongest and most bloodthirsty became the winner of the show's season, killing all the other inhabitants of the planet. Carl asked if it was true that their relatives survived, and that the syndicate had not deceived the winner of the show on that planet. Tully sighed. Yes, that's true, but Squim completely sucked the atmosphere out of the planet. Everything there died anyway. The safe room keeper said that a quick death was better. Borant at least gave people a chance to survive. The show's host smiled widely before they began the preview, giving the floor to their sponsor. A serious voice began to praise the Borant Corporation in every possible way, as the most reliable partner in the entire universe. This is not the first season of the show World of Dungeon Explorers, which is presented by the Borant Corporation. All seasons have been a great success. The corporation's administration hopes that this season will bring all viewers a lot of emotions and exciting adventures. Carl winced. He hated commercials, and tried not to watch or listen to them. But there was no way around it. The commercial ended, and the show's host said he had been convinced, and was ready to trust Borant Corporation in any matter. And now, a short educational program about planet Earth awaits the esteemed viewers of this fascinating show. The Syndicate once selected humans to populate this planet, but this particular batch has some interesting characteristics. However, the results of the research are still ambiguous. The structure of Earthlings differs from that of other people. Carl was stunned by what the presenter was saying. And the alien on the screen excitedly told us that Earthlings are known throughout the universe for their fighting spirit. They constantly conflict with each other even over the most trivial matters, causing bloody fights. People on this planet are very primitive in their technological and cultural development, but they are very creative. The creativity of Earthlings is expressed in their horrific cruelty. They even surpass the well-known Empire of Skulls in this regard. Carl watched in horror as the little girl stepped on an anti-personnel mine and died instantly. The presenter continued. Fortunately, Borant made sure that the children were placed in a safe place on the surface of the planet, Carl exclaimed. But they are showing a frame from a film. The showman also said that Borant also took care of preserving the Earth's important cultural heritage. The rules are similar to those of Borant's last season, with ladders located throughout the floor, but some have bosses assigned to them. Suddenly the broadcast was interrupted, and only color-setting tables flashed on the screens. Carl asked what the hell was going on. The broadcast was restored. The presenter announced that this was the entire teaser. I wonder if any of the researchers will be brave enough to challenge the boss. The alien was sure they would find out everything at the premiere of the new season of the show World of Underground Explorers, Earth. Donut was surprised. She didn't think that Earth was so terrible, Carl objected. Half of all this was from the movies. They try to make it look like they are saving Earthlings from themselves. The cat sighed. It wasn't that important anymore. They needed to find the boss and kill him. That way they would definitely get into the show. Jumping down from the counter, Donut said that while they were in a safe place, they should open the chests they had received. The cat smiled affably at her companion and said that if Carl wanted, he could open his boxes first. The guy received a few more torches, healing potions, bandages, and a ring that added points to his constitution. Carl didn't want to take any of these items right now, so he carefully moved everything into his inventory. Donut exclaimed that for being among the first 100 who raised the level of her magic projectile, she was given mana restoration potions. And in another of the cat's chests, there was a slate decoration in the shape of a small butterfly. It gives +4 points to lightness of legs, and +1 point to intelligence. Donut was delighted. Now the winged fairies would not be hostile towards her. Moreover, the cat received a blessing from them. She was literally flying around the room. Carl asked her to be more careful. This skill does not mean that she cannot get hurt when she lands. But Donut didn't listen to Carl. She ran around the cat town faster than the wind, squealing with delight. Carl asked Tally where he learned to cook so well. He must have been a dungeon explorer before. The safe room keeper shook his head, his eyes growing even sadder. He told Carl that this was not so. Judging by the size, this topic was very difficult for Tully. But he told his story. It turns out that the Syndicate doesn't select all worlds in the universe for its show. Sometimes the planet's inhabitants are offered a deal, and that's what happened with their world. One day, representatives of the Syndicate appeared on the planet and announced their conditions to Bobka. These conditions were simple. They would take the inhabitants, and in exchange, they would promise not to conduct excavations on their world. Tally had a family, but everyone understood that those who signed the contract would be making a small contribution to the survival of their home planet. The Syndicate came, and the world of the planet of the Bobka people began to perish. Then Tally decided to take a contract in the dungeon. He didn't want to calmly watch his people die, and he couldn't. Now he had to be here so that his family could live. Donut said it was sad, and they needed to be interesting so they could get fans and get on the show. The cat added, and they also need to become stronger as quickly as possible. Otherwise, they simply won't be able to survive here. Jumping onto the counter, Donut affectionately rubbed herself against the gnome Bobka and purred her gratitude to Tally for the shelter and the delicious breakfast. Tully stroked Donut's silky back and thanked his guests for their warmth. Carl was very surprised, and what Tully was thanking him for, it seemed like he hadn't done anything special here. He was just being polite. Purring loudly for the delighted keeper of the room, Donut told Tally that they would return when they were finished. The cat jumped to the floor and resolutely headed towards the front door. She called Carl. It was time for them to find the boss and kill him. The guy's face lengthened, judging by what they had already seen here. This would not be easy at all. Donut smiled and her eyes sparkled. They had to not only kill this damn boss, but do it with style. After leaving the safe room, the cat asked her guard how they could find the boss of this floor. Carl, pointing to a flock of cockroaches approaching them, replied that they needed to keep an eye on the enemies. A large group of very large sprinklers hissed as they crawled towards the dungeon explorers. The largest and most vicious specimen crawled ahead, its small eyes flashing, its whiskers twitching, and its hissing menacingly. The guy boldly rushed towards the crawling enemies. They had already met many times, and Carl knew what to do with them. He ran up and kicked the leader of the cockroach pack. The others lifted their butts, preparing to douse the man with their poison. At that moment, Donut entered the battle, firing several magic projectiles at the cockroach swarm. The sprinkler leader, having received a magical blow, helplessly twitched his paws and rolled over onto his back. The cat continued to hit the cockroaches with charges, not allowing them to get up and spray their poison around. Paralyzed by magic, the sprinklers fell to the floor and were unable to move for some time. Donut continued shooting at the swarm of giant cockroaches. She had already learned to aim and almost never missed. And Carl quickly finished off the paralyzed creatures, crushing them with his bare feet, which the show's organizers liked so much. Attacking the enemies together, Carl and Donut quickly dealt with a large swarm of giant cockroaches. Finally, the fight was over. The guy wiped the sweat from his forehead and noticed that the swarms of insects were getting larger. Judging by the number of enemies and their size, the researchers are approaching their nest, and perhaps the boss is also located there. Remembering their last fight, Carl thought that it was quite possible for the two of them to kill the boss. True, in order to win they need to do everything smartly, work together, not rush into things at random, and first scout everything out. Donut jumped off Carl's shoulder and ran forward, avoiding the green puddles of disgusting poisonous cockroach blood. The guy suddenly asked his furry companion if she knew how to make an incision. She answered, of course she could. The cat flashed her sharp claws. She could make a 4th level cut and scratch too. Her strength was already 15. Carl noticed that Donut had more strength than him. The guy's strength was now equal to 9. This means that even if the mana for magic runs out, Donut will still be able to deal serious damage due to his strength. He smiled and invited her into his arms, saying that it was time for them to move on. It seemed he had figured out how they would defeat the boss. Donut jumped up and pressed herself against Carl. He decided that they would simply act more carefully due to the cat's low constitution stat. He stroked her small body. She seemed so vulnerable and fragile to him. The cat said she had dropped some sprinkler hemolymph, and the explanation said it was an alchemical ingredient. She purred and asked Carl to get more of these things. They seemed to be very useful. The guy agreed, and they moved further down the corridor where they had encountered so many giant cockroaches. After scratching Donut behind the ear, Carl said that they made a great team. They could deal a lot of damage, even from a distance. Maybe they would survive. At the end of the corridor, the dungeon explorers found a large gate with a warning sign hanging on it. Carl read in Spanish that it was forbidden to enter here by order of the health department. The guy said to the cat, I think it was Spanish. It said something like, do not enter on orders. He asked if Donut understood anything. The cat frowned. She didn't understand Spanish and couldn't guess what it could mean. Seeing how upset Donut was, Carl told her to forget about it. They would come in now, and they would understand everything right away without any signs. He quietly opened the door and whispered to the cat if she could smell anything, as she had a keen sense of smell and unparalleled vision. Donut jumped out of Carl's arms and carefully entered the open doors of a dark and very large room. The cat's fur immediately stood on end. She felt a huge number of enemies on her skin. Donut whispered, there are a lot of first and second level sprinklers here, just an incredible number. The cat looked closely, and there was something else, but she just couldn't figure out what it was. Turning to Carl, Donut whispered, something stinks terribly. The cat is about to burst into tears from the incredible stench. The guy activated his mini-map to get his bearings on where the largest concentration of enemies was in this room. Pulling a stick of dynamite from his inventory, he warned Donut to get ready to run on all fours. The system said the guy was holding goblin dynamite, and he needed to be careful with it and not squeeze it too hard. Otherwise, Carl looked at the stick of dynamite in surprise. He couldn't understand why the system stopped in the middle of a word. And then the guy clenched his teeth. The system simulated the sound of an explosion. Carl already decided that the saber had exploded right in his hands. The frightened cat bristled and bulged its already huge yellow eyes. The system burst out laughing. Carl frowned and grabbed his heart. He cursed the system for the inappropriate joke. The guy commanded the cat to run away. He will run after her when he throws dynamite at the cockroaches. Carl took a lighter out of his inventory. Donut, realizing what he was going to do, ran away from the stinking room. Meanwhile, Carl lit the fuse. It hissed, quickly approaching the explosive dynamite. The guy swung and tried to throw the dynamite stick as close as possible to the cluster of cockroaches. When the bomb fell, he saw an army of sprinklers running over a huge pile of various garbage. Gritting his teeth in tension, Carl ran at top speed away from the cockroach-filled garbage room. The sprinklers gathered around the strange, hissing object and raised their tails menacingly. There was a deafening explosion. The entire room was filled with fire. There definitely shouldn't be any living cockroaches left there. Carl didn't have time to run far enough. The blast wave caught up with him and knocked him off his feet. The system sounded an alarm, informing the researcher that his health was very low. The guy grabbed his head. Everything was swimming before his eyes, and blood was gushing from his mouth and ears. Donut was saying something to him, looking worriedly at her companion, but he couldn't understand the talking cat. Having patted her behind the ear, Carl quietly said, everything is fine. The main thing is that Donut is fine. The cat answered him something, but he did not hear what. Opening the menu, Carl saw that his health was extremely low, but after a successful attack on the sprinkler nest, the guy had already reached level 5. His skill with explosives also increased, and the level of the goblin explosives themselves also increased. Half an hour later, Carl's health was almost completely restored, and they returned to the room. It seemed they had killed all the cockroaches. Donut did not see anyone inside. Entering the room, the guy stepped on a can. He wondered why it was necessary to rake all the trash here. It looks like he really needs shoes. Donut asked if Carl could hear the music. The system informed them that they had dealt damage to the dungeon boss, but they would find out about the reward in a couple of minutes. And then the massive doors slammed behind the seekers. The bolts on the doors closed by themselves, and heavy chains appeared on top of the bolts. Donut jumped onto Carl's shoulders in fear. The guy was holding a burning torch in his hand and looking around, expecting an attack. There was a huge pile of rubbish right in front of him. It hadn't been damaged much by the dynamite explosion, only smoldering a little on top. Suddenly, Carl noticed that the edges of this pile of garbage were engulfed in flames. The garbage began to hiss and catch fire. Soon the room became as bright as day. The system announced that the Seekers had found the lair of the local boss. Now it was time to play seriously. Donut jumped off Carl's shoulder and ran to the exit, babbling that she didn't like it and asked him to take her away from here immediately. The cat scratched the gate with her paws and capriciously told Carl to quickly open the door and let her out. The boy walked up to Donut and silently took the fluffy princess into his arms, calming her down a little. He turned to the trash heap and told the cat to get ready for a fight. Apparently a boss was about to emerge from the heap. There was an explosion. The trash caught fire violently, flying in all directions, and the room was filled with a terrible stench. And then, from the burning garbage, an incredibly dirty man of unknown gender appeared, with cockroaches crawling all over his body. In this battle, on one side was a team of 5th-level dungeon explorers Carl and Princess Donut. On the other hand, there was the local boss of the 7th level, Plyushkin, a homeless woman who lives in the trash along with the cockroaches. A terrible woman, herself resembling a huge cockroach, crawled out of the burning garbage, her tattered clothes already beginning to smolder. Her hands were covered in tiny sprinklers, apparently where they had hatched and grown in the warmth, dirt, and debris. Carl pulled out another stick of dynamite from his inventory, preparing to blow up this disgusting, stinking creature along with the cockroaches. Suddenly he frowned and cursed. Unexpectedly, Carl heard human speech. It was not a monster in front of him. This woman really looked terrible. She seemed to be homeless. She looked up and asked in Spanish for help. Carl lowered his hand with the stick of dynamite. He realized that it seemed the organizers were using Earthlings as opponents. These are the people who were inside the houses at the time of their collapse. The Borant Corporation is using them. The woman spoke Spanish. She didn't understand what was happening. She had a very painful stomach. Carl was sure there was a person in front of him. She extended her dirty hands with bitten nails to Carl and asked him to help her. Her whole body was covered in sores. The guy told Donut that they should help her. Of course, this woman is probably a tramp. She looks terrible, but she is a person. Suddenly, the Spaniard began to vomit, spewing out a stream of green poison from the sprinklers along with small crawling monsters. When Carl saw this, he shuddered with horror, and Donut said that her answer would probably be negative. Sitting on the shoulder of her bipedal guardian, Cat fired magical bolts at Plyushkin, causing the boss to stagger. The huge woman, covered in cockroaches, said that she didn't know where she was, that she was very scared, and again begged for help. Seeing the size of the sprinklers running towards them, Carl swore that they had never seen such huge creatures in the corridor. Donut said, "This is just disgusting," and fired magic projectiles at them. There was no time to waste. The cockroaches kept increasing in number, and they also grew significantly in size and became very aggressive. Carl told the cat to drink another mana potion. They had a very tough fight ahead of them here, and there was no way to retreat. Donut jumped off her companion's shoulder and was about to deal with the mustachioed army of giant cockroaches. The cat struck the poisonous insects with magic, stunning and killing the crawling creatures, of which there were countless numbers here. And Carl, with a torch in his hand, ran to the boss. He still hoped to find a way to get her back, although he did not know if it was possible. Running through the trash scattered around the room, the boy stepped on a piece of glass, and blood gushed from his bare foot. He screamed and lifted his wounded leg, spraying blood. The smell of fresh human blood immediately attracted cockroaches. Carl ran up to the Spaniard and asked if she understood him, but she responded by raising her huge fist and shouting that she had a stomachache. She hit the place where Carl had just been standing, and he managed to jump to the side, trying to reach the dugout. The Spaniard again spewed out a stream of green poison and incredibly large sprinklers. Carl asked the lady to stop. Hiding behind bags of garbage, the boy watched in horror as his former human, Borant, did this to her. But no matter how sad it was to admit it, Carl understood perfectly well that the woman had now become a monster, and she was dangerous. He found a long, strong chain among the garbage bags, wrapped it around his hand, and decided that they had to stop the boss. Carl knew how to handle chains very well. Having untwisted the ring, he wrapped the chain around the poisonous Spanish woman like metal fetters. Having wrapped the chain around the boss, the guy pulled it by both ends, shouting to Donut to distract the enemies for now. The cat replied that Carl should act as quickly as possible, as there were more and more of these giant cockroaches. Donut clicked on her inventory to replenish her mana reserves with a special potion, but she was unable to do so. The cat said in surprise that she couldn't drink another potion to restore mana. The system wouldn't allow it. She won't be able to shoot for another whole minute, which means Carl will be left without magical fire support for that time. At this time, the guy was circling around the Spanish woman, wrapping her in several rings of a metal chain. Having jumped onto the boss's shoulder, he deftly wielded the chain. Now all he had to do was somehow throw the chain around the giantess's throat. Taking aim, Carl began to spin the chain, trying not to let it get tangled in the woman's long hair. And now a huge metal lasso was wrapped around Plyushkin's neck, and now Carl had to tighten the noose. The Spaniard felt something pressing on her neck with concern. She sighed and fidgeted. Carl, firmly grasping both ends of the chain in his hands, jumped off the giantess's shoulder, pulling her huge, ugly body along with him. She grabbed her neck, trying to throw off the chain that had dug into her skin. Blood spurted out, and the woman begged him to let her go in Spanish. The guy pulled the chain with all his might. The giantess wheezed and began to fall. Carl said that he could use some support now. The cat, jumping high above the pile of garbage, purred. Carl is doing a great job. He came up with a great idea with the chain. Carl chuckled. He didn't mean that kind of support, but something more effective. He was already surrounded by cockroaches. Straining with all his strength, the guy continued to pull the chain. He really didn't like it, but there was no other way out, so he cursed. At this time, one of the giant cockroaches quietly crept up to Carl because the cat had stopped shooting. The huge sprinkler sank its teeth into Carl's already wounded leg. Blood spurted out, and the boy cried out in pain. He loudly cursed Donut to help him, otherwise the cockroaches would bite him while he was strangling the boss with a chain. Carl shouted that if the cat couldn't shoot, she could certainly use her damn sharp claws. Donut replied, "The boss is almost dead. Carl will succeed, we can't stop. There's very little left." The giantess begged in Spanish to save her. She was already wheezing, helplessly opening her mouth, and a stream of cockroaches was flying out of her mouth. Suddenly the chain on the boss's neck snapped, leaving a bloody furrow on his throat, and the woman began to breathe again. The guy cursed like crazy. It almost worked. But what to do now? There is no other chain here. He fell into a pile of stinking garbage and both halves of the broken chain flew at him. Carl literally growled with anger. Lying among the bags of waste, he feverishly thought about what to do. His thoughts were interrupted by an attack by a giant cockroach. The insect was slightly smaller in size than Carl himself. And then Donut's powerful magic projectile flew into the huge sprinkler. The monster twitched its paws and died. The cat happily informed Carl that she could shoot again, and without wasting any time, Donut shot the boss. The guy looked at the dying woman with regret. Not long ago, she was a human being, and he didn't want it to end like this. The cat continued to shoot, piercing the Spanish woman's body through and through. Scarlet blood gushed out, and the woman staggered. The health bar showed that the boss was about to die. Carl hurried to run out so that the owner of the trash wouldn't crush him when she fell. There was a terrible noise. Bags of garbage and cockroaches flew in all directions. A huge woman fell to the floor. She was dying. Carl jumped on her giant body. She whispered in Spanish to be forgiven if she was a bad person. The Spanish woman said that she did not want her daughter to get sick, and she was also very afraid of going to hell. The guy clenched his fist, weighted with a chain. He knew he had to finish her off before the cockroach boss's health was restored. The Spanish woman's eyes filled with tears, and she begged the boy to allow Jesus to accept her and end her torment. Carl frowned and quietly asked the woman for forgiveness, but unfortunately, it was no longer possible to bring her back. He dealt her the final blow. Blood spurted. After all, it was better to die than to be what the aliens had turned her into. As soon as the boss breathed his last, all the cockroaches in the room instantly fell dead. Carl jumped off the body of the Spanish woman, who had grown several times larger. He was in a foul mood. This victory did not make him happy. The system announced the winners of the battle with the floor boss. Victory went to the Donut Princess's retinue team, which includes Carl. The team is led by Explorer Princess Donut, a member of the Earth Cat class. Carl couldn't forget what Borant had done to the Spanish woman. Perhaps the same fate befell everyone who was inside at the time of the collapse. He frowned, his eyes flashing with anger. The aliens want people to suffer and kill each other like other races. They want to break the inhabitants of the Earth, turn them into clowns to entertain the universe, or into obedient slaves like Tully. But Earthlings are accustomed to freedom. The aliens were right to point out that people are creative and will definitely figure out how to free themselves. Suddenly, Carl saw a piece of paper flying straight towards him. It was strange. The system suggested that it was a map of the area. He reached out and caught the piece of paper. They had already defeated the floor boss, so it seemed like there shouldn't be any more trials here. The guy squeezed the caught leaf in his hand, and his minimap opened in front of him. But now it was a little bigger. Carl realized that after defeating the boss, his minimap had expanded, and he could now see what was happening around him. Taking a closer look, he asked in confusion, "What's this?" It seemed like someone was approaching them. He called Donut to also look at the expanded map of the dungeon area. It seemed there was a person there. But upon closer inspection, the boy realized that in front of him was the corpse of Level 3 researcher Rebecca. Carl's face fell. He sighed heavily. They were too late. The girl was already dead. There were no living people nearby. A message came from the system that for advancing up the career ladder and killing the first boss, they receive a bronze boss chest. Donut snorted in displeasure. Why only bronze? It was not an easy fight at all. She was even scared. An expanded map of the first floor of the dungeon also fell on the disgruntled cat's nose. Throwing the card off her face, Donut grumbled. She thinks that she deserves at least the legendary boss chest. Carl, without looking away, looked at the red cross that marked the dead girl. What a pity. She was already dead. Apparently she went to rest or open chests and died right next to the safe room. What a shame. She didn't quite make it. Donut suggested searching the dead girl's body. Maybe she had something valuable, but Carl replied that it was too early. Her killer could be nearby. Looking at the map, he said that they were not far from the guild. It was better to go take a rest and open their chests. Carl also really wanted to chat with Guildmaster Mordecai about everything he had seen here. Soon, Carl and Donut found themselves near a door marked Beginner's Guild, which would take them to Mordecai. Entering the familiar room, the researchers saw that the Guildmaster was sleeping, and next to him stood a whole battery of empty bottles. Mordecai clutched to his chest a portrait of the same Skywing that he had shown Carl at their first meeting. The guy cursed. It seemed the Guildmaster was tormented by his inner demons and was trying to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Carl started shaking the leader of the newbie guild until he woke him up. Mordecai was embarrassed to be caught like that. Waking up from his sleep, Mordecai fell into his chair and began to tell the story of how there were 6 main types of bosses in the dungeon. They vary in strength and size. There are local bosses, district bosses, city bosses, regional bosses, country bosses, and floor bosses. There are also elite, super strong ones, but it's too early for them to worry about them. They won't meet them very soon. Carl asked. So they killed the easiest boss? Donut couldn't believe that they fought the easiest boss. Mordecai grabbed his head. How loudly they speak. Yes, it was the easiest, the guy asked. And which side is easy? The Guildmaster reassured him. In fact, even against bosses like these, researchers usually go in a large crowd. Looking into the bottle, Mordecai said that such things have certain rules, and that they would meet other bosses at the premiere. By the way, to watch the premiere, they need to find a safe room. Donut said that now she will open the chests, and then they will go straight away. The cat sighed in disappointment. She received a whole bunch of torches again, but she didn't need them. She was a cat and could see in the dark. Carl asked Mordecai if it was normal that he got like 15 achievements and 7 boxes in just one fight. The Guildmaster replied that it was unusual to receive a legendary crate at the entrance, but the first 3 floors were designed specifically to be filled with loot, achievements, and skills for beginners. Donut dove into the pile of torches to see if there was anything truly valuable underneath. The cat exclaimed joyfully. She found a book of spells. Now she will study it in a moment. The fluffy princess sat down in front of the spellbook and began to absorb the magical information contained within. But as soon as she mastered it, Donut's face lengthened. It was clear that she did not like the acquired skill. Mordecai morally advised the cat to make it a habit to read the description before using something. Carl asked what it was. The cat grumbled. One stupid spell, the Guildmaster objected. It's a very useful spell. It's called Torch. It creates a ball of light that follows her. The more she uses it, the stronger it becomes. The guy stroked the upset cat and said, "This is a really great spell." She sighed in displeasure. Having activated the menu, Carl decided to see what he got there. Perhaps there was something useful. The guy received the Iron Fist skill at level 3 and spiked cestises to protect his hands and increase damage to boot. Carl opened the received bronze boss chest, silver goblin chest, and gold crowd control chest. The boxes contained a lot of useful things. Among other things, the guy became the owner of the spirit armor spell. His supply of dynamite sticks was replenished. He now had a spare gas lighter, and he also received a large bag of gunpowder. Carl liked the magical spiked knee pads of the Shadow Knoll Brawler, and the scrolls of confusing fog, in case he had to run away. The iron skin potion also seemed useful. I'll have to drink it before the next boss fight. He decided to put on the magical spiked knee pads right away, just in case. You never know who they might meet along the way. At the same moment, knee pads appeared on Carl's legs, adding damage reflection to all armor he was wearing. The spikes could extend, and this item also cancels all impulse attacks. A useful thing overall. Mordecai told Carl that his spellbook was indeed good, but it required 5 mana points, and he only had 3 right now. The Guildmaster advised him not to rush to use it until he had decided on a build, or maybe give it to the princess. Donut exclaimed that she would take it. Carl grinned. She doesn't even know what kind of spell it is, but she already wants to take it. The spirit armor spell surrounds the body with pillars of light, offering little protection from physical attacks, but virtually negating incoming magical damage. This spell also provides temporary immunity to mind control, and provides illumination and a mystical effect. After reading the description of the spell, Carl decided that he would keep this thing for now, and then we would see. Donut lowered her head sadly. She really liked all sorts of magical things. They really attracted the cat to them. Mordecai said about the explorer's corpse. The mobs can certainly loot it, but they can't get into her inventory. There really could be something valuable there. Carl and Donut returned to the room that was in charge of Tally. The cat rubbed itself affectionately against the little keeper, just as the premiere of the World of Dungeon Explorer Earth began. The presenter said that the herd instinct initially sharply reduced people's chances of survival in the dungeon. Looking at the mass murder of Earthlings, Carl whispered, "Many people were simply beaten like dumb cattle." The showman smiled cheerfully, "But those who survived were among the lucky ones. They will become real explorers." One group of Earthlings even managed to kill the district boss, which certainly speaks of their strength and promising abilities. These researchers were able to equip themselves well, train themselves, and organize themselves into a well-coordinated team. There are other successful teams that manage not only to survive, but also to kill many monsters and increase their level. The monsters had a hard time meeting such fighting Earthlings, and many monsters were brutally killed. The show's host congratulated the new dungeon explorers on their first victories over bosses and regular monsters. Carl and Donut watched the footage of various battles between Earthlings and monsters, but they were not among the heroes. They recalled their numerous encounters with hordes of vile sprinkler roaches spitting green poison. The first battle with the evil goblins, which almost cost them their lives due to the explosion of the goblin death machine. And of course, the giant cockroaches that attacked Carl while he was strangling the cockroach trash boss with a chain. Suddenly, the broadcast of the premiere was interrupted. Black stripes ran across the screens, and viewers looked at the screens in confusion. The broadcast has been restored, but now an advertisement for this season's main sponsor, the Borant Corporation, has reappeared. Donut indignantly asked, "Is that really all?" Their epic battle wasn't even shown. This is an unforgivable disgrace. The dungeon explorers looked up and saw a hologram of Cascadia, who exclaimed that the guys had done a great job. The general producer reported that 15 district and 1,500 regional bosses were killed today. There was also a duet of risk-taking explorers, Donut whispered. "It's probably he who wants to tell about them." But it turned out that the duo had run into the city boss, and their end was quite predictable. They died heroically. The cat's face became sad, contrary to her expectations. No one noticed their team. They were not shown on the news. Bad. The news ended. Carl and Donut decided to go and look at the body of the recently killed female researcher. The boy's bare feet were already habitually stomping on the stone slabs of the first floor of the World Dungeon. Cascadia calmly reported that the number of human research casualties did not exceed the expected value. He announced several patch notes that fixed the ability to kill mobs by moving them to your inventory. Listening to the messages from the general producer of this season of World of Dungeon Explorers, they approached the body. Cascadia reported that a bug with the bathroom has also been fixed. If you open the door and someone else walks in, they will no longer explode. The producer added that while they are flattered by the Earthlings' creativity, all vulnerabilities will be patched. So don't get carried away. Carl smiled. The aliens studied them and did not think that the first thing people would do would be to try to break their entire system, such as human nature. Suddenly he heard Cascadia tell him to now go where he was in such a hurry and kill. The guy suddenly stood rooted to the spot. The picture he saw was terrible. He spoke in confusion. This can't be. Donut also stopped in horror and looked in confusion at the torn and naked girl. Everything around was covered in the blood of the murdered dungeon explorer. She didn't even have any underwear left on her. The system informed Carl that Level 3 researcher Rebecca had been killed by researcher Frank Q, leaving her with only an apple core. The guy was confused about what could have made one person kill another. Could it really have been a simple robbery? Looking closely at the body, Carl noticed that there was a gaping bullet wound in Rebecca's chest, meaning she had been shot with a firearm. The cat gasped, "My God, it seems that this Frank Q cannot be considered a good person, since he did such a thing." Carl glanced at the minimap, but there were no other blue dots, meaning there were definitely no human dungeon explorers nearby. I wonder if it is possible to hide yourself from others on the minimap. Carl didn't know the answer to this question, but perhaps there is such a way. He grabbed his head. "Oh my God, here we have another headache. Why did they even come here?" Donut carefully approached the body of the murdered girl, and suddenly she said, "Maybe this Frank is not a person at all. Perhaps this cruel killer cocker spaniel. The cat couldn't stand these nasty, noisy dogs." Now Donut was absolutely sure this was definitely the work of some vicious cocker spaniel. Carl also approached the body. He objected to his furry companion. He said, "There is definitely a bullet wound here. It is the work of a man." But Donut didn't back down. Maybe this dog had a gun with him and he shot the poor defenseless girl. The cat noticed that if she had a weapon in her inventory, she would also shoot, especially at the nasty, disgusting dogs. Carl looked at Donut in surprise. Mordecai said that her inventory works differently. She can even open the door with it. The guy told the cat that she couldn't use a firearm, so it wasn't a cocker spaniel. Donut narrowed her eyes. Carl just underestimated what these dogs were capable of. He asked with a smile if it was because of Angel that she was so angry. One day, Beatrice's friend came to visit them with her dog, and the dog rushed after the frightened cat. Donut remembered very well how she climbed to the very top of her house and hissed, and the dog pissed on the floor in contempt. The cat snorted and asked not to say that name in front of her. Carl stroked Donut and said that they needed to be careful. He asked the cat not to tell anyone what equipment they had. No one could know until they joined their group. Donut sighed. Carl probably forgot. They are in a dungeon full of killer cockroaches and drug-dealing llamas. That's why some oaf with a gun doesn't scare her. And he shouldn't scare Carl either. He's probably a coward since he attacked a girl. The cat was sure that they had to track down and punish this murderer who had raised his hand against a person and even robbed her. Carl wasn't afraid of the killer researcher at all. He was just a vile, cowardly bastard with a gun, and that's it. A daredevil wouldn't attack a girl. He remembered how his stepfather had once pressured him. He had told the teenager that Carl was a bully and a hooligan, and that was why no one liked him. And it was precisely because the young man was so bad that his own mother left him that Carl hunched over from these painful words. The grown man grabbed the boy by the head, and looking at him angrily, said that Carl shouldn't like him at all. But despite this, the little bastard Carl should respect him, because he is an adult and strong, unlike the kid. Seeing that the guy was lost in his thoughts and frowned, Donut hastened to bring her companion back to reality. He stroked the cat's soft, silky fur and said that Donut was essentially right. They should track down and punish the villain. I wonder who this woman is, and what she was doing in this corridor at 2:30 in the morning. They will probably never know. Judging by the expression in her wide, dead eyes, she was very scared, and perhaps the attack came as a surprise to her. Carl remembered the system's message that she had been killed by researcher Frank Q. Yes, to survive that, and be killed by another person. Someone had already searched and robbed this girl's body, taking everything she had, but leaving this fucking apple core as a mockery. Frowning, Carl told his furry companion that he wanted to find this Frank Q and punish him for betraying the man. Donut, hearing this, became worried. Was Carl really not afraid of this guy? Seriously, without jokes and showing off. Carl furrowed his thick eyebrows. A stubborn expression appeared on his face, and he firmly replied that he was not afraid of him. The cat noticed that her companion was a complete psycho, and they needed to stay as far away from him and his kind as possible. The guy jumped in surprise and stared at Donut in amazement. 2 seconds ago, she had said that the oaf with a gun didn't scare her. The cat snorted. Then she thought that Carl was scared. But she did not expect that he had already managed to become Charles Bronson from Death Wish. The guy was extremely surprised how the Donut knew about all this. She explained that the owners always left the TV on when they left for work. Beatrice kept the Home Improvement channel on, and Carl kept the channel that played the A-Team and Bronson movies non-stop. Carl smiled, picked up the cat and stroked her affectionately. He asked her not to worry and promised that they would act carefully. Suddenly a dark screen appeared in front of the guy. It turned out to be a researcher's chat. Carl typed a message to Donut that if necessary they would use the chat to communicate with each other. Donut was absolutely thrilled with this new opportunity. She sent the message again, like they were spies on a secret mission. Having figured out the functionality, Carl discovered that it would be possible to type in the chat without using his hands if he disabled the keyboard input function. Donut was happy. It meant the guy would stop shaking his fingers in the air like a fool. He remembers how she feels about shaking. Having figured out how the chat worked, the guy clicked on the map. He decided to wander around the area for now, since they now had a large map. They can deal with the remaining red dots, because they need all the experience they can easily get here. And then, as soon as the door to the next floor opens, they'll head to the stairs to hunt for the killer researcher Frank Q. Thanks to her acquired skills, Donut could easily hover in the air and fire magical projectiles at enemies from a safe distance. The researchers encountered several aggressive rats with sharp claws along the way, but the cat easily dealt with them. Carl said that because of the use of magic projectiles, Donut runs out of mana very quickly. She should use Cleave. The cat replied sheepishly that she had never done anything like that before, so she had no idea how to use it. What if the enemy hit her back? The thought sent goosebumps down Donut's fluffy back and his eyes widened in horror. She doesn't want that, she sighed, looked at Carl and quietly admitted that she was very afraid that she might get hurt. This confession really surprised the guy. How Ponchik manages to be so lively, even aggressive and timid at the same time. But a cat simply cannot control its instincts. Just a few generations ago, its kind were wild tigers stalking prey in the jungle. Carl took the cat in his arms, saying that he knew its pedigree, that nothing had changed for several generations, and that there were no tigers there. And Donut's uncle was also her grandfather. The cat looked around and said that they had already been here. The guy recognized this place. From here they entered the dungeon and accepted the first battle. Here they met the guildmaster Mordecai. The cat wouldn't mind killing a few more goblins, but she didn't think the stairs to the next floor would be placed so close to the edge of the map. She reminded Carl of the diagram shown in the show. Each floor of the dungeon is smaller than the previous one. Maybe they should move east. The boy smiled and told his furry companion not to worry. He had a plan to find the stairs. He looked at the map. They were surrounded by red dots on all sides, which meant there were 3 enemy squads around them. The frightened cat, looking at the map, told Carl in a trembling voice that there were a lot of goblins here. They wouldn't be able to cope with them. And indeed, soon a whole crowd of green goblins jumped out of the 3 arches. The monsters surrounded the dungeon explorers. The sound of motorcycles could be heard. The goblin engineers, their sharp teeth snapping angrily, were riding towards the enemy on iron horses. Donut pressed herself against Carl's shoulder and asked fearfully what they were going to do. But the guy was surprisingly calm. A motorcycle with 3 goblins was already approaching the researchers. One of the green fighters was preparing a club with a pineapple for an attack. The fur on the back of Donut's neck stood on end. In a few more seconds, the wave of goblins would overwhelm them, and Carl hadn't even drawn his weapon. Suddenly, the young man raised his left hand with a green goblin tattoo and shouted loudly at the advancing enemies to stop. Carl had a goblin pass on his forearm, which he had received in the first battle, and now he could move freely around this area. The green goblins hissed indignantly at the man with the goblin mark. Now they could not tear him into small pieces. The motorcycle, which was flying straight towards the dungeon explorers, braked sharply and stopped in front of Carl and Donut. The guy looked calmly at the small, evil green monsters. No matter how much they clicked their teeth, they couldn't touch them anymore. The sudden braking caused parts to fall out of the motorcycle. It seemed the green goblins didn't use the brake system very often. Having jumped off the motorcycle, the goblins decided to confer about what to do. Carl did not understand a word, but stood calmly and waited. He breathed a sigh of relief. The tattoo had worked. Now the goblins weren't shown as enemies on his minimap. Their color was neutral. Finally, one of the goblins approached Carl and, frowning, asked where the man got this goblin pass mark. The guy knew that this question would definitely be asked when meeting the goblins, and he had been preparing an answer for a long time. But suddenly Donut intervened in the conversation. She said that they blew up their nasty tractor, and the brains of 3 of their friends were smeared on the cobblestones. She waved her paw to the side, saying, "They are a little further away, in this area. Suddenly they want to scrape their remains off the floor." Carl whispered a curse at the cat and said that he would be the one doing the talking. What was she talking about? They would turn her into cat meat now. Hearing the cat's answer, the goblin hissed angrily, baring his sharp wedge-shaped teeth. How dare she mock him? But literally the next second, the green monster's eyes lit up, his muzzle turned pink, and he looked at Donut with admiration. Carl reminded the cat that he actually had the tattoo with protection, and she good-naturedly patted him on the head with her tail. Winking, Donut replied, "But she has 37 charisma points, and now let Carl watch carefully." Jumping off the guy's shoulder, the cat approached the goblin and, calling him Sunshine, asked him to answer a few of her questions. The goblin, enchanted, looked at the strange furry creature with a shining tiara on his head. She asked what his name was. The green monster was confused. It turns out he didn't have a name. These goblins were considered lower creatures, and they only had roles. Donut purred. What a pity. But this is so inconvenient. She will have to fix the situation and come up with names for these creatures. Standing on her hind legs, she told her first interlocutor that from now on she would call him Bachelor. The cat, purring loudly, named the second goblin, who was sitting behind the wheel of the crumbling motorcycle, Morda. The third green goblin enchanted by Donut also received a name. From now on, everyone will have to call him Murdoch. The 3 young goblin fighters looked at each other in confusion. They felt very strange and did not understand anything. Donut whispered to her companion why they had come here at all. Carl whispered that he needed the goblins to do something for him. The cat tenderly asked the bachelor's darling to take her and Carl to their goblin engineers and inventors of various gadgets. Most likely, these are the gentlemen who wear kitchen utensils on their heads. Donut remembered the evil creature that was chasing her. The goblin bachelor stuttered as he told the cat that he would do whatever the ma'am wished, and turned to show the explorers the way. But Donut stopped him. She didn't like the way her new admirer was addressing her at all. These goblins were completely ill-mannered. She fluffed up her fur, raised her tail like a pipe, trying with her whole appearance to show importance and charm at the same time. Turning to the goblins, the cat, frowning, declared that she was not ma'am, she was Princess Donut, and demanded that they call her that. Turning to the bachelor, she asked if he understood. The goblin stuttered and mumbled that he understood everything. Not hearing her title, the cat bristled and hissed menacingly. The frightened goblin hastened to answer, Okay, Princess Donut. The squad of goblins obediently moved towards their lair. Carl asked the cat what the hell that was. Did she really know that everything would turn out like this? Donut reminded me about her stats. It's simple. Mordecai said that her charisma would influence the creatures in the dungeon. There are also certain limitations. The cat's charisma affects the inhabitants of the dungeon if their icons are not red, if they are not bosses and not higher level. When they fit the conditions, Donut can control them. She smiled contentedly. She really liked it. The goblin engineers, with cooking ladles on their heads, turned to face the strangers. The presence of the female greatly disturbed them. But Donut's charisma did its job. The green monsters looked at her with oily eyes, ready to do anything. Mordecai had once told her that on the first 4 or 5 floors, she would be able to convince every creature to obey her. Before the Seekers stood a level 5 goblin bombard, an expert in explosives that could strike with destructive force even at long range. Even his fellow goblins looked at the bombard with apprehension, because he always had bombs in his hands that he could throw. The explosives expert looked at Carl suspiciously, like everyone else. He was puzzled why the man had a goblin pass. Having learned that strangers had appeared in the lair, a 7th-level goblin shaman headed towards the researchers of the world dungeon. The goblin shaman is the most revered class in this species, coming immediately after the chieftain and warlord and specializing in torment magic. To graduate from the shaman university, goblin mages must fulfill 2 of 3 mandatory conditions. First of all, they must have sex. This condition is usually fulfilled by everyone first and with great pleasure. The second condition is that graduates must know how to cook, at least to properly brew potions, and maybe even food. The third condition is that they must eat their own parents, in which way the shamans are free to choose for themselves. After completing all the training requirements, young female students receive shaman diplomas and are sent to serve in their clans. Most female students and future shamans do not choose to learn to cook, preferring to eat their parents. Approaching the guests, the shaman looked at them carefully and said that the cat could read, but humans were not welcome here. The guy said he wanted to buy a motorcycle from them. They would have to travel a lot, and he hoped the goblins would help with this. The shaman growled, "Man is a stupid, dirty semblance of a monkey. Does he really think that the truth can just appear here?" Here Donut intervened in the conversation, calling the shamanka darling, and everything began to swim and sparkle before her eyes. Pleased with the effect obtained, the cat, purring, suggested to the shaman that they discuss everything again, but she was unable to resist. Ponchik said that she understood what the shaman was trying to achieve with her look. It looked like she wanted to emphasize her cheekbones, but she overdid it, and her face ended up looking like a sponge scraper. But that shaman who was walking towards them didn't start shoving so many pieces of iron into her face. The cat looked closely at another representative of the goblin shaman class, who was heading towards the guests. Donut wrinkled her nose. My God, she's wearing such a plain bone necklace. A respected shaman could wear something brighter. But the cat decided to talk about the second one later. For now, she needed to win over the first, more aggressive shaman. Donut asked the green girl if it was all because she was forced to eat her parents at university. The goblin didn't expect this question. Her eyes widened, her ugly face twitched. She remembered her parents. Suddenly her nose wrinkled and her eyes filled with tears. Carl was stunned. Could goblins really cry? The shamanka fell to her knees next to Donut and burst into tears. Yes, that's why there was so much metal in her face. The second shaman heard the cat's remark about her necklace and was about to hit her with a staff with a pineapple. But it was enough for Donut to look into the goblin's eyes and her expression changed dramatically. The cat named the shamans Rory and Lorelei, and now they both cried, remembering their parents eaten alive. Donut asked Rory if she could help them buy the big thing her friend was talking about. The shamanka replied that they couldn't just give away the killdozers. They were very valuable. The leader would kill them for such arbitrariness. But she can make them a human-sized bike with a stroller, which is better than walking through the dungeon on foot. Rory pointed to the motorcycle in the corner that the goblins were racing around the floor on as an example of a means of transportation. Stroking the purring cat, the shaman said that this would not be for free. The person must give her something in return. Carl opened his inventory, wondering what he could offer as payment to the green goblin shamans. He had a lot of gadgets there, of course, but he needed almost all of them for himself. And then he remembered the amphetamine that he had taken from the llama they had killed, and gave a couple of packets of the drug to the goblins. Having taken the drugs, the shamans asked if this was really all he had. A couple of packets of this stuff would clearly not be enough. That's all the llama they were supposed to trade with had, Carl cursed. Maybe she was a friend of the goblins. Lorelei tried the resulting amphetamine. She immediately realized that it was made in the dungeon. The person did not bring it from outside. Frowning, the shaman angrily asked the guy where he got it from, where he could have gotten the local drugs. Carl was confused. He understood that it was dangerous to admit to killing the bad llama. The goblins and the llama could be partners. The guy stubbornly said that he would tell the goblins everything in detail about these drugs after they got their bike. Rory doubted whether she should agree to such strange conditions. The man was behaving very dubiously and suspiciously. Standing on her hind legs, Donut smiled and told Rory to agree. They would tell her everything about this amphetamine. Pink flashes danced in the shaman's eyes again. The cat's charisma had an infallible effect on the goblins. While tossing the drug packets, she said with a smile that they had agreed that the researchers would soon receive their bike. The shamanka barked at the engineers to get to work, those lazy bastards, and quickly put together a new motorcycle. Having given the order to the goblins, Rory again approached the furry guest and carefully sat down on the floor next to her. Donut immediately jumped onto the shaman's lap and began to purr loudly. She looked at the cat as if enchanted. Rory carefully stroked Donut's soft and tender body, and the cat, curled up into a ball, continued to purr musically. Suddenly the cat raised her large golden eyes to the shaman. She caught the thoughts of the still young Rory. Donut turned to her, placed her soft paws on the shaman's chest, and looked at her questioningly. Finally, the cat asked her if she really wanted to go with them to explore the world underground, if that was possible. Hearing this, Carl was stunned and stared at the shaman. He had always believed that goblins were sworn enemies of people and could not work together. The goblin shaman was very surprised that the cat was able to recognize her secret thoughts. For a second she was confused. Rory sighed heavily and hung her head. She really wanted to go with Donut. She really liked the cat. She looked tenderly at the cat and stroked her soft fur, sighing. Rory replied that she could not go with them. The shaman cannot abandon the chief, even though he is terrible and soft-hearted. But he is still the leader of her large clan. The Goblin clan is a large, noisy, multivocal family of Rory, and the chief is the head of this huge family. But even if Shaman Rory could go with Donut and Carl, she wouldn't be able to leave this floor. As soon as the green goblins on the first floor start to descend the stairs, they will immediately die, killed by the dungeon. Carl leaned forward, which meant Rory knew how everything worked here. The shamanka sighed. She knew enough, and knew that they were on the first floor. The guy asked Rory if she knew what would happen in a couple of days, and the shaman replied that this floor would collapse. Rory added that she knew everything perfectly well. She also knew that if the floor collapsed, only the researchers would die here, and the goblins, as well as the other inhabitants of the world dungeon on this floor, will simply fall asleep during the destruction. The shamanka obediently lowered her eyes. Carl realized that she and her people had experienced something similar many times, and had come to terms with it. She said that when the next dungeon opens in the new world conquered by the Syndicate, they will wake up again, and there will be another day here, and life in the Green Goblin clan will continue for another week until the next destruction of the dungeon. But Rory also knew that if they did a good job of killing new dungeon explorers, they would be promoted. The shaman thoughtfully stroked the purring cat and continued her story about the order in the world underground. All goblins know that one day they will wake up on the floor below, which will mean that they are one step closer to freedom. The organizers of the bloody show will order them to kill researchers on the second floor and become better and stronger at it. Only by killing the explorers of the world's dungeon can the members of the shaman Rory's family earn their own freedom. They must be ruthless, bloodthirsty, and sophisticated. Only then will they and their children survive in this world. According to the concept of the world dungeon, green goblins are nimble, resourceful, and strong villains, enemies of explorers. Rory dreamed that one day they would be so deep that explorers would never reach it, and that's when they would find peace. She stroked Ponchik and dreamed that they would have peace, and a place where they could live and reproduce without worries, and give their babies a childhood. The shamanka hoped that someday her kind would be able to stop thinking about killing researchers for the sake of their own survival. Meanwhile, in the hangar of the Green Goblin engineers, work was in full swing. The craftsmen were assembling a bike for Carl and Donut. The mechanics, on Rory's orders, quickly assembled the body, screwed on parts, tightened, adjusted, and tinkered. The welder walked along the hull with his machine, welding joints where necessary and checking for leaks. Soon the three-wheeled contraption was ready. A third wheel for a cat stroller was added to the regular motorcycle. The bike was the favorite combat vehicle of the Goblin bombards. Although it was not the most reliable or safe method of transportation, one of the Goblin engineers approached the finished motorcycle and decided to test its functionality by pressing one of the levers. At that very moment, the steering wheel and control system fell to the floor with a crash. The mechanics' faces stretched out. What a disaster. Carl looked at the assembled contraption with displeasure. It wouldn't take long to kill yourself on a bike like that, even on the narrow roads of the dungeon. Gathering the Goblin engineers who were busy making the bike, Donut ordered them to make it bigger and paint it purple. The work began to boil with renewed vigor, inspired by the cat's charisma. The goblins disassembled and reassembled the motorcycle with astonishing speed. Soon, a shining purple three-wheeled dungeon transport appeared before the astonished eyes of those present. The bike was ready, and Rory demanded that Carl, as agreed, tell her where he got the amphetamine. Ponchik, jumping into a fluffy cat cradle in a bike, asked the shamanka if she was interested in those same drugs. They got them here, in the dungeon, in the neighboring district, across the road. The drugs were from a bad llama. The researchers shuddered as they recalled their encounter with a llama that spat molten lava at all its opponents. Rory growled. She knew that these cunning llama traders were hiding something from them. The shaman shouted for the fighters to gather. There was an incredible bustle in the lair. The shamans urged the goblin warriors on, giving them only 5 minutes to get ready. The gates swung open, and a goblin killdozer with fighters on board rolled out into the wide corridor. The rest mounted their bikes. The hangar was filled with smoke from the goblin combat vehicles, and no one paid any attention to the visiting researchers. Carl, who had been watching this hasty preparation with confusion, asked if they had provoked a drug war between the green goblins and the llamas. A few minutes later, only Carl and Donut, who had already settled into her place on the bike, remained in the goblin hangar. She purred contentedly that this was indeed the case, and that now the goblins and llamas would cruelly kill each other. Everything happened exactly as the cat had planned from the very beginning. Donut was incredibly pleased with herself. She asked Carl if he wanted to go and kill their leader. She could really use another boss box. The guy looked thoughtfully at the door from which both shamans were leaving. Most likely, that's where the tribe's leader was. It was very tempting to loot everything there was to find here, but something still held Carl back from opening that very door. Of course, they are all alone here now. They all went off to fight the drug-dealing llamas, but the leader may have his own security. Donut looked at her companion with a smile and asked if they would go and kill the leader of this tribe of green goblins. But Carl knew that they had no idea what was hidden behind that mysterious door, or what kind of enemy they would meet there. The goblins are much stronger than the sprinklers that guarded the trash boss Plushkin they fought. But even in that battle they had to strain themselves to emerge victorious, and there were countless cockroaches there. Moreover, Plyushkin turned out to be an Earth resident who had been disfigured by the show's organizers, which in itself was unpleasant. Carl then almost died trying to defeat the enemy without killing him. But unfortunately, this was no longer possible. And since the goblins themselves are stronger than cockroaches, that means their leader will also be many times stronger than Plyushkin. So, going there without knowing any information is very stupid. Carl clenched his fist. He didn't want to fight with the leader of the goblin tribe. It was even more vile to act in such a way after the goblins had helped them so much by assembling a bike with a sidecar for them. The guy sighed and lowered his head, saying that he did not want to go and kill the leader of this tribe, even though the rules of the show required it. The cat's eyes sparkled with excitement. She smiled and said that everything was working out just fine for them. She jumped happily on the side of the motorcycle and screamed that if they killed the goblin chieftain, it would just blow up the show's ratings. Carl walked around the large room where goblins were crafting all sorts of weapons and mechanisms, keeping an eye out for anything that might come in handy. The guy threw the items he liked into his inventory. The goblins had a lot of useful explosive gadgets here. The cat left her cozy cradle on the motorcycle and joined her companion. We need to prepare for an attack on the leader. Carl's attention was drawn to an explosive cart with 4 barrels filled with metal elements. This cart was equipped with a remote detonator that set this hellish mechanism of death into action. Carl and Donut peered cautiously out into the hallway to make sure the goblin clan hadn't returned home yet. The guy decided to first move the bike he got from the goblins into his inventory so he could quietly leave this place. Donut asked Carl if he thought Rory and Lorelei would be upset with her if they killed their clan leader. Lifting the heavy goblin thing, the guy replied that the shamans would probably be offended by it, since they trusted the cat so much. Finally, the bike was moved into inventory. Carl wiped the sweat from his forehead and added, Rory seemed to dislike the chief. The guy hoped that they would never know whether they were offended or not. A bike sign lit up in a special inventory compartment, and now Carl could get it from there at any moment. Looking at the cart, Donut asked if this was enough. The cat thought that this would not be enough for the goblin leader. Carl explained that black powder is not designed to cause damage with an explosion, but it does scatter metal well with the blast wave. So if the boss is there, they'll stuff him full of these pieces of iron? The guy doubted that the boss on the first floor was that strong. In any case, if this didn't kill him, Carl didn't know how else he could be defeated. The guy rolled the explosive cart up to the large doors behind which the goblin tribe leader was supposed to be. Carl asked the cat if she was ready. She tensed up, glowed with mana, and replied that she was ready. Donut ordered the doors to open, and they began to slowly swing open, letting Carl in with the deadly cart. The cat carefully peered inside the room. She needed to make sure that the huge leader of the goblin clan was here. Having seen everything she wanted, she whispered to Carl to roll the explosive cart with gunpowder inside. The boy pushed the cart with all his might, trying to speed it up as much as possible so that the leader couldn't stop it. The explosive cart jerked forward, the small wheels barely supporting the weight, pieces of rubber flying off them. Donut quickly jumped back to avoid getting hit by the wheels, and Carl accelerated the cart faster and faster. Jumping into the doorway, the guy pushed the cart with gunpowder forward as hard as he could into the dark room. He shouted to Donut to run away quickly. Otherwise, those who were guarding the leader of the goblin clan could chase after them. There was a noise, confused shouts and swearing coming from the room into which Carl had just pushed the explosive cart. Turning the corner, the boy asked the cat if she had seen the goblin clan leader in that room. Maybe they had pushed the cart there in vain. Donut confirmed on the run that yes, there was a very large, nasty, dirty goblin sitting there. Carl was pleased. It meant they had calculated everything and done it perfectly. He pulled out a remote detonator from his inventory. The cat stretched out on the cold floor tiles and groaned that she hated running. Her short, delicate paws were tired. She suddenly remembered that very tribal leader, whom they were now going to blow up in his own lair. Donut told Carl that when she looked into that big room, the chief was sitting in a huge chair and reading a book. The guy picked up the remote detonator, his thumb already resting on the red trigger button. The cat, rolling from side to side, told her companion to blow it up faster. We need to bomb this leader to glory. Carl pressed the red button, sending an explosion signal to the 4 barrels on that very deadly cart. And then the cat added that there were, of course, a bunch of children of different ages in the room with the leader, but they were goblins. The guy's face lengthened. He frowned and turned to Donut. He asked why she hadn't said this before. And then an explosion of incredible power thundered in the lair of the green goblins. Most likely this explosion destroyed everything. The fire from the explosion filled the entire long corridor leading to the goblin workshop where Carl had recently assembled his motorcycle. The guy staggered from the powerful blast wave that reached them, and Donut pressed herself to the floor. Pieces of ash and dust raised by the incredibly powerful explosion fell on Carl's black cloak, and the guy felt uneasy. He cursed, cursing at Donut. For the umpteenth time he was convinced of the amazing cruelty of this cute animal. And she, looking at him in surprise, asked in bewilderment what had happened, what Carl was so unhappy about, what was wrong. He asked the cat if there really were children in that room along with the leader of the Green Goblin clan. The cat calmly replied, "Well, yes, there was a whole crowd of them, from the smallest to almost teenagers, so what's the big deal?" Even though she only caught a glimpse of them, they were cute. Some of them in oversized jackets, just like Baby Yoda, so cute. But there, along with that huge goblin, there were not only children, there were also old goblins sitting there. And a little further off to the side there were also pregnant women, literally about to give birth. They all looked like a big goblin family. It was very interesting to look at them, especially the little ones, who were still so cute and not evil, unlike the adults. Some even had nipples, these green-eyed goblin babies, but they could grow up big and evil. Donut was sure that Carl had crushed one of those Yodas with a cart when he accelerated and pushed her inside. The cart was heavy, so that little one died quickly, without even needing an explosion. Carl listened to the cat and felt worse and worse. How could she be so amazingly heartless? There was not a drop of pity in her. Donut really didn't care at all about the murdered children, pregnant women, and old people of the goblin tribe. She asked her companion what his level was now. After blowing up the goblin lair, it should probably have increased. Carl still couldn't come to his senses, and the cat joyfully exclaimed that they were now both at level 8. Donut sighed. They probably won't be shown on the show. They probably won't show the battle stats either since they didn't fight the boss in his lair. The cat felt sorry for her. She thought it would be cool. The height of her dreams was to get into the news broadcast about the show. The guy grabbed his head and cursed again. If he had known about all this, he would never have pressed that damn button. He understood perfectly well that these were goblins. But children are always children, and pregnant women are defenseless. It's a complete disaster. Carl felt like an asshole who took the lives of defenseless creatures who had done nothing bad to him. Seeing the boy's torment, Donut reminded him that he was not here of his own free will, and besides, they were goblins after all. And what kind of terrible monster would stuff children into the boss's lair? Are they security? That's why they died along with the leader. She jumped onto Carl's shoulders and began to purr soothingly, trying to calm her overly conscientious companion. The researchers approached the entrance, which was littered with rubble, and the cat noted that they would definitely not be able to loot this lair. The guy said that they needed to get out of here quickly before the others returned. Otherwise, even the goblin's pass might not save them. Without waiting for trouble, Carl ran down the corridor to the nearest safe room, using the minimap as a guide. Donut, who was sitting on his shoulder, admitted that she really likes it when Carl blows up different things. The cat's eyes shone strangely, even bloodthirstily. After a short silence, she added that she really liked it. The guy silently glanced sideways at Donut, and once again thought that it would have been better if she hadn't eaten that enchanted cookie and had kept quiet. Finally, they found themselves on the threshold of a safe room, where there was no need to fear the revenge of enraged goblins. They entered an empty hall. For some reason the room's keeper was not visible. The guy cautiously entered the room. There was a plate of cookies on the counter. Donut, her eyes sparkling, asked if this was probably a treat for them. They should try it. A little further on in the display case, a large arrow indicated where the men's and women's restrooms were located. One of the stalls in the women's restroom was strangely lit. There was someone there, but he was trying to make sure no one noticed him. There was a man sleeping in the cabin. This was clear from his even, deep breathing. It was strange that he chose such an unusual place. It was definitely a dungeon explorer, but there were 3 skulls burning above his head, meaning he had killed 3 people. Carl and Donut walked over to the plate of cookies. They really could use some refreshment. The cat took the cookie and began to gnaw on it with gusto. The cookie turned out to taste quite acceptable. As soon as the cookie was eaten, Donut saw that she had gained experience points, and the cat jumped with delight. Carl also ate the cookie, and a notification about receiving additional experience appeared in front of him. The cat's muzzle lengthened. She snorted with displeasure that the guy stole her experience. It was so unfair. After all, she was the main one in their squad. Carl chuckled and reminded Donut that they were in the same group, so their experience was split equally. But the cat was unhappy. Jumping off her companion's shoulder, the cat ran to the plate of cookies, wanting to eat them all to gain more experience. She lowered her muzzle into the plate and began greedily gnawing on the magic cookies that give researchers experience. The boy calmly gnawed on a cookie, watching with a grin the greed of the ambitious and insatiable cat. Having eaten her fill, she opened her menu again and looked. Carl had swallowed the last piece and said that now they had an equal share. Jumping off the counter, Donut headed to the toilet, since they were in a safe room and there was no need to be afraid of anyone. Carl decided to look around here for now. He turned his head, hoping to see the keeper of the safe room. He also looked at the screens. There were 2 days and 12 hours left before the first floor collapsed, and the news show was supposed to air in 15 minutes. The screens also showed that there were just over 3.5 researchers left alive, and that someone was dying every second. Each explorer was also offered an experience cookie to eat, as they deserved it for being there. The guy was curious how many people had managed to find a safe place where they could hide until the stairs opened. How many will be able to sit quietly like this for the remaining 2 days without being torn apart by the monsters of this floor? Suddenly, Carl heard Donut's desperate cry. The cat was screaming that he was here, in the toilet. The guy couldn't understand what she was talking about. The cat ran into the room with its eyes wide with horror, and screamed in fear that he was sitting in the women's restroom. The guy asked the frightened cat who was sitting there, and she blurted out that the same researcher, the killer of Rebecca V, was there. The horrific image of a bloody murder appeared before Carl's eyes again, and now they met Frank Q. The guy immediately ran towards the toilets, from where his frightened furry companion had just flown out. Looking at the map, Carl was surprised when they came here. His point was definitely not on the map. He specifically looked to see if they were alone. It couldn't be a misunderstanding, since they found themselves in the dungeon. Carl has been watching the map almost constantly. It seems like this guy has some kind of ability to hide his presence. He can even fool the system. Seeing the toilet door opening, Carl braked sharply, a bristling cat standing next to his leg. An elderly man with tired but hard eyes, covered in stubble, came out into the corridor and waved his hand, apologizing. The system showed that the person in front of them was level 8 researcher Frank Q. He was covered in weapons and wearing a bulletproof vest. Q had a large battle axe on his shoulder and said he hadn't meant to scare the boy's little cat. 3 skulls were burning above Q's head. The system reported that 3 researchers had been killed by him. He asked with a smile. "Is it a cat?" Donut puffed up her face and growled menacingly at this man. He frightened her terribly with his calmness and armament. He explained to Carl that he thought that if he slept in the toilet, no one would be able to get to him, neither monsters nor people. The closer Frank Q got, the louder Donut hissed and growled, showing her small but very sharp teeth. Q said he didn't know the toilets in the safe areas were different from the ones in the dungeon passages. Looking at the guy standing in front of him, Frank asked Carl in surprise, "Where are his pants? Why is he looking like that? And where are his shoes?" he asked Carl in bewilderment. Had he really been walking around the dungeon barefoot all this time? And the researcher's name is strange. The system called him the Royal Protector Carl from Princess Donut's retinue. And the cat's name was the greatest dungeon champion, Princess Donut. the commander of Princess Donut's royal retinue. Carl noticed that this Frank Q spoke like a cop, or someone who was used to everyone obeying him unconditionally. The guy asked Q if he was currently sleeping in the women's restroom of this safe room, trying to hide from everyone. The man didn't answer right away. It all looked, to put it mildly, not very nice and somehow not quite manly. He replied, "Well, yes, that's true. He needs to rest somehow." No one had ever found him in such a shelter before. Carl said he didn't see Frank Q's dot on the minimap when they entered that safe room. "That's weird," he answered. "Probably because he slept in a safe zone, probably done to protect the researchers." Frank Q took another step towards Carl, and Donut turned into a hissing, growling ball with teeth and a tiara. Q asked if they were from Seattle too. He almost returned to the place where he went down into the dungeon, but he still couldn't find the descent to the second floor. Suddenly Donut hissed and growled and shouted at Frank Q that he was a damned murderer. He had killed the girl Rebecca V. Q's face fell as he stared at the hissing ball of fur, unable to believe that she could speak. Finally he cursed. He thought that it seemed so to him in his sleep, but it's actually true. Who would have thought? The man looked at the raging Donut and was surprised. "Wow, a talking cat. What else can you see here?" He closed his eyes and muttered, "I could go nuts in this godforsaken place. Not only are there monsters all around, but also this." Q asked Carl if he had known the murdered Rebecca Wong before everything happened, or if he had met her here. Donut screamed that Frank Q confessed to the murder. The criminal confessed. He is not hiding what he did. The cat said that she was going to fire a magic projectile at him, but Carl warned her that this could not be done in the safe room. Realizing what the cat was about to do, Frank Q raised his hand and asked Donut to stop. Perhaps she had misunderstood. He said everything is not as it seems. He had no other choice. If they knew Rebecca, then he apologizes. Carl said that they didn't know her before the tragedy or in the dungeon. They just found her body in the corridor. Q looked at them strangely, just in case he took the axe off his shoulder and could strike at any moment. He said that there were 5 attackers. His partner killed 1, Frank killed 3, and some unknown thing killed the 5th. This was the first living person Carl had come across, even if he was lying. The guy wanted to hear what he had to say. Carl asked if Q's partner was also hiding in the toilet, but the man replied that he was alone now. The guy suggested continuing the conversation in front of the TV. He didn't want to miss the news from this damn show. Their lives depended on it. Moving to the common room, Carl asked Frank Q what had happened to his partner, and where he was now. Taking a cookie from the plate to increase his experience, the man replied that his partner was dead. She had been shot. He crunched on a cookie, involuntarily interrupting his story. An oppressive silence hung in the room. Everyone felt the tension. Finally, Frank Q added that his partner had been shot by Rebecca Wong, and now it was just him and his trusty axe. After listening to the man's story, Carl said meaningfully that everything was clear. The guy did not take his eyes off the researcher. Everyone in the safe zone was staring at each other, and the guy was watching Q's expression very carefully, and he was trying to understand what impression his chatter had made on the boy. A predatory expression flashed in Frank Q's gaze. Donut sat on Carl's shoulder, looking with her big yellow eyes at Frank Q, who was hung with weapons. The show's host announced that they would next show a wonderful bloody battle with the local boss. A whole horde of brave explorers of the world's underground from planet Earth came to fight him. The cat finally managed to go to the toilet and flew into the common room, hearing the voice of the host of the show World of Dungeon Explorers. Jumping up on the counter, she exclaimed in disappointment that they had missed the start of the show's news broadcast. The cat turned to Frank Q and snorted at him. It was all his fault because he was such a jerk he was sleeping in the toilet. Carl sensed that Q was preparing to attack them, which meant the guy needed to act very, very carefully. The only exit from the safe zone is also the entrance through which he and Donut entered. Carl asked Frank Q if he had seen the latest episode of the show, as they had been delayed and hadn't been able to see what it was. He replied that he had seen it and recounted to the guy in detail the contents of the previous news broadcast, who had been recognized and why. There is also a safe room 5 kilometers from here, where Frank Q was able to watch the previous episode of the show. The man gripped the edge of the counter tightly, tensing like an animal about to pounce, choosing the right moment to attack. Carl noticed this movement and was convinced of his suspicions. This scoundrel was going to kill and rob them, like the rest of the people. This man's entire appearance was tinged with cruelty. Most likely, before all these events, he was a common criminal. The guy asked Frank Q to tell him how he got into the dungeon and how he managed to survive when everything collapsed. And on the screen was the most popular show in the universe, World of Underground Explorers, where Earthlings were killed by the thousands for the amusement of the public. Q involuntarily looked to the right and up. He was making things up, Carl realized. Frank had said that he and his partner were working at customs at the time, Q means they worked for immigration and customs enforcement, and judging by Frank's behavior, that could be true. While the man spoke, the screen showed a bloody battle between human explorers and a giant rhinoceros boss. Frank said they'd been monitoring a warehouse for a while, trying to disrupt a Chinese human trafficking operation. The man lowered his head and said that when it all started, they found themselves there, but not alone, but with those same bandits. 15 bandits at that very moment decided to leave the building for a smoke break, and that's how they were saved. But the rest disappeared. He and his partner involuntarily exposed themselves and were fired upon. But then an entrance to a dungeon opened right under their feet. Many bandits fell right there, unexpectedly finding themselves in this terrible place. But there was nowhere to go. They had to go. Among the 15 bandits who attacked them near the warehouse was Rebecca Wong, whom he killed. This graceful and pretty girl at first glance was the leader of their gang, the worst of the worst criminals. Frank Q said that the time they encountered each other in the hallway, she shot him 3 times, and only then did he respond. He shot back and immediately hit her right in the heart. He didn't feel sorry for her, because people like her are always a threat. Pressing his hand to his heart, the man admitted that he thought he was going to die from his wounds because he was bleeding. Continuing his story, he admitted that he had searched her body. Frank Q did not take his cunning eyes off Carl. The man chuckled, saying that he searches every world dungeon explorer he kills for loot. Carl stood near the exit from the safe zone, and from there talked with Frank Q, carefully pretending to be a simpleton. The boy had long understood the man's plan, but Carl had learned Mordecai's lesson well, and had figured out how he and the cat could escape. Q had already made up his mind. His ally was somewhere nearby, and was just waiting for his signal so that they could attack together. Finishing his story, Q said that his partner Maggie grabbed one, and the other decided to escape. Frank expected to die, but surprisingly quickly healed. Meanwhile, the big screen showed the boss dealing with a large group of researchers, blood flowing like a river. Q said that he once saw a giant monster crawl out of some pod and simply devour a man. The bloody battle on the screen was coming to an end. The boss was wounded, but there were almost no more dungeon explorers left who had attacked him. In the end, the giant monster fell dead among the bloody corpses of people, and the system declared a draw. And Frank Q continued to tell how he found a guild for newcomers, and then tried to survive in this monstrous world. He assured his interlocutor that he had run out of ammunition long ago, so now he was using a battle axe. Donut, touched by Frank Q's fictitious story, stood up on her hind legs and looked sympathetically into the killer's face. She purred to the man what a poor thing he was, how hard it had been for him, and what a good fellow he was for being able to get out of it. The cat said that the story of his deceased partner Maggie brought tears to her eyes. The killer looked with distrust at the cat reaching out to him. Being a liar, he himself did not trust a single word of others. But realizing that the cat had fallen for his crude lie, he broke into a satisfied smile and thanked her for her sympathy. Carl asked Q if, since he was searching those guys, he might have some pants or shoes that fit the guy's size. The man looked at Carl doubtfully. Was this guy really such an idiot, or was he just pretending? But there was no point. Frank laughed dryly and cheerfully answered the guy. Of course, he would have something. It was not proper for a man to walk around like that. Carl thanked Q with a smile. So far everything was going exactly as the guy planned. Now he needed to warn Donut. He discreetly sent the cat a message in the chat, telling her not to say anything or shout, but just to read the messages. Donut's expression immediately changed. She wrote in the chat what happened. She was already getting scared. Carl thought it was good that Q wasn't paying attention to her. He again asked the cat not to write in caps. It was annoying. Q narrowed his eyes like a cat who has spotted prey, his whole body tensing, his predatory gaze never leaving his potential victims. The guy warned the cat that Frank was going to attack them, but she should not react or resist in any way. This is important. Whatever happens, Donut shouldn't shoot magic missiles. Let them do what they want. The cat should trust him. The cat was puzzled, because Frank was an American hero, Carl replied. Q was a piece of shit. He was pulling the wool over their eyes. There was someone else hiding nearby, ready to attack them, so the cat should get ready to run away. Donut's fluffy ears drooped sadly, and she wrote to Carl that she didn't like all of this at all. Taking out a pair of bloody trousers from his inventory, Frank Q said, "These are the largest pair of trousers he has in stock." He threw the pants to the guy, adding that he had another pair of shoes, but the size was not written. Carl thanked his interlocutor. One glance at these trousers was enough to understand that they were women's. The guy texted Donut that he would set himself up so that Frank would attack first. Turning away, he pretended to put on his pants. Seeing that Carl had turned away, the man pulled out a gun, and without a second's hesitation, he shot the cat sitting next to him. Everything happened so quickly that Donut didn't even have time to scream. At that very moment, Frank Q's murdered partner Maggie appeared out of nowhere in the safe zone. There were 5 skulls burning above her head, meaning she had already killed 5 researchers. Maggie shot Carl in the back. The guy saw a bright flash and realized that exactly what he expected had happened. He and Donut were attacked by a gang of killers. Turning around, Carl smiled. They fell for his provocation and rushed to attack them right here. He beat them. The boy remembered his horror when he saw Donut helplessly sprawled on the floor in Mordecai's room. He then thought that she was dead. He was furious and yelled at the guildmaster, asking what the hell happened to his cat because of that enchanted cookie. Mordecai then replied, "There is a transformation going on, but it's definitely not a bad one. Otherwise the guild would have teleported her out of here immediately." He emphasized then that nothing could harm the explorer or NPC in the beginner's guild or safe room. The word scoundrel appeared above the head of the researcher killer Frank Q. He was temporarily immobilized by the system. The same thing happened to his accomplice Maggie. Her body was shaking, but she couldn't move. The frightened cat jumped off the stand and started running away from the man who had just shot her. She threw herself into Carl's arms and trustingly pressed herself against him. For the first time in the dungeon, Donut was truly scared. Throwing down the bloody pants Q had given him, Carl told the cat that it was time for them to run away while the two were immobilized. Donut looked at the two with her eyes wide with horror and exclaimed why they were going to kill them. But how did Carl find out about this? Is he a psychic? And where did this lady come from? Donut's point is not visible on the minimap. The guy looked at Q's partner. It was the 9th level researcher Maggie Mai. It seemed she was the one who commanded the gang. Above her head hung the 5 skulls of the explorer killer, and the woman's gaze was as cold and cruel as Q's. Carl was amazed. These bastards had already killed 8 people on the first floor alone. It looked like they were hunting people. The guy clenched his teeth, but he couldn't attack them now. Otherwise he would be immobilized too, and he and Donut wouldn't be able to escape. He looked around and decided that the best thing they could do now was to get out of here and try to survive. Carl hugged Donut and quickly ran out of the safe room while the 2 scoundrels still remained motionless. Just in case, right on the run, the guy pulled out a very useful bottle from his inventory, because they didn't have any bulletproof vests. He opened the cap, and in Carl's hands was a bottle of iron skin potion, which could protect him from bullets for a while. The guy took a few sips and immediately felt that something was happening to his body. His skin seemed to begin to thicken. Carl took out another bottle. He needed to protect his partner with her incredibly fragile constitution. He handed her the potion and told her to drink it too. He didn't know whether the bandits would pursue them or not. Donut clutched the life-saving potion in her paws and said thoughtfully that she simply didn't understand these two. The cat moved the iron skin potion into her inventory to use to defend against attacks. She asked Carl why they were doing this. The guy answered, "Probably to take other people's things, experience, and just for fun." Looking at the map, the cat noticed that there were a lot of red dots on it, but she couldn't see anyone, although they were surrounded by enemies. And indeed, the minimap showed that there were many enemies both to the right and to the left of the dungeon explorers. Carl looked around carefully. He knew that the map was not lying, but for some reason they had not noticed the enemy. Methodically examining everything around, the guy looked up and immediately understood why they did not immediately see their enemies. Right under the ceiling sat a vile creature called a red-faced remora. The system called them crazy kamikaze ravioli. As soon as the researchers reached the first remora, a strange red creature jumped down with a whistle. Carl looked with horror at the approaching monster. The remora was clearly aiming at him. He was confused and didn't know what to do. The red-faced remora lit up as it leaned against the guy's shoulder, and Carl screamed and clenched his teeth, a searing pain piercing his body. Donut jumped off her companion's shoulder and fired at the remora. The monstrous parasite exploded right on Carl's shoulder. The system reported that the knockdown was neutralized by the troll skin t-shirt. Carl cursed how painfully they bite. The cat looked up and saw a couple more biting red parasite suckers. They needed to be killed before they had time to attack. Upon seeing the researchers, the remoras rushed to attack the small, fluffy cat, considering it easy prey. One of the red-faced clingers pushed off the wall and, spreading its 3-fingered paws, flew straight at Donut. But the cat was ready for the monster's attack. She simultaneously fired magical charges at both clingers. The dead enemies lay sprawled on the floor, and Carl and Donut once again ran away from the gang of dungeon explorer killers. Suddenly the cat stopped and asked Carl why they were running away from Frank Q and Maggie May instead of fighting them. Pointing to the recently killed remoras, Ponchik said that they were strong and could easily handle this gang. But Carl wasn't so sure about this. He also wanted to punish these cold-blooded criminals. But he didn't know if it would work. He remembered Maggie, who had appeared quietly out of nowhere, and without blinking an eye, had shot a stranger. and Frank Q shot at the defenseless cat, which he had just thanked for its sympathy. They have guns. Frank is level 8 just like them, and Maggie is level 9. It's hard to get to 9, so she probably has a lot of skills up her sleeve. Besides, Carl didn't want to have a skull-shaped mark above his head. Even if this couple deserved to die, the rest of the people Carl met would not know about it. Donut sighed. But if they don't stop these bloodthirsty killers, they might hurt someone else. The guy understood that Donut was right, but how could he do that? They survived this time only because the system detained the killers. Carl cursed. He himself did not like retreating, but fighting two experienced cold-blooded criminals is not easy. But if they can't confront them head-on, then they need to come up with another way to defeat them. The guy took a goblin smoke bomb out of his inventory. It emits a foul-smelling cloud of multicolored smoke for 3 minutes. We need to set a clever trap for these hunters of human heads and objects. It seems they are not particularly bright. Carl can't see the bomb status directly from his inventory, so it shouldn't be displayed in the general information. He placed the smoke bomb in the inventory of the dead Remora cat. He looked at the status. Nothing was visible. That's good. The guy decided to check if the fuse was burning, and in just a couple of seconds the stink bomb's durability status dropped 3-fold. Carl remembered Frank Q. He searched Rebecca completely, even took her clothes, leaving only a fucking apple core. He took out the goblin dynamite from the storage, which he and Donut had used to blow up the army of sprinklers in the boss's lair. The fuses needed to be lit so that as soon as Q took it out of the repellent storage, the dynamite would explode instantly. People like Frank Q and Maggie May always pocket everything, even the blood-stained belongings of the people they killed. Carl doubted that the mobs would drop dynamite as loot, but if he was lucky, Frank wouldn't even think about it. As soon as he got the dynamite, it would explode, and now it was time for them to go. The cat doubted that Q worked at customs. Carl replied that maybe that was the only thing he didn't lie about. His behavior was like a cop, but everything else he said was bullshit. Frank Q said that he and Rebecca shot each other almost simultaneously, but that can't be true. This girl, Rebecca Vaughn, was level 3. Her inventory system was activated, meaning she had been in the guild. All that was left in her inventory was an apple core. But there had definitely been something there before, since she had completed training in the Beginner's Guild. Carl also noticed how many experience points Frank got when he ate the cookie. If he had been alone, he would have gotten 10 points, but he got less, which means he was in a group with someone. The guy also noticed that his finger was twitching, as if he was trying to type something on the keyboard to his partner in the chat. Donut was surprised when it came to some strange things. Carl behaved like James Bond, and when Beatrice dated 3 different guys, he didn't even suspect. Carl jumped in surprise at how many guys his girlfriend had dated. Was it really true that she had dated 3 at once? He only found out about one thing, and after that he and Bea broke up. Carl said that he didn't care. She could stay in the Bahamas. And then all the explorers of the world's underground saw a hologram of the producer of this season of Cascadia. He greeted the researchers, and, according to Cascadia, it had been another amazing and wonderful day. The show's organizers are very happy that people are with them, and really hope that everyone has a great time. Cascadia assured that all the problems with the toilets, explosions, and suctions have been resolved, so there is no need to worry about it. He also asked those who use the dungeons to relieve themselves to stop doing so immediately. A cross-translation function has been introduced into the native language. Now people from different countries can easily understand each other when meeting in the dungeon. Carl pulled out a goblin-made bike from his inventory to quickly get away from the potential explosion. Cascadia exclaimed, "That was all the news." He wished the researchers to continue in the same spirit of killing, killing, and killing. Jumping into the cradle, Donut said that they were never able to watch the show to the end, and wondered if they got there. The guy doubted that he and Ponchik were shown. He got on the bike. They needed to hurry to leave the dangerous place. The motorcycle roared. The engine worked properly. The goblin engineers knew their business and made the bike conscientiously. The explorers rolled along the corridors towards the room controlled by Tally. They needed to eat and rest. The 2 rule-breaking scoundrels, Frank Q and Maggie May, were still standing motionless in the safe room. A girl approached this very room with 2 killers. She put her hand on the front door and looked into the opening. Seeing bodies shaking with tension with pistols in their hands, the girl called out to her mom and dad in surprise. Carl and Donut were flying through the dungeon at full speed. The motorcycle was working properly. The contented cat was sitting in a fluffy stroller. The guy activated the map to navigate the numerous corridors. There were 2 days left before the level's destruction. He saw that their target was very close and stepped on the gas. Carl was eager to take refuge in Tally's shelter and taste his cooking. The system increased Donut's bike driver skill level, and the cat was delighted, even though she had never driven a thing before. Finally, they arrived at the required premises. Carl stopped. It was necessary to put the vehicle into inventory. They greeted the silent little keeper with pleasure, Donut jumping up onto the counter and rubbing herself against Tally. Carl sank tiredly into a chair. They hadn't had a chance to rest since they had been here. The guy lost count of how many days had passed since they last slept. Time flows differently here, but at least a day passed, and maybe two, while they were here. Carl decided to open the chests to see what he got. The system gave the boy a new achievement, calling him a monster for killing the goblin babies in their own house. Then she calmed the guy down, saying that the mob's children don't die, but are transported to a safe zone, where they wait for their parents. After the end of the next season of the show, the mob families meet again and continue their long, happy life. Laughing, the system mockingly told Carl that it was a lie. Those children were dead, and dead because of him, so he would definitely burn in hell. Carl clenched his teeth, sick of the constant bullying of this stupid show program system. It was clearly trying to get to him. And for this ugly and bloody deed, the guy receives a bronze chest of the Ass Smasher as a reward. For killing over 20 civilians in one attack, Carl received the achievement called War Criminal. It was he who prevented innocent children from growing up and enjoying a happy and fulfilling life with their parents. For being so cruel and unforgiving, the dungeon explorer was rewarded with the golden chest of the Ass Smasher. The guy keeps a ton of stuff in his inventory, and for this he gets a golden loot chest, so there will be even more of it. Carl's explosives handling skill has also been increased to level 5, and he now has the skill to make IEDs. He was surprised to see a new tab appear in his menu, called Destruction Workshop. Carl clicked on it, but it turned out that he could only access this menu when he was standing in front of the sapper's table. It was interesting, the guy thought. A sapper's table can be bought in a safe room store. Donut also began opening chests and examining their contents. As always, she had plenty of potions and torches. The cat, like a child, was delighted with all the items she received, her eyes shining when another thing jumped out of the chest. Among the numerous other boxes, the cat also received a bronze boss chest, which always contains interesting items. Here was an enchanted scaly fairy steel tail cap for the swift four-legged explorer. The charmer's silver chest contained a very useful spell book that could turn enemies into allies. She received this spell, Minion Army, for charming all the goblins, which allowed her to make enemies fight for her for 1 minute. The contented cat opened the next chest. There would probably be some beautiful bottles of potions there. But in the chest, there was a special weapon oil called Weeping Wounds. It is applied to weapons to make wounds bleed longer. Like Carl, she received the Ass Killer's chest for the mass murder of peaceful and defenseless goblin children. The chest contained a Thug's Pass, which allows you to get a pass to the Thugs Club, but prevents you from getting a winner's pass. Donut was horrified that a tattoo would really appear on her well-groomed body. But it was simply unimaginable. She was not a criminal. She felt a burning pain. The brand dug into her neck to leave a mark in the shape of a dagger. The cat growled indignantly. Donut ran around the room, jumping from table to table, and was indignant at who gave them the right to defile her in such a way. Her eyes were burning with anger. The place where the tattoo was applied was bleeding, and in anger the cat tore the banners on the walls of the room with her claws. Tired of running, she stopped near Carl and moaned that now there was a disqualification mark on her beautiful body. Donut, her ears drooping sadly, lamented that this tattoo, this terrible mark, had caused her serious harm. The guy tried to calm Donut down, saying that everything was fine. All these marks would come in handy one day, just like his goblin pass had come in handy. Carl hadn't seen Donut this upset since Angel the Cocker Spaniel ate one of her favorite bells. Carl looked carefully at the cat's body. A tattoo was visible among the silky fur. Now Donut had become a thug. To distract her from unpleasant thoughts, he asked if she would like to try on her new enchanted thing. The cat still replied sadly that it would be great. But the thought of a new thing soon took hold of her. When the enchanted scaly fairy tale cap for the fast four-legged friend ended up on Donut, she smiled again. She spun around in front of Carl and asked how it looked, how she looked in it, and whether it covered her crotch tattoo. The guy stroked Donut. The thing doesn't even come close to covering the tattoo, but it looks absolutely great on the cat. The cat frowned. It was a pity that she didn't cover it. And then she remembered about the Book of Spells. Perhaps it could help. But Donut couldn't use the book because the spell required 50 mana, and she didn't have that much mana. The cat was very upset. She cannot learn such a useful spell now and cannot use it. The guy continued to open his chests, of which he had accumulated a decent amount over all this time. He opened a couple of goblin chests, which usually contained all sorts of explosive goodies that the guy often used. And this time he received healing potions, goblin dynamite, stinking fog bombs, and confusing fog scrolls. The boss's bronze chest contained only one item. Carl received an enchanted ring for his finger. It was a physique ring, It improved his body by 20%. The guy thought that he needed to find something similar for Donut. Having opened another chest of the ass-kicker, Carl received the exact same thug pass in the form of a tattoo as Donut. A bloody dagger sank into the boy's chest. He cried out in pain. This procedure is quite painful. It was not for nothing that the cat screamed. Donut pulled her t-shirt back and looked at the mark, saying with disdain, "Oh my God, how disgusting, and how could they do that?" Glancing at her neck, the cat said, "Miss Beatrice will go crazy when she sees this on her favorite beautiful and champion." A skill potion fell out of an inconspicuous-looking box. Drinking it will add an additional level to the guy's value determination skill. After moving his purchases into his inventory, Carl pressed the button to sort items by value. The system quickly sorted all the items, and the guy wondered why he never got pants or shoes. The contented cat ran around the room in her new steel outfit, exclaiming that when she spun, she made a whistling sound. Carl yawned incessantly. He was exhausted and really wanted to sleep. Besides, he considered this place quiet, and his body needed rest. After taking a shower, he and Donut settled down on the wide bed in a small but cozy and already familiar bedroom. The cat was still muttering indignantly in her sleep, asking who gave them the right to disfigure her body, and what's more, such an ugly tattoo. In his dream, Carl saw an angry and at the same time sad Rory. She blamed the guy for the death of her family and called him a monster. He knew it was just another stupid joke. The game didn't care that he killed the kids. It wanted him to do it. The room was like it was set up for this. They had to clear out the workshop, and they had to blow up that room. It was a trap. Those kids were put there for that specific purpose. They only existed to die. Carl cannot and should not blame himself or feel remorse for the explosion in the goblin lair. Donut was right. It wasn't his fault. But despite all these reasonable arguments, Carl still felt like an asshole. And then he saw an inscription on the ceiling of the AMV. Someone wrote it. "I wonder if this person survived or has already died." The guy reached out his hand to the ceiling with the inscription about where this place came from. For some reason it seemed familiar to Carl. He clenched his fist, all his muscles tensed. It couldn't be, this place. It was from his world, and the aliens wanted to steal it from them. Carl stubbornly pressed his lips together. He swore to himself that the aliens would not break him. They could wound or kill him, but not break him. Nearby, the fluffy Princess Donut purred peacefully, a living reminder of that world and that life that had been not so long ago. The guy's eyes flashed menacingly. He would do everything possible and impossible not only to avoid breaking down, but also to get his world back. There were 40 hours left before the level was destroyed. Carl saw an inscription. 2 crossroads to the east, 3 to the south, a staircase plus people. The guy looked at the inscription in confusion. He was at a loss to guess who had made it. Enemies or possible friends and comrades. Donut asked him if he thought it was a trap. Carl thoughtfully answered, "Maybe this way, maybe that way." He ran his hand over the inscription, and fresh paint remained on his fingers, meaning the inscription had been made only a few hours ago. They decided to take a risk, got on motorcycles, and the researchers headed in the direction indicated on the sign. The road was littered with the corpses of Level 4 ice goats, killed by researchers Brandon N. and Chris Andrews. Carl told Donut that they would go look for these very researchers who cleared the way to the stairs for them. The guy stepped on the gas and they sped forward with the wind. Carl couldn't wait to find normal people here. The system reported that Carl's driving skill had improved, and he could now step on the gas with complete confidence. Along the way, the same inscription was found here and there. It seemed the guys were showing the researchers the way to the stairs. The messages were on the walls and on the floor slabs in the corridors. Suddenly, Donut yelled at Carl to stop. As they drove, the cat watched the minimap very carefully. She showed Carl a staircase that had appeared on the map. Although it had definitely not been there before, it seemed to have opened recently. The boy asked the cat if there was anything else there. Maybe he could see anyone nearby, other explorers or monsters. Donut replied that there was something written on the ground. She suggested getting off the motorcycle and reading. After all, it was very dangerous near the stairs. Carl put the bike back in his inventory. They were going to go on foot from here. The guy didn't want to show the transport to anyone. The explorers of the world dungeon slowly and carefully moved forward. Judging by the video, the bosses here are very serious. They saw another sign on the floor. The road is safe. The parking lot is 2.5 kilometers away. They can't go any lower. Otherwise, the district boss will be activated. Carl cursed. How could they even defeat this district boss? All these monsters were simply terrible and strong. Donut pressed herself against the stone slabs. She felt a very slight vibration, as if someone was approaching them. She told Carl that there was some movement up ahead, but she couldn't yet figure out what it was, or whether it was dangerous for them or not. Now the guy, too, could hear noise and a slight rattling of the floorboards far away in the corridor, which meant that someone big and heavy was walking. Soon dust began to fall from the ceiling, and the dungeon explorers realized that it was definitely not a friend moving towards them. Carl told Donut that whatever it was in the hallway was very fast and extremely large and heavy. He added that this was something very, very big, and perhaps they had never encountered such a giant in the dungeon before. Above one of the entrances they saw a raised grate. Carl understood perfectly well that this grate would fall as soon as they entered. The guy walked up to the grate and looked inside. It turned out that there were more passages further on, like some kind of labyrinth. Suddenly they heard something rolling noisily down the corridor right next to them, and a huge brown ball appeared. It rolled right up to the grate where Carl and Donut were standing, and the researchers felt that the ball stank. The guy winced and said that it smelled terribly of sewage. Donut's eyes filled with tears from the stench. She whispered, "It's just awful." Carl suggested looking at the map. Maybe they would find the one who left all these messages with clues. Suddenly, he saw that a very large group of dungeon explorers was moving not far from them. The guy happily told the cat to look at how many people there were. They finally found a large group. Judging by the dots, there are at least 40 people there. We need to go to them. Together, they will definitely be able to break through to the stairs to the second floor. Carl's eyes lit up with joy. He was glad to see people, and Donut was also glad that they wouldn't have to fight the terrible boss themselves. The guy was sure that with that many people they could easily take down the district boss, although it depended on their level. Turning the corner, Carl and Donut entered a corridor where, judging by the map, there were people. The guy greeted them warmly. But when he looked closer, his face lengthened. He certainly didn't expect to see this here. These were indeed people, and there were a lot of them. Donut turned to Carl in confusion. In front of them were very elderly people, some of whom moved with the help of walkers. The cat whispered, "There are only old people here, some in wheelchairs. With them they will definitely not defeat the district boss." Carl thought, "These aren't just old people, but oh my god, I love you, Grandpa. But damn, how come you haven't crumbled into sand yet?" A strange old woman sat near a large cart with things and looked around with big crazy eyes. She muttered that she didn't take those sandals, and there was no need to slander her. She didn't need other people's things. She was an honest person. Carl heard a young voice. Some guy shouted to him, "Thank God he came to their base." Two young men were walking towards Carl. One of them asked if he had probably seen their messages. Carl answered, yes, they had seen the inscriptions. Level 6 researcher Brandon N., a young man with a hammer on his shoulder and cheerful eyes, waved cheerfully at Carl. Next to him was Level 6 researcher Chris Andrews, and it was these guys who cleared the way for him and Donut to the stairs. Brandon didn't understand why Carl said we. He asked the guy who else was with him. They thought he was alone. The young man saw the strange name of the explorer, but did not understand anything about this. What kind of royal retinue this was. Maybe it was just a joke. The indignant cat jumped off her companion's shoulder and stood majestically before the two young men. She said that we means we. She is right in front of him. Can't this rude guy see her? She is Princess Donut. The stunned guys looked at each other in confusion. It seemed they clearly didn't encounter talking animals every day. Brandon apologized. He didn't understand right away. I saw them and I thought... Carl smiled. They probably thought he was crazy. Meanwhile, the cat is talking, and she may have the highest stats of all those present. Brandon Ann dropped to one knee and gently stroked the cat, saying, "Nice to meet you, Princess Donut." The cat was still unhappy that she was taken for a blank space, and not for an equal explorer of the world's underground. Brandon asked to forgive him if he had suddenly offended such a beauty. He had simply never met a talking cat before. Donut smiled and accepted the apology. Carl and his companion, along with the boys, went to the other fighting members of this large but strange detachment. They were met by Archer Yolanda Martinez, a level 6 explorer and member of a group called the Meadowlarks. Yolanda smiled widely and extended her hand to Carl. She happily exclaimed that their messages worked. This is very cool. They were also joined by Imani K., a 10th level explorer armed with a sword, and also a member of the Meadowlark squad. There were 12 skulls hanging above the sad Imani's head, meaning that she had killed 12 dungeon explorers. The swordswoman stood a little to the side, next to the old men, and was in no hurry to approach the new arrivals. Donut wrote in the chat to Carl to look at that girl with skulls, another dirty killer of researchers. Carl looked closely at Imani, who stood with a sword guarding the crowd of defenseless old people, and did not abandon them. He replied to Donut in the chat that he didn't think so. This girl was completely different from the cold-blooded killers they had met. There was grief in Imani's eyes. Apparently she was forced to kill these people, and this lay like a heavy stone on her clear conscience. Still, Carl looked at Imani warily, and he told the cat not to write in caps. as it felt like she was screaming. The frightened cat replied that she was screaming. The skulls above her head frightened her very much. She remembered how Q tried to kill her. The smiling Archer extended her hand to Carl and introduced herself as Yolanda, very happy to see a new explorer in their squad. Brandon explained that they were night workers at a nursing home in Wenatchee and had arrived there while they were on duty with the residents. On that terrible night, they were forced to evacuate because someone decided to set fire to the trash in a barrel at the entrance to the building. At this time, firefighters, police, and others were with them, and the strange old woman wrote to Auden Schwartz to contact her. The old lady in the red hat was named Agatha. She took a can of red paint and headed towards the nearest wall. The guy added that in general, everything was going in one place. When it happened, he suddenly saw that Agatha took their paint. Soon a smiling red smiley face appeared on the wall, drawn by the strange old lady Agatha. It was very strange for Carl to see an old woman wrapped in rags with crazy eyes and a can of paint in her hands. Brandon politely told Agatha not to waste the paint. The old woman grumbled that it was her paint. They stole it from her. Brandon reminded her that Agatha had stolen the paint from Stan, and he asked her to just not waste it on nonsense. Chris said most of the cops and paramedics scattered as if they knew the place better. Carl was surprised how they got down. It turned out that Agatha simply took a running start and jumped onto the stairs with a cart. No one knows what she was thinking, but the stairs turned into a long, smooth ramp. Apparently, something really wanted this strange old woman and the other residents of the nursing home to come down here. Carl asked Brandon if he had considered gathering them all in a safe room, which would certainly be more comfortable than the hallway. Donut was surprised to see a cat in the arms of one of the old ladies. The grandmother was constantly petting her furry pet. Chris said the room was already packed, like a summer cafe in the sun, with only enough meth for 30 people. Chris helped the stronger ones get there. There is this gnome there who cooks food for them and sings songs. Carl remembered Tully. Apparently not all Bobkas are so gloomy. There are more cheerful and younger ones, but it seems they are all very kind. The old people really like that room. There is nothing to be afraid of there. They remember their previous life, their youth. And among themselves they decided that they would never leave there again, that they would all die together in this place to the cheerful songs of the keeper of the room. Now they sit there like they're at a big party, well-fed, happy and calm. It gives you goosebumps. The guys planned to take the old people to the 3rd floor, thinking that there they could change their class or specialization, and it would be easier for them to survive. Carl stared at the toilet, next to which there were pools of blood. He suddenly remembered Cascadia's message about toilets. He asked Brandon if this was really because of the same bug that the producer had talked about, and the guy sadly confirmed. Carl remembered the message that if you open the door and something or someone comes in instead of you, they won't explode now. Brandon N. told Carl that they found Lady Tiata from the Newbie Guild, who really helped them get settled here. And then they brought people to her in groups for training and activation of the menu, inventory, and adaptation to this strange place. During one of these expeditions, they were attacked. Several residents of the nursing home were injured, and there were no healing potions. Imani had a sword. She killed the wounded at their request, but she still cannot recover from that terrible incident. Everyone understands perfectly well that it was necessary to do this so that they wouldn't suffer. But it doesn't make anyone feel any better, damn place. And those fiery skulls above Imani's head are a constant reminder of what happened. It's just terrible. Carl listened and looked at the old people. If it was difficult for him, a young man, to live here, then what must it be like for them, old and infirm people? And he suddenly thought that things weren't so bad between him and Donut. They were young, fast, healthy, and now they could even chat. He asked Brandon what happened to the cops and paramedics who stayed with them after they went underground. N lowered his head. Most of them went into the spiral. The gate closed after they went inside. About 5 minutes later, the gates opened again, but none of the guys were there anymore. They had simply disappeared. No one knows where. The rest went to look for other survivors in the world dungeon, and a less difficult descent to the 2nd floor. They were very strong and brave guys. Everyone was confident that they would be able to find people and a ladder. The 2 squads went their separate ways, and no one has seen them since. Not even a message from them about what happened. Brandon whispered. They are all dead. Their deaths are shown by icons in the squad. The guy didn't want the old people to know about it. The guys were killed one by something, separating them from the group. Even Dr. Gracie died. And she was an MMA fighter. Seeing Donut, the old woman with the cat extended her hand to her and greeted the cute cat in a trembling voice. Donut jumped into the arms of her grandmother in a wheelchair, who, even in this situation, did not abandon her furry pet. Brandon concluded that they were the last 4 who were not residents of the nursing home, plus Agatha. Carl thought, what a nightmare. And he thought that everything was bad for him. But here everything is much worse. Just some kind of darkness. He looked at these feeble old men in the corridor of the world dungeon. They shouldn't be here at all. But they are here. The world of Earthlings has come to an end. There is no place for the sick and the old in this bloody show. But what to do with them if they still end up here? Of course, it would be wiser for those guys to give up and abandon those old people, but they don't do that. They take care of them. The cat caught the sad thoughts of her companion. She sadly lowered her soft ears and asked what Carl was thinking about. The guy understood perfectly well that this was a hopeless business. But how could he abandon them? Would his conscience be at peace if he did so? He closed his eyes, frowned, and firmly decided to stay with the guys and help them save these frail people. It would be the humane thing to do. Carl looked again at the old people. Many of them were moving with difficulty, but still tried to encourage each other. The guy thought that if he died saving them, at least he would do it for a good cause, and not for the entertainment of the show's viewers. Carl asked the boys what they had learned about the area, and whether there were any safe rooms that weren't packed to capacity. He suggested doing this. He and Donut would go level up by killing various local monsters on the floor. If there was a chance to borrow a couple of cans of spray paint from Agatha, Carl would take them with him just in case. Hearing this, Agatha anxiously pressed her supply of spray paint cans to her skinny old chest. Carl said that he would try to improve his skills as much as possible in the remaining time, and it would be good for the guys to do the same. He warned them to beware of other explorers, especially those with skulls. They met too, Frank and Maggie. They were killers. Carl promised the guys that they would watch the next episode of the show Dungeon World, get some sleep, and come back here again. Donut, hearing Carl's words, jumped off her grandmother's lap with the cat and headed towards her companion and guardian. The guy said that when they returned, he, Donut, and 4 guys would go there. Carl pointed towards the stairs. The 6 of them will definitely defeat this boss that the bloodthirsty aliens, lovers of bloody murders, have prepared for them. By winning, they will give the old people the opportunity to go down and continue living and moving further underground. Imani asked incredulously. How was Carl going to do this when so many people had already died fighting terrible bosses? Carl smiled. They don't need to worry. He has an interesting idea. He will tell them everything later when they return. When they were alone, Donut asked Carl what his great plan was. She was curious to know what he had come up with. How will they kill the terrible boss of this floor? After everything that happened, the cat unconditionally believed in the genius of her companion. But the guy casually replied that he had no idea how they would do it. But he would definitely try to come up with something. They have to force the others to train. It's the only way out. There's very little time left. Better to fight a familiar enemy than God knows who, Donut objected. But they don't know who will be there. Carl, taking paint from his inventory, began to paint over the sign indicating the way to the nursing home base. Donut asked why he was doing this. He asked if she had seen Imani's level 10, partly because she had to kill those people from the nursing home. The cat was surprised. Did Carl really think that someone would show up who wouldn't hesitate to kill those old men just for the sake of experience? Donut sighed heavily. She was sure that the guy was greatly exaggerating. There are no people that evil. But then a memory of the recent attack on them came to her mind. She timidly asked Carl if she was right about the people. The guy knew perfectly well that she was wrong, but he replied that he didn't know and didn't want to know. And in any case, it wasn't worth the risk. Carl remembered Frank Q's cold, predatory eyes, and without blinking an eye, he would chop down defenseless old people with his terrible axe. Donut asked, what if some good people like them showed up and walked past because Cal had painted over the messages? He replied to his companion that they were very lucky to find them. These guys are very good, kind people and real fighters. The good guys don't wander around in crowds, not in these places. Don't forget where they are. The system encourages players to kill. So here you are, either a small fish or a huge shark that is trying to eat these small fish. The cat asked Carl in confusion. Who are they then, small fish? She didn't like that at all. The guy silently turned the corner and walked away. He knew for sure that they were small fish, and many would like to gobble them up. As they wandered through the corridors, they constantly encountered enemies. But these rats were much larger than those they had encountered before. This means only one thing. They are already very close to the lair of their boss. The guy constantly asked himself if he was ready to fight him. Brandon N. told Carl that they had destroyed the 2 bosses closest to them, securing the area somewhat. Some guys tried and killed the 1st district boss. They don't know them. They didn't have time to get to know them. The 4 of them defeated the 2nd district boss, which increased their level and allowed them to arm themselves and level up a bit. N warned Carl that they needed to be wary of the lizard-like creatures. They were extremely dangerous in combat. Carl and Donut fought another squad of large rats. The cat successfully extinguished them with magic projectiles, and the guy finished them off. He asked Brandon to tell him more about the lizards. He replied that they jump. Some creature even bit his hand. He thought it would die. It was good that the poison wore off quickly. Otherwise it would have killed Brandon. And now Carl and Donut were facing those very same lizards. The poison of these hideous green creatures is so strong that healing potions have difficulty neutralizing it. You need to drink many vials to survive. Donut took out from her inventory a potion of iron skin, given to her by caring Carl, to protect her body from bites. The cat swallowed the protective liquid and felt as if her fragile body had suddenly become filled with metal and strengthened. Carl also opened his inventory and took out a piece of chain that he found during the battle with their first boss. He wrapped the chain around his fist to increase the force of his blow against the vile, poisonous enemies. According to N, they are very nimble. One of the second-level pygmy troglodytes had already rushed at the researchers. The system warned that they were fast and poisonous. Donut immediately fired magical projectiles at the approaching poisonous and biting enemies. The cat's spell level increased, and now she could not stun, but immediately kill enemies with her shots. The green lizard, having received the magic projectile, bulged its yellow eyes in surprise and helplessly opened its toothy mouth. Carl tested his iron fist by hitting the jaw of one of the green lizards that jumped up to him. It worked perfectly. The blow sent the monster flying up and somersaulting in the air. As soon as the monster was close enough to the floor, Carl jumped up to it and delivered another blow to the head. The lizard couldn't survive this blow. It was torn into small pieces, and everything around was covered in scarlet blood. The guy shook himself off. He didn't like the bloody splashes. He wondered why there was so much blood on all the creatures here. Carl approached one of the green lizards killed by Donut with a magic projectile, and it literally fried. The guy was very surprised. This didn't look at all like the 3-mana projectile the cat had previously fired at enemies. The system informed Donut that her magic projectile had reached level 5, allowing her to spend between 3 and 6 points per projectile. Looking at the stats, Carl saw that Donut's intelligence was now 24. And she could fire as many as 8 projectiles if she reduced the spell's cost to 3 mana. Approaching the roasted pygmy lizard, the cat said that she had spent 6 mana on this green, toothy freak. Carl noted that Donut would probably be able to kill second-level monsters with 1 projectile for 3 mana. The cat objected that if some monster was going to bite off her face, she would fire 1 projectile every 6, so as not to take any risks. The guy noticed that only a few days had passed, and he could already barely feel the pinch under his feet when he walked. They were getting stronger. Now they faced a fight with stronger lizards. They were larger and more muscular, but just as fast and no less poisonous. The guy had long ago noticed that the strongest mobs in this area were at most level 4. Carl really hoped that the boss would be only slightly stronger than them. 7th, maybe 8th level. Then they would be able to deal with him easily. The guy noticed a tongue appearing from the lizard's mouth. He remembered Brandon's warning. The monster jumped up and threw out its poisonous tongue. Carl turned around, covering Donut with his body. He smiled. The troglodyte trickster cast poison on him, but the poison was neutralized by the protective magical cloak of the night ghosts. Peeking over Carl's shoulder, Donut responded to the lizard's attack by firing a powerful magical projectile at him. This fight was harder than the previous one, but it also ended in victory. Carl sighed with relief, beads of sweat streaming down his face. They only have a little bit left to level up to the 9th level, then all their stats and skills will also increase. But with each level, more and more experience is required to move on to the next one. So for now, they are marking time in one place. Although Carl can't distribute stats, his combat skills are steadily increasing, meaning his attacks are becoming stronger. He understood perfectly well that the real difficulties would begin when they went down to the floor below, where everything would start all over again. Donut approached the recently killed troglodyte lizard. She usually tried to stay away from even dead monsters. Carl mentally corrected himself. All these problems would occur if they could go lower, which was not at all certain to happen. Suddenly, the cat hit the dead enemy in the face with its paws several times. It seemed that it decided to test its strength on the corpse. She struck the lizard with her claws, and streams of blood immediately gushed from its body. Donut watched the result with interest. Suddenly, from the blow of the paw, the body of the large lizard spun in the air, and the head burst, flooding everything around with pools of blood. Carl told her again to practice hitting with her claws. His strength is 9, and Donut's is 18. She is twice as strong as him, and Carl hits pretty hard. With that kind of strength, Donut could probably easily pierce a steel sheet, even some low-level monsters. The cat winced and said capriciously that fighting with claws was inelegant, an activity not for a true lady. The guy grinned, and shooting lasers from the eyes is graceful. Is that an activity for a lady? Donut replied, well, of course, yes. Using magic projectiles, she doesn't get covered in blood like a ragged alley cat. God, she can't even imagine that. Otherwise, he will look like Ferdinand. Carl asked who this Ferdinand was. It seemed like he had never heard such a name before. The cat was a little embarrassed. Carl doesn't know him. The guy even thought that Donut blushed. Who would have thought? She has secrets. Carl knew that it was useless to put pressure on the capricious cat. So he asked her to just think about it, because this was her strength. Donut frowned. She understood that the guy was right, but she really wanted to remain a princess and not stoop to fighting with her claws. A new group of enemies appeared ahead, even larger and stronger than the previous ones, meaning the researchers were close to the boss. Grabbing a club, the green troglodyte lizard rushed at Carl and Donut, moving surprisingly quickly. Another bluish-colored lizard opened its toothy mouth and thrust forward an incredibly long, poisonous tongue. Donut, as always, fired magical charges at the enemies, staying at a fairly safe distance from them. Carl used his feet and fists, smashing the monsters' heads, especially since he was immune to the creature's poison because of his cloak. Soon this battle was also over. The researchers won, leaving huge red pools of lizard blood in the corridor. They approached the room where the lizard boss was located. Carl opened the minimap and looked carefully. This room layout will not allow the guy to use the bomb makes a boom method on the boss, as he did last time. They stood in front of the doors of the gym, and Carl could feel in his bones how dangerous this undertaking was, but they still had to do it. But if they couldn't deal with the first floor boss now, then they wouldn't have a chance to deal with the guard guarding the stairs to the next floor. They simply have to cope, and they will. He asked Donut if she was ready for battle. The cat answered that she was ready. Carl knew that in games there is always a chance to win any battle, even the most difficult one, and this show is no different from the game in terms of mechanics. He opened the doors to the fitness center and told Donut to go ahead, and they boldly entered the boss's territory with the clear intention of winning. At first glance, everything here looked like a regular fitness center: soft paths, posters, turnstiles, and an administrator on duty. Upon seeing the researchers, the green administrator lizard hissed threateningly, warning the others of the approaching enemies. Donut silently fired a magic projectile at the fitness center administrator, and he fell silent, instantly changing color. Carl said that after the shot the lizard did not explode. The cat replied that it was a projectile for only 3 mana. She was saving her strength. Entering the hall, the guy noticed the double doors bound with chains on the side wall of the gym. He wondered what was there. Donut jumped off the turnstile and ran easily along the carpeted paths of the well-equipped gym. A huge troglodyte lizard was hauling iron, surrounded by smaller but also weighty green musclemen. The boss threw the huge dumbbells on the floor. His muscular tail twirled nervously. He felt that enemies had arrived. The green boss turned halfway and glared angrily at the dungeon explorers who had disturbed him. The muscle man stood up to his full height in front of the uninvited guests and looked down at them, flexing his steel muscles. The system announced the sides of this battle. On one side are the 8th level researchers Carl and Princess Donut. They are confronted by the district boss, the lizard-like troglodyte muscle man, a level 9 warrior who is ready to deal pain to everyone. Donut sighed. The degree of cringe in these descriptions of the game system is sometimes simply off the charts. Why all this? Carl, wrapping his beloved chain around his fist, told the cat not to pay attention to it and to stick to the plan. Seeing that his enemies were seriously preparing for battle, the duck called his assistant Bro and asked him to back him up. The muscle man picked up a huge disc from his dumbbell. It had its own name. It was the Skinny Destroyer. The lizard boss threw a massive disc at his smaller opponents, capable of taking off both of their heads if it hit. As the disc gained speed, it became engulfed in flames, and soon the object flying toward the researchers burst into flames. Carl and Donut jumped in different directions. The guy cursed. What a strength. He definitely doesn't have that kind of strength. You have to take that into account. The guy quickly opened his inventory. If this muscle man continued throwing everything in sight, they would have a hard time. He took out a scroll of confusing fog from his supplies. This was exactly what they would need right now. As soon as the scroll was activated, the entire gym was covered in a thick fog, and none of the enemies could see anything clearly. The scroll didn't say how long the fog would last, but the fog's confusion effect was negated for their party members. Just in case, we need to act quickly. Duck called Bro in confusion, exclaiming that for some reason he couldn't see anything. In the confusing fog, the green lizard fighters desperately beat each other, mistaking their comrades for explorers. Carl's plan was very simple. He would attack the boss's assistants while Donut would shoot his head with maximum power charges. Now Kochka's henchmen were busy fighting each other, so the path for the boss's attack was clear. Carl rushed at the green muscular lizard, who was standing very close to his boss, trying to protect him. The guy dealt the lizard a crushing blow to the chin with his chain-weighted fist, and the lizard gasped and flew off to the side. Without giving the enemy a chance to rise, Carl jumped on him and dealt him a decisive blow, crushing the troglodyte's small head. The guy mercilessly beat the toothy lizard. Blood flowed from the monster like a river, but he was still breathing. The monsters were stronger here. Donut, sitting on the exercise machine, constantly fired at the muscular boss's head, not allowing him to move. Suddenly, she noticed that one of the troglodyte lizards was attacking her with a long, poisonous tongue. She jumped up easily, dodging the poisonous attack. She needed to find another comfortable position and attack the boss again. Carl kicked another green fighter athlete so that he could no longer get up and attack them from behind. The guy cursed. The boss was burned by the cat's attacks, but still alive. Besides, the effect of the scroll of confusing fog ended. Carl quickly clicked on his inventory to get another saving scroll and provoke the enemies to fight each other. The muscle man, noticing the enemy's movements, threw another burning disc at him. The guy managed to dodge, but it was dangerous. At that moment, the cat resumed its attack with magic projectiles at the green muscular boss's head. Having received the blow, the duck lost control of the fiery disc, and it flew into the wall, no longer threatening to crush Carl's head. Donut stood very close to the boss and shot him in the chin. The upper part of his body was already starting to darken from the attacks. Seeing that her mana was running low, the cat opened her inventory and took out another bottle to replenish her energy levels. She shouted to Carl that she was drinking a mana potion, so that he should cover her and be careful himself. The guy responded, saying that he accepted the information. If Donut gets hit, it will be very difficult to hold out long enough to use another potion. And then Carl was attacked by a blue-tongued, poisonous troglodyte trickster, wrapping its tongue around the guy's striking hand. He smiled, but he doesn't have to worry about such crap. The poison of these ugly creatures doesn't scare the guy. The system reported that the poison was neutralized by the cloak of the night ghosts. Carl grabbed the poisonous tongue wrapped around his hand and pulled. The lizard was completely taken aback by the fact that its victim could pull it by its poisonous tongue. Confusion flashed in its eyes. The guy pulled the blue tongue with all his might, and the blue troglodyte trickster flew at Carla with his mouth open. Carl's arm was almost up to the elbow in the toothy mouth of the poisonous bro. He clenched his teeth, and blood gushed from the guy's arm. Carl gritted his teeth. Despite the fact that his hand was wrapped in a chain, the wound was serious and caused him acute pain. He shoved his chain-wrapped fist deeper into the troglodyte's throat, and it began to choke. Carl heard another lizard running behind him to help the choking poisonous dodger bro. The guy quickly turned around and hit the approaching enemy directly with the body of the half-dead bro, despite the streams of blood from his own hand. Carl tensed his hand. He needed to press a little more for bro's spine to break and for him to unclench his poisonous jaws. The enemies continued to attack the guy. Now he used the body of the lizard bro as a weapon. He dealt a crushing blow to another green fighter of the boss duck, smashing his head on the iron. The boss saw his friend bro hanging helplessly on the arm of one of the dungeon explorers. The poisonous lizard was almost dead. The jock roared, addressing bro, that this wasn't cool. Judging by the bar above the boss's head, he only had a third of his life left. Carl finally activated another scroll of confusing fog again. This could buy them time while Donut replenishes his mana. The gym began to fill with a thick fog again. The guy, gritting his teeth, ran to another place to remove bro's dead body from his hand, which was still dangling from it. The muscleman shouted to Carl that it was his little brother. He had just started to gain muscle mass, and the man killed him. Running past the exercise machines, Carl grabbed the barbell just in case to protect himself from the green, enraged boss. Gritting his teeth in pain, the boy ran as fast as he could towards Duckling to attack him, while Donut was replenishing his mana reserves. However, with amazing dexterity, the muscleman grabbed the guy by the hand in which he held the barbell. For his size, he was surprisingly fast. Carl cursed. Fighting the boss hand-to-hand when your right hand is in the mouth of another monster is not a good idea. The muscleman grabbed the guy by the throat and squeezed his neck. Despite his weakened health, there was a lot of strength in his muscular arms. The boss began to strangle Carl. His body began to shake, and his health began to rapidly decrease. A little more, and he would die. Despite his weakness, Carl tried to kick the boss, but it didn't have any significant effect, and his grip didn't weaken. Carl's eyes began to fill with blood. He muttered through his teeth, "No, not like that. He can't die so stupidly." The guy's head began to spin. A bloody haze swam before his eyes. He felt himself weakening, consciousness almost leaving him. Suddenly he heard Donut's lively voice. She was running towards the boss and shouting to her companion for Carl to hold on a little. She jumped onto Duck's back and dug her claws into his muscles with all four paws, causing blood to immediately spurt from the wounds. This move really surprised the boss. He couldn't understand why it hurt so much. Could this little thing really cause such damage? Meanwhile, Donut was hacking at Duck's back, cutting through the muscles as if she were sharpening her claws on her scratching post. A couple of seconds later, there was no longer a single living spot on the boss's back, and due to the tension in his muscles, blood flowed in wide streams. To save Carl, the cat, overcoming her disgust, sank her sharp teeth into the monster's blood artery. A fountain of blood gushed from the bite site, and Duck screamed in pain. But he still didn't let go of Carl, although he had loosened his grip. In an attempt to get rid of the biting little thing, the boss hit it with his clawed paw and threw it off his back. The cat crashed into a glass wall, punching a hole in it and causing severe damage to its fragile body. Under Donut's weight, the hole in the glass widened, and the cat fell helplessly to the floor, not moving. Carl saw with horror that his capricious but faithful companion was lying motionless on the floor, covered in blood. He screamed at the top of his lungs, calling on Donut to wake up and drink the health potion as quickly as possible. She couldn't die. Not her. A wounded cat lay among the shards of glass, a red pool of blood slowly spreading around it. The jock let go of Carl's hands, trying to stop the blood that was pouring out of the wound on his back. Donut bit into an artery. The weakened guy fell to the floor not far from the boss, the poisonous lizard bro he had killed still hanging from his arm. Carl gathered his strength. He needed to finish the fight before the boss recovered. There was very little left to finish him off. He pulled his bloody hand, wrapped in chain, from the dead bro's poisonous, toothy mouth. The boss was losing strength due to the large number of wounds on his back. Blood was pouring out of him in a huge stream, forming terrible puddles. The guy got to his feet. He was still holding his throat, but his breathing had already been restored. He needed to kill the boss and save the cat. He looked at the bleeding jock, his head already blackened by Donut's attacks, his muscular body covered in blood. The jock, looking at his dead friend, sadly said that he was proud of Bro. He continued to fight despite the pain, and even after death. He tried to stop the bleeding, but the wounds were deep and there were a lot of them, and all of Duck's assistants were already dead. Carl gritted his teeth. He couldn't feel sorry for this monster. He needed to survive and be sure to save his brave Princess Donut. Gathering his strength, he jumped up and struck Duck on the chin with his chained fist. He swung his paws, and the blood gushed out even more. The boss fell helplessly on his back. He didn't move, but the guy knew that his enemy was still alive. Taking a running start, Carl jumped onto the huge muscular body of the jock and dealt him a final decisive kick. Having dealt with the boss, the guy ran to the cat lying on the floor in a pool of blood. He called loudly to her, begging her not to die. Falling to his knees in front of the small body, he again called to Donut, asking what to do and why she wasn't recovering. The life bar above the cat showed that she had only 1 bar of health left. She was almost dead. He extended a trembling hand to her, cursing. He told the princess that she wanted to get into the show. It was time to come to life. After stroking her silky fur, all smeared with blood, Carl asked Donut not to do this to him. The system revealed the winners of this battle, researchers Carl and Princess Donut. But no matter what Carl said, Donut didn't respond. She still lay motionless, and her health bar showed 1 bar. The boy's lips trembled and his eyes filled with tears. He asked the cat in confusion why she wasn't healing. He frantically opened his inventory. He had a pet healing scroll. The guy clicked on it. It should help. The healing scroll was moved from the storage, but the system reported that there was no suitable target. The game mocked the idiot for wasting a valuable scroll. Carl cursed like crazy, but she was still alive, so there had to be a way to bring her back to life. But what was it? He took out a green healing potion and had already opened the cap to give it to Donut, because it always helped him. He was about to pour the healing potion from the bottle into his companion, but something stopped his hand, trembling with excitement. Her condition does not change for no reason. There must be a reason. You need to think and take your time. The main thing is not to harm. He remembered that before all this, she shouted to him that she had started taking the mana potion, but the recharge had to finish first. Carl understood that Donut was in a hurry, which meant she probably took the potion before starting her attack on the boss. He didn't know how long ago she took the mana potion. At that time, he was busy fighting the poisonous bro and the rest of Duck's assistants. This means that Donut is still in a mana recharge state, but this is just an assumption. Carl didn't know if she would take damage if he gave her a healing potion while another potion was active. He clenched his teeth. He didn't know the answer to this question, because he still hadn't learned all the intricacies of this game system. The guy frowned, but what could he do? He couldn't just sit and watch her die after saving him. He looked at the only remaining health bar. Any damage, even the slightest, would kill her. That was for sure. But what should he do? Carl's strong, courageous face was distorted by a grimace of grief. He almost cried looking at Donut. So he needs to try it out for himself first. But he's not allowed to take another potion from the hot bar. But he could probably drink it right away. He summoned a health potion from his blue panel where he kept everything he needed. The system showed that the healing process would take 15 seconds, and a green light immediately began to flow around Carl. I wonder why his reload is faster than Donut's. Probably because he has a better constitution. He immediately drank another potion. The system reported that he was poisoned, but the poison was neutralized by the cloak of night ghosts. That's the answer. You can't take 2 potions. Carl swore. It turns out he almost killed Donut with his own hands. Now she can't be given anything. He can't do anything until the cooldown is over. But how do you know when it's over and you can heal? The guy sat next to Donut and quietly stroked her soft, motionless body. He was ready to do anything to make her wake up. He whispered to her not to leave him. How would he be here without her? Who would purr in his ear at night? Carl asked his furry companion with all his heart to stay with him, begged as much as he could, said that he really needed her. The guy continued to stroke the cat, swallowing back his tears, when suddenly he saw that one of the paws began to glow purple. He was overcome with joy. He realized that her paw had just recovered, which meant Donut was coming back. The health bar started to turn green. It was healing. Carl was ready to jump for joy. Like a child, the cat would stay with him. Great. Donut's eyelids fluttered. She opened her eyes slightly and quietly called out to Carl. She still felt unwell due to her weak health. Everything was swimming before her eyes. She could only make out a smiling silhouette leaning over her. The cat asked in a weak voice if they had managed to win this difficult fight with the 9th-level boss, Jock. A satisfied Carl confirmed that everything was fine. It was Donut who had done it. She was such a brave warrior, the envy of everyone. He stroked her and asked her not to move for now, to lie down for another minute until her health was fully restored. Looking over his shoulder at his dead boss, Carl told the cat that she had saved his life, and that it was only thanks to her that he was alive. Donut sighed dramatically and moaned that she had been mortally wounded in that hard battle. Saving Carl required the greatest self-sacrifice from her, and now she must die from severe wounds. The cat said she felt her strength leaving her, but judging by the bar above her, Donut's health had almost recovered. Turning to sleep, the cat quietly said, "Her life is slipping away. It has come to an end. Her life will end here and now." She used her claws in the fight, just as Carl said, and she scratched the huge boss's fleshy back with them. And for this reason she died. There was no need to get so close to him, and especially not to bite into his body. Donut added that when Miss Beatrice finds out about her death, she will be very unhappy with Carl for not protecting her. The cat asked that Carl be sure to tell Miss Beatrice that she, Princess Donut, fought valiantly to the very end, and he will also have to find Ferdinand and tell him that she loved him. It was love at first sight. Carl cursed to himself. Who is this Ferdinand anyway? This is not the first time Donut has mentioned him. The cat's health bar became almost completely green, meaning that she could not only stand up, but also jump. The guy smiled. It seemed like the potion had recharged. That was good. Now Donut was just showing off, but he was still happy. Rolling from side to side, the cat whispered that she saw the light. It was immediately obvious that she had been watching a lot of television. Carl waited patiently for her to get tired of putting on an act and rise to her feet to receive her well-deserved prizes. But she continued to say that she was leaving this mortal world to go across the rainbow to the shining eternity to her ancestors. Having finished her fiery speech, Donut theatrically froze, her mouth slightly open and her tongue sticking out. The guy was tempted to clap his hands. But instead, he told the cat to get up already and help him get lost in the boss's lair. There was no point in wasting time. The bodies of the slain monsters disappeared from the gym, as did numerous exercise machines, leaving Carl and Donut alone. Upon entering the safe room, Carl and Donut left behind numerous bloody footprints on the floor and counter. Carl insisted that the cat go into the shower with him, and she declared that this was the most vile betrayal on his part. While soaping the cat, the guy explained that they didn't know what was in the monster's blood, and he didn't want her to lick herself and then get sick. The room's keeper hummed a song while happily combing the disgruntled cat's fur. The gnome Babka Sebastian, level 21, worked here. He was kind, although his cooking wasn't as tasty as Tally's. As the new episode of the show began, the host noted that this season's researchers each had their own styles of playing the game. Solo explorer Lucia Marr stands out with her dogs. This girl loves animals, and they help her. Viewers worried that Lucia is too young to be a researcher are shown footage from before the collapse. Borant assured that all children and pregnant women were safely placed in childcare facilities. This is not the first time the Syndicate has seized a planet, so the takeover of the world of Earth was organized and controlled. The safety of small children has always been the top priority of the Borant Corporation, known throughout the universe. After the capture of the world of Earth, only adult independent people capable of becoming explorers remained on the surface. Most of the other players gradually split into squads, Some went down into the dungeon together, and some met here. Someone saved someone, and the researchers decided to join forces for a further joint journey. However, not every alliance worked out as well as for the explorer Hekla, who was nearly killed by the monsters of the dungeon. Several promising teams fell due to poor coordination and lack of strategy, which is a shame. At the moment, the largest successful group is Le Mouvement. They immediately show that they know how to work as a team. Now they are waiting for the stairs to the next floor to open so they can fight the boss guarding the descent down. The host reminded viewers that streams would begin on the second floor and asked them to write down who they would be following. The broadcast has been interrupted. Another news episode of the show World of Dungeon Explorers has come to an end. Donut was incredibly outraged. They killed the boss of the 9th level, she sacrificed herself for Carl, and they weren't even mentioned. There was such a passion there, such a heavy bloody battle. And not a single word, it's unthinkable. They show whatever comes to mind. The Explorer counter on the screen showed that there were currently 2.5 million people remaining in the dungeon. Carl was horrified. From 13 million in less than 4 days, the number of survivors fell to this figure. How terrible. The hologram of Cascadia appeared overhead again. The producer greeted the researchers and exclaimed that the show was excellent. The producer knew for sure that thanks to the cross-translation, everyone would now understand him and hoped that he would not have to repeat himself. Listening to Cascadia's story about the new patches, Carl and Donut headed to the newbie guild. The guy wanted to talk to the guildmaster. As soon as they entered the familiar room, the cat happily informed Mordecai that they were now both level 9. The guildmaster asked if the two of them had actually killed a level 9 boss. That was impressive. Not every large team would dare to do that. Sitting down on a chair, Carl sighed and said that it was a stupid idea. He hoped that everything would go easier and smoother. It's shitty when they don't know what they're up against. It's impossible to prepare when going into battle blind. Mordecai suggested studying the recording of the battle and analyzing their mistakes so that they would not be repeated in the future. This is useful. He pointed out to Carl that this heavy barbell would do the same damage as his fist, and it was not worth wasting his strength on it. The guy was shocked. The guildmaster said that his hand-to-hand combat was equal in power to an unenchanted weapon. He was already very strong. And during the last battle, Carl wasted the scrolls of confusing fog. They could have been used more effectively. His intelligence was 3, so their duration was only 15 seconds. Donut's intelligence would allow one fog scroll to last 120 seconds. They need to learn to understand how their stats affect everything else and plan their fights accordingly. Carl asked if that was why the cat couldn't drink potions as often as he did, because she had a low constitution. Mordecai confirmed, adding that her cut was strong, but would do little good until she increased her defense stats. They were very lucky today that Donut didn't break her neck when she fell from the boss's blow. That was entirely possible given her build. In the future, choosing a class or race with a higher constitution will help, but not much. You need to level up your stats. Hearing this, Donut was indignant. She was already one of God's most ideal creations, and had absolutely no intention of changing. She was born a cat and she will die as one. What a stupid assumption that she should become someone else. There are simply no better options. Donut stated that she even insists that Carl also choose the cat race in the future, so he will be more effective. Carl imagined with horror that he was a cat in a raincoat and shorts with hearts, arguing with the naughty Donut. He muttered in response to the cat's statement that he would never become a cat. It would be better to die than to turn into one. It's unimaginable. Cat boxing and cat kicks mixed with desperate cries, "Don't touch my tummy." The boy told Mordecai that he had thought a lot about it, if there was an opportunity, whether he should change his race. Having weighed everything carefully, Carl decided that he would remain human. Donut snorted discontentedly. She liked the idea of making him a cat. The guildmaster suggested moving on. Regarding the battle with the goblin boss, no comment here, they did an amazing job. The goblins are tough guys, of course, not as tough as Jock, who has excellent stats. It's surprising that they beat him, Mordecai thought. It was interesting that he had never heard of such a boss before. He only appeared in this season of the show. Carl thought that someone from his world had merged with one of the 3 troglodytes. He wasn't as smart as Plushkin. The boy remembered the Spanish woman who had stretched out her hands to him, asking him to save her, help her, and tell her what had happened to her. The organizers of this show did something to him so that he would endlessly spout unimaginable nonsense, as if someone was tugging at him. These 2 bosses were like caricatures or some kind of inflated stereotypes from the world of Earth. They definitely reminded me of someone. And there was also a feeling that these bosses were controlled by artificial intelligence, forcing them to perform certain actions. Mordecai said that now every corner of the universe is watching Earth, all because of the extraordinary popularity of this reality show. Broadcasts about Earthling culture have filled the airwaves across the galaxy, and this happens every new season of the show. Viewership numbers must continually rise, and bosses play a role in this. Everything here is geared toward audience emotions. Carl said that they were actually here because they only found one staircase down, meaning one very serious problem. The guy talked about meeting old people, the guys who help them, and a huge smelly boss who looked like a piece of shit. Mordecai listened attentively to this unusual story, and replied that the solution to this problem was very simple. You need to skip this boss and continue looking for another staircase to the second floor. There are several of them. They will be able to find it. Carl replied that they had been on the road all day before they found this one. The guy was worried that this was their only chance. He asked if Mordecai knew what kind of monster might be there so that they could at least adequately prepare for the fight. The guildmaster lowered his head sadly. He has very clear and strict restrictions, especially when it comes to bosses. Carl can come after the fight, and he will be happy to analyze it with him. But if he tells about the boss beforehand, it will already be considered cheating. And Mordecai really doesn't want to get caught doing that. It's considered a serious violation of the contract he signed with the syndicate. The guy grabbed his head. Neither class, nor levels, nor race would matter if they didn't get off this damn first floor. And those old men are so-so fighters. You can only count on 6, but to win, they must prepare well. Looking up, Carl asked Mordecai hopefully if he had anything else to say to them before leaving. The guildmaster looked up and at his family photographs, at what he once was like, how he lived. These portraits seemed to reproach him for betraying his lost world, for betraying himself, his nature. Mordecai clenched his fist, throwing off the shackles of the syndicate that constantly controlled his every word, every action. Frowning, the guildmaster said, "Okay, he will tell you something, but Carl must listen very carefully." The guy was very happy. Could it really be true that all the advice the guildmaster gave him really helped him survive in the dungeon? Mordecai asked Carl what he thought Jock had in common with the bad llama that spat out hot lava. The guy mentally imagined the drug-dealing llama they had encountered in one of the dungeon corridors. After thinking for a bit, Carl replied that they were both junkies, you could tell right away. But the llama was on drugs, and the Jock was on anabolic steroids. Mordecai frowned and lowered his ears. No, that's not it. Carl should think better. Analyze the fights with them. The guildmaster frowned. He really wanted to help the guy, but he had to learn to draw some conclusions on his own. He asked the puzzled researcher how he killed the bad llama. He needed to remember everything and analyze it. Carl said that he hit her in the throat, where the lava was gathering, and as a result, the boiling lava melted the llama's head and she died. Mordecai asked how they killed Duck. He should remember everything and compare it with the bad llama. This is very important. Carl glanced sideways at the cat with a smile. Donut played with Duck's bloodstream, practically exploding it from the inside, as if she had bathed in a fountain of blood. The cat snorted discontentedly. These memories were extremely unpleasant for her. How disgusting it was to bathe in blood. In protest, she rolled over onto her other side, turning her tail towards Carl. There was no point in reminding her of this horror. And then it dawned on Carl that they both had weaknesses, each their own. But they had them, and having found them, they were able to defeat the monsters. Mordecai smiled. That's right, good job, Carl. You started thinking in the right direction, analyzing your enemies. There was a vulnerable area on the llama's throat. Sometimes these areas are obvious, sometimes not. Maybe you need to look more closely. Take the hoarder Plushkina, for example. Now they know that her vulnerability was the cockroaches crawling out of her mouth. If Carl had been able to kill even one before hatching, the second would not have escaped from the throat, resulting in a jam. The guy added that in this case she would have suffocated, and there would be no need to strangle her with that very long chain and finish her off later. Mordecai exclaimed, "That's right. You need to look for a vulnerability and try to exploit it. There are always clues, and there will be clues. You need to look for them." Carl wondered what they knew about this district boss and where to get these clues, while Donut decided to open the chests she had received. Looking at the contents of the chest, Donut grimaced in displeasure. She was once again presented with a whole mountain of torches. Turning to Mordecai, she said plaintively that her chests were broken, and they contained all sorts of junk that she didn't need at all. The cat looked at the 12 scrolls of healing with displeasure. Carl noticed that these were good. They didn't require an access code, and they would be able to heal each other. Donut also received a bronze chest for defeating the huge, scary green boss, Jock. The chest also had a tail. She was very happy. Such chests usually contain all sorts of cool magical things. Spellbooks, for example. It was the same this time. Donut was incredibly happy. Finally, there would be a magical upgrade in her skills. She immediately grabbed the book and began to absorb the information. Carl said that she should have at least read the description first. Mordecai reassured him, "This magical skill is good and very useful. It is often called blink in a puddle. Donut can teleport himself and up to 3 other people within his line of sight, which is very convenient and can save lives. There's a 10-second delay between cast and activation, so you can't spam it, but it's still a good skill. The cat rubbed itself against Carl's leg and, purring, asked what he had gotten, whether there was anything new and interesting. Carl's kicking skill has reached level 6. Now his kicks do even more damage, just like his fists. For killing 2 mobs by smashing their bodies against each other, the guy received a golden fighter's chest as a reward. He, like Donut, got a strongman's bronze chest, which contained a hat and a bunch of useful healing items, packages, potions, bandages, and other necessary little things. He also received 100 enchanted bloodlust shurikens. If you damage a monster with these things, the damage against similar monsters will increase by 8%. Carl wondered if these 8% of the initial damage were considered. Then it would be very little. Or 8% of the total damage, in which case the arithmetic becomes more interesting. Mordecai looked at the description and explained that the calculation is based on the final damage, meaning that each subsequent hit will scale. It's a shame they're so fragile. The guy's face lengthened. His arms would fall off from throwing them. There are 100 of them, but they are fragile. It turns out he will only have one good moment for them. Carl opened the next box. He already knew that it would most likely contain some special potion. Opening the chest, he saw that he had again received a golden potion of determining the value, the same one that had already dropped last time. The guy sent it to the storage, noticing that there was nothing new. It seemed strange to him. Maybe he needed level 5 in this skill. Finally, a golden fighter's chest appeared in front of Carl. Opening the chest, the guy joyfully exclaimed, "Yes, this is what he had needed for a long time." He received an enchanted Gruul's gauntlet, which increased his strength and agility, and raised his iron fist and powerful strike by 2 levels. But if you use the item against the minions of the war god Gruul, you can turn the attack into Gruul, and this will be a disaster. Carl looked at the gauntlet in confusion. But how would he understand who was the follower of this very god of war, Gruul? Mordecai said that all ungulates revere Gruul. Horses, centaurs, or tikbalangs can also revere him. Bad llamas can also revere it, but only starting from the 3rd floor. Here and on the 2nd floor, there is no need to fear this. The guildmaster added that Carl should know that this Gruul was not a real god. Mordecai suddenly became very serious. He said with a frown that there were no gods in this game. Now the eyes of the newbie guildmaster looked at the guy in a special way. Carl, a little confused, asked if this was so important. He could not understand what was hidden behind Mordecai's words. The mouse lowered his smart and serious face. Unfortunately, he couldn't say anything more to the guy now. Carl wondered why Mordecai had suddenly become so serious, why he had specifically drawn the boy's attention to this. The guildmaster reminded him that Carl had said he was worried because some bosses and mobs were here, just like him, against their will. So, he must remember that such people are in the minority here, especially at the lower levels, and he should not believe everything. Mordecai repeated that there were no gods here, only those who paid for the privilege, and that this must be remembered very clearly. Carl realized that the guildmaster was trying to tell him something that he couldn't say directly, and he wanted to know what it was. The guy said that he would definitely remember this and take it into account for the future, and he would also remember about the mobs. Donut asked what tikbalang was. It sounded like some kind of disease. Mordecai explained that it was like a horse, only much angrier. Carl decided to try out the combat item he had recently received. He clenched his fist to activate Gruul's gauntlet. Soon, an impressive-looking glove with spikes and fastenings for hand protection during combat appeared on his hand. He laughed. The benefit of this item was obvious. Now at least he wouldn't break his fingers during fights with a strong opponent. As soon as Carl unclenched his fist, the glove disappeared from his hand. As if it had never been there, the guy was sincerely delighted. "This is so cool." Donut asked if Carl remembered. She had told him many times that he looked very funny, so here she was repeating it again. Kat asked Mordecai's sweetheart if there was an achievement for the most ridiculous outfit on the show, which would be perfect for Carl. The guildmaster replied that there is something similar. After the main episode of the show, there will be a section called Invited Guest. He usually talks about all sorts of weird things about the dungeon, like profiles of world dungeon explorers and the like. Sometimes he can pull a researcher out of the game for an interview. Donut's eyes sparkled. She liked the interview. She enthusiastically told Carl that this is what they need. The guy must definitely get there. Then everyone will definitely notice them. The guy chuckled. "You shouldn't ask him such questions. He's not Princess Donut's agent." The cat snorted. "Of course not. Miss Beatrice is her agent. As soon as they find her, she will definitely quickly organize everything. But it's very far away. We'll have to wait until we get down to the 5th or 6th floor, so that the dungeon shrinks enough for searching." Mordecai looked at Carl very expressively, silently. trying to understand if the guy understood what he was telling him. Carl understood this look, but what was hidden behind it had not yet dawned on him. Perhaps, with time, he would understand the guildmaster's words. Having thanked Mordecai, Carl called Donut. It was time for them to meet the Larks and prepare for battle. Clenching his fist on the hand that was wearing a combat gauntlet, the guy smiled. It was time to defeat the district boss. With only 30 minutes left before the first level collapsed, Carl asked the boys if they were ready to fight the boss. Brandon N. answered honestly that they were not ready, but they would have to do it. There was simply no other way out. If not them, then who? The residents of the nursing home had already collected their things and were preparing to move to the next floor of the dungeon. Brandon honestly admitted that he was shocked that they had returned at all, and safe and sound, having increased their levels in just one day. Yolanda smiled. She had said that Carl would come back. Mrs. McGibbons had said that he had kind eyes. The guy was confused. He never expected that someone could say such a thing about him. He had been considered a hooligan all his life. Donut noticed that the kind eyes did not suit Carl's image at all. The old woman with the cat had clearly mixed something up with the eyes. Yolanda asked Mrs. McGibbons not to worry. They would go now, clear the road, and would definitely come back for everyone. Carl clenched his fist, activating his new combat gauntlet, frowned, and shouted to everyone that it was time to move forward. The nursing home staff, weapons at the ready, walked cautiously down the hallway behind Carl and his combat-talking cat. Carl, with Donut on his shoulder, walked first. He remembered that there was very little time left before the collapse. He had to hurry. The guy walked forward boldly. The guys from the nursing home lingered a little. They were afraid to go where their friends died. And then Carl heard Yolanda's voice. The girl shouted at Agatha to stop. The old lady followed them into the fight. But crazy Agatha stubbornly rolled her cart forward, saying that without her they definitely wouldn't be able to cope with the boss. The girl tried to convince Agatha that she didn't fit into their group. Brandon flared up, shouting that the crazy old woman would destroy them all. But the old woman laughed and said that she thought they would all die because of this tumbler jack and pointed her finger at the boys. Imani barked at everyone to shut up. They didn't have time to argue here and figure out who was the coolest in the group. There will be a monster here soon, and they must not miss its appearance. Otherwise they will all end quickly. Carl reassured Imani that she shouldn't worry. This monster was so huge and smelly that it would be very difficult not to notice it. Besides, judging by the time, he should appear any minute now. They definitely won't have to wait long. The main thing is to deal with him as quickly as possible. As if in response to Carl's words, the door, bound with chains, lit up. The sound of some movement was heard, and the action began. The passage opened. The group of researchers found themselves in a large hall, and suddenly they heard music. The boss turned out to be cheerful. Carl grinned. Wow. The theme music for the boss, and it's loud too. Donut lowered her ears. Could you ask them to turn the volume down? Following the music, a light show began to flash above the fighters' heads, filling the hall with dancing, bright beams, like in a nightclub. Carl clenched his teeth. He understood that the music and bright flashes of light were supposed to distract their attention from the appearance of the real enemy. The game announced that explorers had found the lair of the district boss, and it was time for the main event for the ladies and gentlemen. Brandon N. gripped his massive hammer tightly, preparing to attack the unknown enemy to save the Elder's charges. The game was winding them up, asking if they were really ready for the fight, if they felt like the event was about to begin. Oddly enough, the calmest of the whole group was Agatha. The old woman looked around, creaking her cart. Imani prepared her sword. This show turned her into an old man-killer, and she hated the dungeon and monsters with all her heart. Carl waited for the enemy to appear. He remembered Mordecai's words about weak spots, and that there are always clues. You just need to see them. The system was pleased. A group of level 9 explorers, Carl and Princess Donut, were fighting against the boss today. They were joined by Meadowlarks Chris Andrews and Brandon N. at level 6, Imani K. at level 10, and Yolanda Martinez at level 5. And the second-level researcher Agatha stands apart, a nimble and cunning old woman with crazy eyes and a terrible character. The district boss will come out against this group. Carl felt the heat of the fire, covering his eyes from the bright flashes of light. The guy thought, something is getting hot. Could this boss really be something fiery? And then the monster appeared. Carl cursed loudly. It was the same huge stinking ball that he and Donut had already seen. Now everyone saw that a strange, round, enormous structure, made of someone or something, was rolling towards them. As the ball approached, the researchers saw sparkling eyes, protruding fangs, paws and tails, and elements of strange clothing. The game announced that this is a pig ball, a level 15 district boss, one of the rarest and most dangerous battle formations of the Tusks. Brandon asked what the hell this was and what they should do with it. This ball would just crush them all into a pancake. It was huge. This ball consists of at least 60 members of Orc High Society, gathered together for a special occasion. These creatures are very fond of orgies, alcohol, sex, and they also have a real passion for war, seasoned with ancient wild magic. Periodically, the tusks form a huge, inseparable ball and begin their deadly rides through the surrounding area. The pig ball will not end its night of terror until it has crushed under its mass all the poor, wretched, and disadvantaged citizens. And then this ball rolled out onto the group of researchers. Carl noticed that the entire floor in the hall was covered with some kind of stripes. In the center of this huge structure, it seems, was the treasured saving staircase leading to the second floor, and around it were movable walls. Carl looked around warily. They should see and understand something here right away. But here's what. They need to think about it. Loud music and powerful bass. Because of this, they may not hear the approach of a huge pig ball and die. He waved to the boys, saying that they needed to go forward. Brandon N. didn't understand where they were going. Carl replied, "Away from here." Carl opened his inventory and took out the shurikens he had recently received. They turned out to be very useful, and there was no need to throw them. The guy made some spiked traps out of them for the tusks that make up this huge ball. Maybe that will help. Carl left shuriken spikes where their enemy was about to roll, hoping very much to injure him. The guy suggested that the slots in the floor were probably needed to raise and lower the walls, which meant he needed to stay away from them. And they didn't even think that the walls would move. He told the guys to look for flat and solid surfaces without gaps. Suddenly, a pig ball rolled out from behind the wall. Everyone flinched, but Carl was waiting for it to appear to test his idea with the thorns. A scream and disgruntled grunting were heard, and traces of blood appeared on the floor. The ball had run into the thorns left by Carl. He smiled contentedly, and now the boss's health bar appeared. It looked like the thorns had still touched him in some places. This plan might work, but they need to know exactly where this stinking fanged ball will roll, and it's clear that it will roll towards them. Carl saw that in some areas the walls had begun to rise from the floor, dividing the space. They needed to get out of here quickly, and not remain on opposite sides of the gaps. Otherwise, the game would separate them and kill them one by one. He shouted at the boys to move faster and watch the slits if they didn't want to end up on opposite sides of the wall. With astonishing speed, Carl stuck shurikens into the planks and laid them out in the path of their unusual opponent. Agatha happily helped him, taking out from her numerous supplies the items the boy needed. A pig's ball flew past the backs of the group of dungeon explorers and rolled on. The guys flinched. No one wanted to meet this head-on. Imani saw a flat, unpaved area at the intersection and pointed ahead, saying that was probably where they needed to go. After inspecting the area, Carl decided that it was just the perfect place. The whole group gathered together so that the walls could not separate them. The guy looked around. The ball had just rolled from there, so they most likely still had about 2 more flights of the labyrinth ahead of them. He smiled and said, "Let's do it. There are dozens of defenseless old people behind them. They have to save them." Donut sat on her companion's shoulder and her eyes sparkled. Today she was behaving surprisingly modestly and calmly. The boys' faces were tense. None of them had ever been a fighter before. But Carl's confidence and the boss's first wounds inspired everyone.